The world's only red dragon has been defeated by humans. The knights were joined by a powerful witch who had never been there before. For thousands of years, humans had attempted the dragon time and time again at the cost of their lives. They had an incredible thirst for the death of a great creature. The dragon fought long and hard, but in the end, the humans destroyed it. The creature was old, and the details of what had once happened had been erased from its memory. The red lizard had changed its lair many times before its death, but the humans found it time after time. The only thing that remained in his memory was that the humans had also killed other creatures like him. Squads wiped out the dragon's friends and family, and he was the last of his kind. And eventually, something happened that brought the dragon's life to the brink. Loneliness was the beginning of the end. He had nothing left to lose, and the only thing that kept him clinging to life was revenge. All attacks were reciprocated by the dragon. But the war was over, and now it was time to go to the edge and rest in peace. From beyond the edge, in complete silence, a man's voice called out to look at someone. Suddenly, complete obscurity was replaced before his eyes by the face of a human male. The happy man held a surprised baby in his arms with tenderness. The child's face reflected fear and surprise that he had somehow ended up in the arms of this creature. Being in the man's arms, the baby broke into loud crying. He realized that he had been transformed from a great dragon into a human. The new father mistakenly thought the baby's outrage was due to the joy of meeting him. Only the dragon reborn was angry. Anger boiled up inside the child and gathered into a ball of fire. A little and something would happen. The baby tensed with anger, which caused surprise on the faces of his mother and father. The parents didn't know that the baby wanted to turn the father into ashes, and then something happened that no one expected. The kid took a giant spit in his father's face. But even this act had a catch. The man twisted his head in a fit of squeamishness to get rid of his son's saliva. Meanwhile, the former dragon was trying to figure out where his magic had gone. But the situation with the magic didn't scare him as much as the woman's arms reaching out to him and urging him to embrace her. The baby's mother leaned toward him and decided to say hello, addressing her son by the strange name of Ray. This action caused the child to be bewildered. The dragon in the little man's soul was enraged at the disrespectful treatment and the completely inappropriate name for a great creature. As he contemplated his mother's face, an interesting thought occurred to him. Since the Lord had brought a great dragon back into the world, this was another chance to take revenge on the humans. The red lizard in a human body had decided to do to humans what they had done to dragons. The father looked at his son's face with a mischievous smile, and sweat dripped down his face. The little boy thought of destroying everyone, and the father realized. The realization that a son born frail would bring a lot of trouble in the future. Ray didn't immediately notice that fatigue had begun to overwhelm him, and he wanted to sleep. All the energy he put into just controlling his mouth. It had been quite some time since the dragon had become human. In that time, he had a new look on humans and even learned the names of his parents. Jack and Scarlet Tarun. Scarlet's soft face always draws the eye with a friendly expression. Jack, on the other hand, is well-built and seems much stronger than the others. The villagers visit often and show their respect. Jack was an excellent swordsman and saved people in the Black Forest, and his wife turned out to be an excellent mage. While the parents were chatting with the visitors, Ray came crawling to his mother. She saw her son and hurried to bring him something to eat. The man who visited them was surprised that the child himself comes crawling when he wants to eat. But even more surprising was the color of the baby's hair. The baby's hair had started turning red a few days ago, and it made Ray happy. The color of his hair said that he still had some of the dragon's power. The villagers heard the promise of help with the monsters and hurried home, but on the way they discussed the Tarun family. The red hair meant a curse for them. But Scarlet didn't care about these speeches because she had a son to feed. Ray ate sloppily and made a mess of things around him. He'd do anything to make his parents angry, but it never happened. He even went to extreme lengths. One day while his father was sleeping, he decided to pee on his face. It was a desperate move, and his father was shocked, but not in the way the kid had hoped. Jack held his son in his arms with a smile, and he was overwhelmed with fatherly pride. He was proud of his son's skill, but asked him to do it in the bathroom. Being with his loving parents, the dragon decided that if hell existed, it wasn't him. Talented people are extremely rare in this world, but Scarlet is not an ordinary mage, but an outstanding one. Magicians of such power are even rarer. Ray thought that if he had the most powerful magic in the world, it would be even easier to get his revenge. But there were nuances. The boy was 2 years old, and every child of that age was tested for magical abilities. And now the day had come. Scarlet took her son in her arms and together with Ray said goodbye to her husband. She and her son had a road ahead of them. The child sitting in his mother's arms was not thinking about the journey. His head was occupied with other thoughts. He thought that the red dragon would become an outstanding mage. The former dragon believed that if he could regain his magic, no one would ever stop him from rising to the top again. Scarlet and Ray arrived in the city. The baby was tired, and that was the only thing that bothered him. After all, the baby's body was weak. At the entrance to the city was a marketplace, and walking through it, mother and son witnessed the lives of strangers. Richer people engaged in selling crystals and humiliated the beggars of the weaker and less successful people. The boy watched the people and their indifference to the weak, for he was different as a dragon. Ray remembered how it was. He felt it was his duty to protect the weak, and he had succeeded in doing so. Only in the end, the result had been disappointing. but he needed to get back to the present. At Roland College, where they were going, there was a huge line where the steward called everyone in turn following a list. The kid was surprised by the number of people, and at first he didn't even pay attention to the emotions of the other kids around him. The calm was shattered by a girl running past and screaming loudly. Her reaction was so distinctive that it surprised the mom and the baby. But the boy's surprise was replaced not by sympathy, but by gloating. He knew that there was no justice in the world. Finally, the steward called Ray Tarun's name, and the mother and son went to pass the magic dimension. When they entered the office, they saw a gray-haired man sitting behind a desk. He offered to sit at the table across from him, after waiting for Scarlet to sit down at the table. The magician asked the boy to touch the crystal ball in front of him. The ball would glow and turn the color of the magic element. Finally, the moment Ray had been waiting for had arrived. He stretched out his hands to the ball and froze. Everyone waited for the result, but nothing happened. The kid kept his hands on the ball and urged it to glow because he used to be good at magic. Suddenly, he heard his mother crying behind him and turned around to see if it was true. He was surprised at the display of this emotion. He returned to the ball and thought that his mother was crying with happiness, because it could be that he had awakened the same magic that she had. The elder reached out his hand to the ball and said terrible words that there was no magic. He was the greatest red dragon in the world. The boy began to hit the ball thinking that it was just broken, and his mother could not believe in the absence of magic in her son. After all, she was a mage herself and had studied at this academy. The words of pity that followed the destructive ones only caused resentment in the child and suspicion of bullying him. Ray pounced on the mage and began to pull his beard and hair, trying to prove that he would be a great mage. Mom stood in shock at her son's behavior. The old man, trying to get rid of the boy who attacked him, started to call the guards, and the mother hurried to take the raging child away. On the way home, the boy's mind kept thinking that he was a reincarnated dragon, and the evil mockery of fate had left him without magic. The boy thought that the god just wanted to punish him for his countless sacrifices, but why give him a second chance? It was pointless. Sadness did not last long. He thought that God was just testing him, and there was another way to get revenge. Having dinner with his parents, he gathered his strength and formulated his appeal to his father. Finally, he made up his mind and asked his father to teach his son his trade. From this appeal, the man simply sewed because his child decided to follow in his footsteps and become a swordsman. And the boy thought of only one thing. The chosen path to revenge was not as easy as it initially seemed to the dragon. His father trained him on wooden swords, but his strength was not enough. It had been 2 years since Ray began to learn swordsmanship from his father, but the son had never defeated his mentor, and now the day had finally come when that would change. Jack began to attack, and he exclaimed he knew the attack very well. The boy visualized in great detail what he could do if he waited for the perfect moment. The moment when the master would lower his sword and flank him. A swing of the sword, and there it was, the perfect chance Ray had been thinking about. There goes the opportunity for victory. Only his little legs failed him. His foot caught on his leg, and instead of a kick, there was an ignominious fall. The human body couldn't keep up with his thoughts, and his hands only slowed down the former dragon. These thoughts rushed through his head, and he lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he saw his mother and his father laughing at him for finally waking up. A huge lump was growing on his head. When Scarlet noticed Jack's laughter, she was angry because she thought he was too cruel to her 4-year-old son. Except the exam was a year away. The man reassured his wife that his son would do fine, but he just didn't have much control over his body because he was still young. They'll make up for it in a year. While they were arguing, Ray didn't notice that Ray had witnessed the situation. He found out about that before the exams at Orient Academy, and it scared the boy. But he tried to assure his parents that he could handle all the difficulties. He is the reincarnation of a red dragon and cannot be weak like a human. The boy enthusiastically told his parents that he would cope and become the strongest man mankind had ever seen. Training with a sword and a dummy was something that would help him become stronger than any man his age. But the problem was poor body control. The human body seems clumsy to the former dragon, as it has 4 limbs and must be moved individually. During the training, the boy didn't notice his father approaching him. Ray practiced so often that Jack always knew where to find him. Suddenly, he held out a real sword to his son. He thought the boy was strong enough for this weapon. The reaction to such a gift was surprise. Jack thought that this sword would help his son improve his control over his body, but that was not all. His father leaned to his ear and whispered that there was another gift waiting in the barn. There was a puppet waiting for them in the barn. To Ray, such a gift raised a question, what it could do for him. It turned out to be used for training at the academy. Looking at it, the boy didn't believe in the puppet's magical properties. Only he was wrong. His father suggested he attack the dummy and test it to see if it was normal or not. But out of disbelief, Ray decided to be lenient with her. The first level was chosen for the battle. With a battle exclamation, the boy launched an attack on his enemy. The strike was well timed, but landed on his opponent's shield. This was an unexpected turn for an ordinary doll. Underestimating his opponent played a bad trick on the kid and caused an unpleasant surprise. Due to the loss of control, the next surprise was the sword being knocked out of the dummy's hands. All of this was done with incredible speed. Ray looked in disbelief at the disconnected dummy and lost a bruised arm. The father was clearly pleased with his son's first fight. Jack said that by defeating a level 1 puppet, Ray was guaranteed to get into the academy. He had a hard time getting the puppet. After hearing this, the child's eyes lit up with determination to defeat the wooden enemy. He decided to train harder. But even hard training didn't help him control his body properly. He got tired and fell down. It was terrifying, because if he could gain control, he could forget about defeating the puppet, as well as the much-desired revenge. The dragon did not notice when someone came up to him and asked him about the puppet. Startled, the boy ran away, but after drawing his sword, he stopped abruptly and took a fighting stance, asking who had disturbed him. The person who disturbed him was a blonde-haired girl. She looked at the boy with concern, warning him that she didn't want to frighten him. The girl's name was Amy, and she lived in the village. When she saw Ray late in the mountains, she decided to warn him of the danger lurking in the twilight. Amy told him that the mountains were safe during the day, but that monsters could appear at nightfall. Ray recovered from his surprise and decided to talk to the girl. It turned out that she often picks wild fruits and berries in the mountains. It began to get dark. The boy decided to introduce himself, but as it turned out, he didn't need to. After all, he was quite famous among the village people, and this fame was sad. Every time he went out with his parents to the village, he got thanks in the face and rumors of a curse behind his back. The boy's red hair was to blame. No one in this village had red hair, and it made him an outcast. Even the fact that people respected his parents didn't lessen the fear of him. Perhaps it was because adults scare children with the evil red dragon, and red has come to symbolize evil and power. But it wasn't. It was people who exterminated a whole species and considered themselves liberators after that. And our act of revenge, or rather self-defense, was considered cruel. The memory came suddenly and spoiled the boy's mood. Amy noticed it and decided to wonder what was going through Ray's mind. In the conversation on the way, the girl told that she has a brother, and he also wants to become a swordsman. But it's easier for Ray since he can be trained by his father. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a call. Amy looked at the person who called them in surprise. The speaker was Gary, the girl's brother, surrounded by his friends. He did not like the company of his younger sister. The girl stood up in defense of Ray because he did not do anything to her, and she did not understand the reaction of her brother. Ray was silently assessing the situation. While his brother was telling off his sister, his friends decided to make fun of the boy. They decided to chase him away, thinking he was contagious and didn't belong in the village. They continued to humiliate him and affected his parents, saying that Ray was punishing them for something terrible. And his family didn't belong in the village. The words about his parents made him angry, but the guys leaving didn't see him clench his fists in rage. Their laughter was the limit of his patience. The boy decided not to leave this situation unpunished and called out to the departing offenders. A sharp lunge and a fist is carried in the face of the man who said nasty things. A strong blow almost reached the opponent's head, but something unexpected happened. Amy's brother pushed the guy off the trajectory and took the blow on himself. The blow was incredibly strong, so much so that the guy's shoes slid on the ground. But even trying to brace himself on the ground didn't save him from falling. The shockwave sent the blonde boy flying. Ray looked angrily at his unexpected protector and told him not to get in the way of taking revenge on the people who had insulted his parents. Gary recognized that the red-haired boy had been training hard, and if he really wanted to fight, he would accept the challenge. Gary decided that he would not use the weapon so as not to kill Ray, so he gave the sword to his friends. The dragon also decided to fight with his bare hands and threw his weapon to the ground. He took a stance and determined to fight off all of them at once. The boy thought that he could handle them all. The blonde boy's friends supported him, watching the fight from the sidelines. Ema was trying to talk sense into the rivals. The fight that was supposed to be bare knuckle was deceptive. A heavy bag with unknown contents flew at Ray. He fell to the ground from the sneaky blow, and the opponent towering over him held another pouch in his hands and urged the dragon to surrender. Holding the illegal weapon, he told the boy who had risen to his feet that he was far from the level of the blonde-haired man. Looking at the red-haired boy with contempt, Gary admitted his disappointment and advised him not to become a swordsman and to take up something he was truly good at. Those words were the last thing on Ray's mind as he lost consciousness, to do what he was really good at. When he got home, his brother and sister argued. Amy thought Gary was out of line, but he ordered her to stay away from the red-haired man. The villagers are afraid of the cursed red hair, and their family is no exception because they are ordinary people. This made the girl angry. She screamed her hatred for her brother. At the end of the argument, the sister gave her brother a huge bump, and boiling with anger, decided to leave him, except he wasn't paying attention anymore. He was looking at the dent in his defense. That defense was on the hand he had taken the first blow in the intercession. In shock, he realized that without the plate, his arm would have broken from the first blow, and he realized that Ray would have won their little battle. Back at home, the boy was seen by his mother, who wailed that it was late and called him in for dinner. When she got closer, she saw her son's wounds and decided that he had been abused again. He didn't want to upset his mother and said he had hurt himself during practice. She anxiously began to clean the wound so that no scar would be left. Only the boy didn't want that because scars adorn men. Jack caught them talking about it. He laughed and admitted that practicing with a real sword was too heavy for his 4-year-old son. He decided he would practice first and went into the barn to the waiting dummy. Standing on the crate, he started the first level again. And so their battle began. The first lunge from the dummy and the dragon moved out of the path of the blow. Ray dodged the attacks because he knew all the combinations and found the dummy's weak points. He dodged the attacks perfectly. But there was an unexpected event. The boy's sword hit not the enemy but a barn pole. This surprised even the puppet. While he was recovering from the surprise, he forgot there was a battle going on, for which he received a sneaky kick in the back. That was the end of his second confrontation. The next day, he went into the woods again. In the distance, he suddenly saw his recent acquaintance. She was tensely waiting for someone. Her frowning face could be seen from afar. Her tight lips and sad emotions gave away her tension. But when she saw Ray, that changed. She smiled happily and waved her hand at the boy, greeting him loudly. He came closer and was surprised to realize that the girl had been waiting for him. That was the question he asked her. It turned out she wanted to apologize for the previous situation. Only this apology was unnecessary because it was her vein, and the dragon considered himself weak for now, though the girl thought otherwise since the offender was her brother. The refusal to accept the apology upset Amy to tears. Seeing this, the boy felt irritated with human nature and decided to accept her apology. He took an apple from the girl as compensation. She happily promised that her brother would not bother the boy again. From that day on, Emmy came to the same place every day, happy to meet her new friend. Sometimes she could chat about everything during practice until noon, and sometimes she could read quietly while the boy was practicing with his sword and not distract him. Gradually, the dragon got used to the fact that the girl was always with them and began to enjoy socializing. At this time, a large number of waiting guards had gathered in front of Tarun's house. At the family's table sat Jack and a guest who had arrived to bring him some bad news that Jack and Scarlet were shocked to hear. Monsters had attacked the borderlands. The man said that the people in the villages were infected and could not tell what had happened. Because of this, he asked for help in the investigation. Scarlet was worried and wanted to go with her husband as the monsters avoid crowded places. The woman fondly looked at her husband and recognized his rightness and only asked him to be careful. Without knowing anything about the events at home, the boy thought about the fact that training was also difficult for the boy, and there were still problems with coordination of movements. Meanwhile, Amy was reading a book with fascination. She had a cute look that drew the eye to her. Ray stared at her. How cute she looked in the setting sun. Catching himself staring, he slapped his cheeks, stimulating his mind to fall back into place. Walking over to the girl, he told her that practice was over and it was time to go home. She was obviously engrossed and hadn't kept track of time. The boy asked if she was not offended in the village because he was feared because of his red hair. But Amy didn't care about other people's opinions. She liked his red hair. She thought he was special, and it wasn't just the color of his hair that made him different. All that mattered was that he was himself. That phrase reminded him of Gary's words, "Do what you're good at." It caused a stupor and made him think. The thought that came into his head brought a happy smile to his face, and he hurried to thank the girl for her words. The idea visited his head, and he hurried home and said goodbye to his friend. Running into the barn, he rushed to the magic puppet and activated the first level of battle. Standing up on 4 limbs, he took the sword in his mouth. He finally realized what he was good at. You just have to be yourself. Getting on all fours, he finally felt his body become more flexible. It allowed him to move faster around the enemy. He caught the right moment and leapt into the air to attack the puppet with the sword clenched in his teeth. He landed behind the puppet, which was frozen in place. The puppet's eyes lit up green, and it uttered the long-awaited phrase about passing the first level. The boy jumped with happiness because his idea had finally worked, and he was closer to his dream. Sitting in front of the doll, he giggled with happiness. His father said that the first level was the entrance to the academy. The boy decided to see how far he could go. His eyes reflected the puppet's head with its red eyes lit up. Ray activated the second level of battle. Early in the morning, just waking up, the little boy stood next to his father, who was going on an urgent mission. Looking at his son, Jack said with confidence that he would be back in time for his exam. After all, he would be gone for a while. The father, with a happy face full of confidence in his son, asked him to work on the doll while he was away. Ray wanted to tell about his progress, but Jack was distracted and didn't hear the important message. The attendants hurried the man on his way. Handing the sword to her husband, Scarlet asked her husband to be careful on the road. The farewell was short but filled with love. As the boy looked at his father leaving on his journey, he thought of the doll as a trifle. He had something to surprise his teacher with. As usual, going to the woods for training, the dragon thought about how happy his father would be with his successes and how grateful he would be to Amy. After all, it was only thanks to her that he was able to know himself. Immersing himself, the boy realized that he should be more patient and trusting to people. He's human too. Though people are annoying, but these 3 were the exception that he accepted for himself, and decided that he would not take revenge on them. Taking a break from his exercises, Ray thought about the fact that his girlfriend hadn't shown up today. Thinking about her absence, he was embarrassed and a little angry. He is a great red dragon and succumbed to human emotions. Cheering himself up with an exclamation, the boy decided to get back to practicing. Today, he would finally have no one to distract him from his training. He put his sword on the ground and lay down to rest without noticing that he had fallen asleep. It was evening and night was approaching. Ray woke up and ran home. If he came back late, it would be bad. On the way, he thought about the fact that he hadn't thanked Amy, but he'd make up for it tomorrow. When he got to the village, the boy saw a crowd of people. They were looking for someone. At this time, the owner of the gun shop was anxiously telling Gary's father and Amy that 4 boys had come in to buy new weapons. The father and mother panicked when they learned that their son Gary was going to go into the woods to hunt monsters and offered it to his friends. Grabbing a vendor by the chest, the mother of Bob and Kyle of Gary's friends screamed that they were children, and he had a duty to stop them. Walking past the panicking people, the boy thought about the fact that retribution had caught up with his abusers so quickly. He didn't care about the search. It would be less trouble if they were sent to the other side by a monster. Except he suddenly realized that his friend Amy was with the missing. People were lighting torches, and he kept thinking that he didn't want revenge on the girl. She had been good to him, and she was just unlucky to have such a brother. He kept walking thinking that human life is very short. Sooner or later you're going to go over the edge. Only he remembered the bright smile of the girl at the first meeting in the forest, and it did not give rest. The boy froze in place, trying to figure out what it was that he was feeling. It did not give him peace. The dragon made a decision to find the girl. It was not her fault, and he had not yet had time to thank her for her words that had motivated him to defeat the doll. Ray rushed to run into the forest to rescue Amy and pleaded for her to just wait for him. Meanwhile, Gary was protecting the passed-out Bob and Kyle and his sister. He stood in a defiant stance, holding his sword in front of him. The blonde-haired boy was shaking from the exertion of covering his younger sister with his back. He motioned for his sister to stand still and not draw attention. Suddenly, a monstrous wolf appeared in front of him. This was his strongest opponent. The wolf opened its terrifying maw and loomed over the boy. Running across the bridge, Ray smelled blood and suspected the worst. Amy was in danger. He ran even faster. A stricken baby wolf demon got in his way. The smell was coming from it. The carcass was still warm and it bore the marks of a human weapon. They were close by, but it was not clear where to go. Suddenly, Amy's scream came from the woods. This was the clue they needed. At that moment, Gary received a strong blow that sealed him into a tree with his back and knocked the air out of him. The boy lost consciousness and his sister rushed to shake him without noticing the impending danger. The demonic wolf wasted no time and soared into the air in an attack on the defenseless target. She had already prepared for the attack and covered her head with her hands in fear, screaming for help. Suddenly, Ray appeared in front of the girl with his sword at the ready. He asked about the girl's well-being. She told about the unconscious boys. The dragon entered the battle with the wolf. He already had a wound on his cheek, but he asked not to worry about him and focused his attention on the enemy. He decided to distract the monster by dodging the attack and jumping on a tree with his sword in his teeth. But that move didn't work and the distraction didn't work. The wolf suddenly closed its jaws on the branch where the boy was sitting and didn't hit him. Finishing his leap near the girl, the dragon realized that the human body was weak and the speed was not fast enough for such an enemy. He simply wouldn't be able to handle the monster. Clutching his injured arm to his body, the boy tried to protect the people he recognized as his own. But the respite was short. Again, the demon jumped with its jaws open and forced him to take a defensive stance. Ray's face was bruised, but he didn't give up and calculated the options of his enemy's weaknesses. Soaring into the air, he struck the wolf's eye with his fingernails. But the werewolf is huge and the man is too small. The reaction to the blow was not long in coming. The boy was thrown to the ground and the sword fell from his clenched teeth. With his fingernails, he damaged one of the enemy's eyes. In the old days, the dragon could easily defeat him with just one claw. But now he had only human weapons at his disposal. The wolf jumped again and the boy saw a chance to strike at its leg again. It seemed to work, but no. The monster fell where Amy and Gary were when it was injured. The shockwave threw them backwards somewhere. The blonde boy was unconscious. Distracted by the injured children, Ray missed a strong blow with his paw that threw him off into the distance. But the boy didn't fall but landed on his feet again with his sword in his teeth, urging the monster to fight only him. Putting a huge amount of strength into his jump, the boy leapt into the air in another strong attack with the hope of success. The dragon struck a blow and it came out successful. Now 2 men fell to the ground. Finally, the huge monster was defeated. The wounded boy lay on the ground recovering from the battle. Strange flashes appeared above his head. Suddenly, a contextual menu unfolded in front of him, with a reward in the form of the dragon's gaze ability and the monster's medium crystal. Examining the table, he considered the information useless in relation to the situation. After all, there was a much more important problem. Dragging his leg and holding his injured side, he walked towards the unconscious boys. They had to be carried out of the forest. As he lifted Gary onto his back, he regained consciousness, surprised at the man who had saved them. The boy on his back and Amy in his arms. That was the limit for Ray. He was powerless to save the others. Their fate was left to chance. At the exit of the forest, there were men searching for the children. With torches, they peered into the distance and finally spotted the children walking. A boy was walking across the bridge with the children in his arms. People raised a shout looking for the parents of the victims. One of the men recognized the red-haired child. When he reached the hard ground, he fell down, unable to walk any further, only begging for his brother and sister to get an ambulance. He could no longer hear people. Bob and Kyle's mother ran up to the man holding Gary in her arms, desperately looking for her children. The man said the boy had only carried 2 of them out of the woods. Upon hearing this, the woman tried to break through the crowd of people holding her. She screamed and accused everyone of cowardice. When she broke through the men holding her, she ran across the bridge and shouted that she would save her children. Surprised men just stared at her. But while in the forest, she felt the unkind glances from all sides, and in fear, she begged her children to call out to her. Fear was stronger than the mother's feelings, and she rushed out of the unfriendly forest. In desperation, the woman grabbed Ray by the chest, screaming at him and believing that he was the one who had lured the children into the forest, that it was his fault they were lost there. She slapped the boy, blaming him for the red hair bringing trouble. The grieving mother thought he was a disaster bringing only trouble. The boy could hear the whispers of accusation coming from all sides. He was the only one to come back from the forest unharmed. They didn't notice his wounds. People shouted at him to confess where he had taken the children. Their angry faces surrounded him. A woman was punching the boy in the face, asking why he had only saved 2 and where he had put her Bob and Kyle. She didn't even hear what he said about finding them. With tears and anger in her eyes, she talked about how they were just children, forgetting that she was holding the same child by the chest. Pushing Ray into the woods and getting even more angry, she called the child a monster with no forgiveness. The wounded boy with pain in his eyes did not understand why, because of his red hair, he was not considered a child or even a human, but a monster. The woman took a burning stick and thrust it at the boy, wailing that there was no forgiveness for him. Ray realized that these people were scarier than monsters. With madness reflected on her face, she swung at the red-haired child in an attempt to send him to hell. The dragon smiled sadly as the burning stick flew at him. He had already resigned himself to his fate. His demise did not frighten him, only pity. But the unexpected happened. Gary jumped in front of the boy and took the blow of the torch on the plate protecting his arm. The people who saw this scene decided that the red-haired boy, recognized as a monster, had lost his mind and needed to be destroyed as soon as possible. Gary looked at the people in shock and accused them of lynching him based on nothing more than empty conclusions. He would not lay a finger on his savior, a scary woman screaming and frozen in a swing, blaming him for his troubles and urging him to get out. Another event was recalled. The knights and the witch who destroyed his former great red dragon. These events are different yet so similar. He was considered a monster. Waking up in a panic from his dreams, the boy lay on his bed. His eye and head were wrapped in bandages. The boy was lying on the bed, and next to him on the floor and resting his head on the bed was Scarlet. The woman did not see that her son was awake, for she was immersed in a troubled sleep. Tears of worry for her child flowed from her eyes. Ray looked at her sadly and couldn't understand why people can be so beautiful and cruel at the same time. The boy took his mother's hand and interrupted her sleep. The woman opened one eye and tried to understand what had happened. When she finally woke up, the woman with happy tears in her eyes couldn't believe that her son had finally woken up. She rushed to hug the child without noticing how she had hurt him with her hands. Tears spurted from Ria's eyes. Scarlet let go of her son and said that if he understood the pain, he would not be so reckless anymore. The boy wondered how long he had slept. Wiping tears of happiness from his eyes, she admitted that the boy had slept for a week. The dragon asked about the other victims and waited anxiously for an answer. It turned out that 2 of the children had only minor injuries, unlike him. Excitedly tucking a strand behind her ear, Scarlet admitted that Bob and Kyle had never been found. She was afraid it would never be possible. She remembered running toward the crowd of people where Gary was protecting the unconscious boy from the human fury, trying to explain that Ray was innocent. Realizing that the unconscious boy was her son, the woman became enraged. All she cared about was who did it. The people surrounding the child tried to calm her down while continuing to accuse Ray of taking the children into the woods and making them disappear. Scarlet clutched her son to her with an angry understanding as she looked at the villagers. She wasn't going to help them. Bob and Kyle's mother fell to her knees in despair, dropping the burning stick from the realization that no one would save her children. She watched Scarlet carry her son away. People once grateful looked at the sorceress in judgment. They whispered that this situation would be with her for the rest of her days, and it was time to ward off the damned. The mother happily stroked her son's head and praised him for his courage. Gary had told her everything, and she was proud of her child. She decided that Ray was hungry and decided to go make him something to eat. He only agreed to the suggestion. Sitting on the bed and exhaling from the abundance of information, he thought about the past events and one thing that troubled him. An incomprehensible table appeared in front of his eyes again, causing astonishment. The question that everyone or he personally had such a table aroused his excitement. The attention was attracted by the icon with the eye of a dragon, and the boy, not thinking long, decided to click on it and find out what would happen. The child's gray eye suddenly turned into an orange dragon's eye. It was extremely unexpected. Ray could see through the wall that his mother was cooking dinner and was currently slicing carrots. Only his energy level was too low. He remembered that as a red dragon, he had a huge amount of magic. The boy looked at his hand with happiness in his eyes and couldn't believe that the magic was slowly returning. But there was something else. Distracted from his happy thoughts, he looked at the middle crystal he had received for defeating the demon wolf. Suddenly, the boy coughed and saw that the room was gradually filling with smoke. Looking out the window, he saw his parents' house on fire and people screaming about the fire. His mother rushed into the room screaming to get away from the danger. She was running to save her child. Grabbing Ray in her arms, she conjured up a stream of water that could briefly stop the fire danger coming at them. Being under his mother's protection, the boy activated his dragon gaze skill and decided to find the source of the danger. Looking at the cluster of people, the skill helped him identify a person carrying a flammable object. Bob and Kyle's mother. People looked at the burning Tarun house and once again blamed it on the red-haired boy. The mother and son were not concerned with people's gossip. The mage was trying to save her house from the fire and keep the child behind her from getting hurt. Scarlet fought the fire with her powers. Raising her hands up, she cast a dispersal spell. The fire began to recede. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, the magician rested from the work she had done. She hadn't heard that people thought the boy's presence would destroy the entire village. The mother did not hear the murmurings of the people with a cheerful smile, clarified if her child was not afraid. She didn't know that the boy had heard the attitude of the people, because he had not responded to the call. The woman's face showed worry. She called out to him once more and waited for a response. The dragon with a smile hurried to take his mother's hand and spoke with admiration about how amazing she was. After all, she was able to put out the fire in the blink of an eye. Scarlet suggested they go home soon, and Ray thought about how people wanted their house to burn down. He wasn't the only one. He made a decision that he had to take revenge on the villagers. They wanted the house to burn down and the mother and son to die in it. Despite his wound, the boy decided to go to the forest to train. He looked at the bridge leading to the dangerous forest and drew his sword. Armed, he activated the skill replacing his human eye with a dragon's eye. The training began. Inspecting the forest with his skill, he noticed that all the monsters in the vicinity were small and should not be difficult for him to deal with. At this time, an unsuspecting little monster was sitting on a branch and enjoying a bright, juicy fruit. A jump landing and the first victory over the little enemy. The monster struck by the dragon's sword fell to the ground. The boy looked at the bodies of 20 creatures and counted whether it was enough or not. At that moment, the notification reappeared. Examining the table in front of his eyes, he learned that he had received a new monster crystal, only this time a small one. He was once again invited to absorb it. It seemed lucky that after destroying 20 small mage creatures, he could only get 2 crystals. He couldn't imagine what would come from absorbing it. He was distracted from his musings by the whimpering of the creature behind him. The boy turned around to see what was going on. Not far from the dragon lay the carcass of a demonic wolf and a wolf cub nearby. It looked like the dead creature was its mother. Ray sat down next to the wolf cub and said that it would have to survive alone. The monster did not like this neighborhood and growled. Suddenly there was a clue that there was a chance to tame him for a crystal. Without a second thought, I chose the taming option. The surprised wolf cub flew up into the air in purple sparks of magic and the crystal flew to him. The taming phase had begun. A few seconds and the black wolf cub's taming notification was received. The boy looked at his animal with delight. Suddenly, the wolf cub became lightning and flew into the boy's forehead while being absorbed into his body. Incredible shock was reflected on the child's face. Covered in sweat, the boy asked the fire with clues about possible side effects and if it would be possible to summon the wolf. He would finish the light. Just then, a system prompt appeared in front of his face about the appearance of the second of 1,000 abilities. This ability is taming, except the new skill wasn't that important right now. Disregarding the hint, Ray decided to attend to more important matters at the moment. After activating his dragon eye again, he looked around in search of what he had come to this dangerous place for. The search didn't take long. Behind the mountain, he found the 2 bodies he needed. As he approached the mountain, he saw the entrance to a cave littered with a pile of various bones. The bones were human and animal. Among the bones lay the remains of Bob and Kyle, children who could not be saved. The boy looked at them and moved on to what he had planned. He removed the rest of the clothes from the remains and collected their blood in the buckets he had prepared. Finished with his preparations, the dragon took the buckets and went on his way out of the cave without turning back. Out of the forest, he headed home. There, his worried mother reprimanded him for not taking care of himself and his wounds, as well as for his soiled clothes. The boy was about to go to bed, but he was roused by the news that his father would be home in 3 days, and they would train together. Scarlet couldn't stand it and yelled at her son to cover himself with a blanket and finally go to bed. He immediately went to bed. There was a suppression of the essence. The boy pretended to be asleep for his mother, but at the same moment, a plan of revenge was brewing in his mind. After waiting until late at night, Ray went to the barn to retrieve the buckets and things hidden there. Taking all the items with him, he went to Bob and Kyle's house. Dragon knocked on the door of the house to attract attention. The mother of the dead boys was coming down the stairs with a flashlight in her hands. She yelled for them to stop knocking and she was on her way out. Maybe it's the sons. She ran to open the door hoping to see her sons, but she was disappointed. She looked out into the yard and saw Kyle's torn t-shirt lying on the grass. Grabbing the child's item, she saw footprints heading into the woods. Hope seized her and she set off on the trail. Going deep into the woods, the woman discovered the next gruesome find. It was Bob's clothes, tattered and hanging from a tree branch. The woman shouted her sons' names in the hope that they would all come home together. Above her on the tree branch with a rope in his hands was Ray. Tied to the rope were buckets of blood. The boy waited for the right moment to release the end of the trap. The woman who hadn't expected a setup was doused in red liquid from head to toe. She looked around for who had done it and found a red-haired boy landing nearby. Hate filled her eyes and she screamed that the boy was a monster and rushed towards him, wanting to make payback. Only she was stopped by a set of glowing eyes behind the boy's back. The woman froze in place with a shocked sigh. The smell of blood emanating from her clothes attracted the dangerous animals lurking in the forest. Payback had found the Tarun family's abuser. The next morning, rumors spread among the villagers. They became even more convinced that there was a curse and it was best to stay away from the Taran house. People who saw the red-haired boy walking stopped talking and looked at him with fear. Even though they tried to pretend that everything was fine, the boy realized that new rumors had spread. People relaxed only when he moved a certain distance away from them. But the dragon even liked the fear of humans to a certain extent. The thought brought a smile to the child's face. As Ray approached the house, he saw the horses standing there without riders. That meant only one thing. Father had returned. The boy rushed home with a happy smile and opened the door, peeking inside, hoping to see his dad. Only there was unpleasant news. On the doorstep stood the knights, and behind them, kneeling by the bed, Scarlet was crying. The men were silent. Jack was lying on the bed. The boy rushed to his father, pushing away the men who stood in his way. All he cared about was what had happened to his father. The man lying on the bed bore little resemblance to his handsome father. He was delirious. His body was covered with purple spots. The mother said Dad was sick. She cried, saying that Ray should be strong and that Dad would get better soon. She tried to make herself believe it. He activated the dragon's eye to see what was wrong, only it only made it worse. There was no answer. The mother was glowing yellow like a normal human while the father was purple. Ray realized he had never seen such a thing, even as a red dragon. Suddenly Jack spoke. He spoke many times the word shadow and that it would destroy everyone. The knights at this point decided to tell that the great swordsman had been struck by the shadow sickness. He was struck by a shadow beast to protect a local man. The dragon recalled that during his past life he had never encountered it. When it appeared, he wondered what happened then. Scarlet thanked the knights for bringing her husband home. The knights apologized for failing to protect him. During his life as a dragon, he had the highest level of magic and could dispel all black magic and any defense spells. Only now he was weak. Having made a decision for himself, he turned to his mother. Ray asked her if he would be stronger if he entered the Academy of the Knights of Orion. The woman wept and sat down beside him and said that he would. After all, his father had studied there, and Ray would become just as strong. With a determined look, the boy hit his chest with his fist and said with confidence that he would enter the academy and find a way to cure his father. The woman rushed to hug her son. She cried and said she believed in him. He would surely cope with everything. At that time, in an unknown huge room, a magic ball was hanging in the air. People in robes were looking into it. They saw a red-haired boy in the ball and recognized that the prophecy had come true and the world would soon begin to change. There was only one question on their minds about the situation. What was next for the world? Would there be salvation or would disaster strike? That was unknown. It was decided to inform the knighthood to find him as soon as possible. The elders said if the boy was a rescue, they would guide him. But if the boy is a disaster with pain bordering on madness in his eyes, he will decide to destroy the child. The town square was decorated with many red flags. Behind the fence was a huge line of people waiting for someone. Finally, the people waited for the visitors and erupted in delighted shouts of greetings. On a raven horse sat the beautiful and fair-haired knight Delbert. He attracted many stares. Women and girls who had seen him once could not forget his beauty and looked forward to the annual competition. And now the attention of the people was attracted by a man who introduced himself as Knight Number 1 Winford from Orion Academy. He, Delbert, and Bernardo were the judges of the competition. People listened attentively to the announcement of the beginning of the competition for children who had reached the age of 5. Those wishing to enter the academy must pass an exam. In the ranks of the children who came was Gary. He listened attentively to the speakers. Ray, who was hiding his identity behind a hood, was also standing in the back. Winford pointed to a waiting puppet with a sword and announced that the challengers should come on stage in order. The start of the trials was announced. The first to participate in the trials was a stocky boy. He walked with his sword at the ready and was absolutely confident in his abilities. The boy gave a battle cry and, raising his sword in the air, he threw himself at the doll that had adopted a fighting stance. He was supported by the shouts of his parents. But even the support didn't help in the battle. The puppet sent the boy flying a second after the fight began. Victory appeared to be on the side of the puppet. Bernardo admitted failure and challenged the next challenger. Ray recognized that his father was right and that it was only necessary to defeat a level 1 puppet. The boy seriously understood that although the first level does not allow the puppet to move, it does not prevent it from defending and counterattacking perfectly. But he was distracted from his contemplation by an unexpected conversation coming from the back. Delbert and Winford were standing at the edge of the arena. Winford was clearly frustrated with the competition and thought it was a waste of time. But one can't argue with the elders. The large amount of crystals seemed to have allowed many of Ray's senses to sharpen. Because of that, he was able to hear the conversation at such a distance. Judging from the knight's dialogue, Delbert appeared to be an arrogant man who considered the gathered people to be dirty commoners, except that Winford disagreed. Suddenly, there was the first person to pass, and it turned out to be the blonde-haired Gary. The peasants were overjoyed and considered him a special child. The boy suddenly raised a finger in the air and with a broad smile turned to the people with his hand extended forward. With this gesture, he drew such unnecessary attention to the red-haired boy. In addition to the surrounding people, the boy was also noticed by the knights. If Winford was simply tense at seeing him, Delbert's reaction was negative. The boy threw off his hood, for there was no point in hiding any further. As usual, accusations of being a monster and cursed came from all sides. Bernardo did not react to the appearance of the red-haired boy, but adjusted the doll and announced that, in a minute, the exam for the next child would begin. At that time, Delbert came up to him saying that he did not believe in the prophecy and that he was obliged to pass the exam. At this, he held out his hand to the doll. A wicked grin on his lips, and he activated the 3rd level of combat on the dummy. The doll's eyes lit up with red fire. It threw itself into the fight. The thrust was so strong it picked up the wind. With sword at the ready, she charged at the 5-year-old boy. The dragon stood with sword at the ready, waiting for his enemy. It had no fear of a wooden foe superior in strength. Winford shouted in panic to the boy to move away as it was too dangerous. He rushed to save the child from danger and drew his sword from its sheath, only it was an unexpected action that shocked the knights. All in amazement looked at what was happening. A knight ran up and saw a red-haired boy sitting in front of the defeated mannequin. He separated the doll's head from its body. That ended the battle. Bernardo looked at the winner in shock. Winford, with a satisfied smile, put his sword in its scabbard and asked to announce the positive result of the battle. Ray walked confidently to a happy mother and an enthusiastic Gary. He had proven himself strong, proved to himself and to those around him. After passing the exams, the boy came to his father to say goodbye. He had passed the test and must now leave the village with the knights. The child looked at his father with pain in his eyes and realized that he probably couldn't hear him, but still asked him not to worry. Scarlet approached her son and asked him to accept the gift. Ray looked at his mother in surprise and asked what she had brought him. It was an amulet in the shape of a blue blob. She clasped it around the boy's neck, explaining that it was a family heirloom. Scarlet hoped it would bring good luck. The teary-eyed boy said goodbye to his mother. He asked her to take care of herself while he was away. The mother looked at her departing son, seeing him off as she had seen her husband off. She told him she would always help him. Alone, Scarlet cried, saying the boy's name. All she could do was wait for his return. In the woods stood a wagon with waiting knights. They were welcoming the last child to pass the exam, and so at the knight's words, everyone was finally assembled. Winford smiled at the boy and told him to jump into the carriage, saying that he was another little arrival. The question of who the first arrival was settled as soon as Ray looked behind the blanket covering the entrance to the carriage. Confusion swept over the boys. The children awkwardly sat on different sides of the carriage and looked silently at the adjacent road. Suddenly, Gary broke the silence. Droplets of sweat appeared on his hair and he uttered an unexpected apology. Ray didn't even realize what he meant. The blonde-haired boy walked over to his former enemy and bowed in a bow of forgiveness. The dragon accepted his apology because he had saved him once too. The boy sat down next to Ray and admitted that he was talking as if he were not 5 years old. He decided to quickly change the subject by asking why Amy wasn't there. Turns out Amy is at Roland's Magic Academy. She hadn't told Ray about it. The boy was surprised that his acquaintance has a talent for magic. Suddenly, the boy's conversation was interrupted by a shout from outside. The knights ordered the carriage to stop. The boys broke out in a cold sweat. The knight riding ahead saw an unknown person and pulling out his sword, ordered him to introduce himself. The man turned out to be a girl who introduced herself as Anne Wardwood, a mercenary of the guild without a trace. She was wounded and begged for help. Her strength was enough for her to reach Bernardo and collapsed without strength. The knight caught her and began to question her about what had happened to her. It turned out that the girl's squad was attacked by shadow monsters, and it was strange. After all, on the way to the squad of knights, no one attacked. Hearing the name of the city of Ren looked out, boys were surprised. They were on their way to the Knights Academy. The boys remembered that the Knights Academy is a fortress standing on the border, and at any moment there could be an armed confrontation. But that's not all. The news that struck Ray was that they would have to train in the city of Ren for 10 years, and only then they would continue their training at the academy. He realized that for a dragon, 10 years was a snap of the fingers, but for a human it was no small amount of time. Ray didn't know if his father could handle it. Gary had other things on his mind. He was thinking about the fact that only the girl had survived the whole squad, and that Ray's father had been attacked by them. The boy's thoughts were prophetic. Shadow monsters appeared in the path of the squad. The trio of knights halted the squad in suspense. Sweat appeared on their faces. An order was issued for the squad to be on full alert. There were various monsters on their way, and among them moved a shadow monster, real big guy. A dangerous battle awaited the squad. The monsters came closer to the knights, and it became clear that the huge bear was the king of bears, and the beasts surrounding him were infected. The tranquility came to an abrupt end just as suddenly. The beasts went on the attack, huge claws and fierce purple fire in their eyes. The trio of knights froze in suspense, preparing their swords for battle. They had a difficult task: to survive themselves and protect the children entrusted to them. As the knights prepared to attack from the front, their opponent was more cunning and crept up from their unprotected backs. It was a sneaky move. The bear was getting closer to the unaware Bernardo, but its huge body could not help making noise, and this attracted the private knight. The knight let out a cry that caught Bernardo's attention. Only it was too late. He didn't have time to dodge or deflect the monster's blow. Bernardo had already prepared to take the blow, but there was a surprise. The red-haired boy destroyed the attacking monster with a single sword stroke. Gary and Ray stood back to back, and the knight gave them the task of defending themselves by themselves. It was a battle with superior opponents for the children. The blonde-haired boy found himself one-on-one against two huge beasts. Gary held his sword in front of him defensively. Two superior opponents proved too much for the 5-year-old boy, and the bear behind him struck a blow to Gary's arm. It would have been the final blow for him, but the dragon managed to protect his partner by attacking the infatuated monster from behind. Protecting Gary, he told him to be careful as the zombie bears were much stronger than the demonic wolves. Forgotten for the duration of the battle, the king of the bears suddenly let out a mighty roar, raising a terrible wind. The wind soaked with magic, and the anger of the monster knocked down. Few managed to hold on. Ray was among those who held on. He was lucky not to fall only because he had a sword stuck in the ground, which he held onto. The bear, glowing with bright red eyes and exuding an eerie aura, reached forward with his clawed paw. He was pointing at someone in a pointing gesture. Winford froze like a thunderclap. he heard something that could not be. The monster was talking. He was talking about how humans could never defeat the shadow. With their mouths hanging open, the humans couldn't believe it, shocked to hear the news. The bear said that all were doomed, and that the shadow would sooner or later cover the land. Finished with his threats towards the knights, the monster made a mighty leap and simply vanished into thin air. Winford exhaled and recognized that everyone owed it to the fact that the creature didn't attack, otherwise everyone would have died. At this point, Ray pondered the fact that it seemed to him as if the creature's threats were directed at him. He hadn't even noticed the notice about the crystals. Winford approached the boys. He praised them and thought they would make excellent knights in the future. But the dragon was not interested in praise. He turned to the knight asking if he often met talking beasts. But it turned out that even shadow beasts were not frequent guests within the border. A talking beast was a surprise. Except the knight was more concerned about the boy's calmness. He shouldn't be like this at the age of 5. Delbert, watching this conversation, was not happy about something. A black shadow fell across his frowning face. At last the detachment arrived at the City of Rain. The dangerous journey was nearing its end. But what confused them was the number of guards at the entrance. There were more than usual. Winford approached the guard and clarified the reason for the increased security. It turned out that the kingdom had issued an Amber Alert. It's martial law. Only the children behind him didn't need to know that. They were happily discussing the battle. Gary spoke enthusiastically about the bellicose Ray. The dragon didn't know that he was to be the chosen one. All he could think of at that moment was his father and his duty to become a knight. Jack must wait for his return. Looking out over the city, the boys were excited to continue their journey, for this was only the beginning. It had been 10 years since Ray had entered the Knight Academy. The city of Ren was where they trained before entering the fortress itself. There was a class going on where the teacher explained that most knights didn't use magic but had other powers. She asked the students a question. Gary wanted to answer her question. He imagined a knight blazing with fire and said that this Qui power enhances the body's abilities beyond human. The teacher was pleased with the success and asked why children had to be 15 years old to use the power. This was the question she asked Ray. This made Gary tense as his roommate was absent from class. The boy urgently came up with an explanation of where his friend was. He stood up from his seat and with his arms spread apart, he could think of nothing better than to say that Ray must have gone to the bathroom. The teacher relented. The one who responded was now the girl Scavia. She explained that chi puts a tremendous strain on the body. While the class was in session, Ray was training his wolf on monsters. He didn't care about the information that was given in the lecture. He gave the wolf the name Nova. Nova heard the order to fight and opened her jaws to rush at her enemy. A short battle and victory brought the master small crystals of the monster. The dragon did not hesitate any longer and absorbed the crystals, collecting energy from them in his body. He was pleased with the way his training was going. Having finished training, Ray absorbed the wolf and decided that he would come back later, as someone would surely lose their temper again. The boy heard a familiar male voice behind him, and it spoke of wondering who the man would see first upon his return. Sitting on a raven horse was Winford. He said with a smile that the boy was amazing since he managed to escape the gaze of the valiant guards every time. The dragon grinned at him. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years. The boy had grown taller and taller in that time. They walked into town and Ray asked how old Winford was. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but he hadn't developed a single wrinkle. How old is the man? The knight didn't answer. That was his secret. He had heard from the boy's mentor that he had been sneaking out to hunt beasts lately. If the alarm had not been canceled, Ray would have had a harder time sneaking out. The boy admitted this with a smile. The boy relaxed as he listened to the knight. The cheerful mood fell off of Winford. He mumbled that he had stopped by Ray's house before heading back to town. His father's condition had not worsened. He moved closer to the boy and put a hand on his shoulder and continued. He told him that his mother was taking good care of Jack and asked him not to worry too much. The boy thought sadly about how for 10 years, despite the wind and rain, he had practiced hard. He had never been able to awaken any powers. Winford suddenly put his arm around him, which embarrassed him a little, and suggested that they go back to town together. They walked into town and the man encouraged him. Tomorrow would be the day of the students' departure to Orion Academy. The knight hurried to meet the other children. At the big gate of Renee Town, the man reprimanded the knight who had lost sight of the red-haired boy. But the man thought there was no danger. The man grabbed the guard and shouted that the boy must not be overlooked. He was special and must be watched. Winford asked the man to be more merciful. The man turned out to be Ray Aaron's mentor. He calmed down when he saw the man speaking, but the calm didn't last long. Standing next to Ray, Aaron slapped the boy on the back and reprimanded him for absenteeism and for going out of sight. The knight stepped between the boy and his mentor. He reminded him that the Amber Alert had been lifted a month ago, and it was okay to go out for a short walk. Standing on opposite sides of the man, the argument continued. Ray yelled about leaving soon and making things easier for the teacher. The teacher forbade skipping class. Suddenly, there was an announcement of an urgent meeting. Everyone should gather in the square as soon as possible. The students gathered in the square. Gary was surprised to see his friend returning so soon, and the one with the huge bump on his head said he was unlucky. The assembly began, and the speaker was Lancey Squire. He will accompany everyone to the Academy of the Knights of Orion for a week from tomorrow. Listening to Lancey's speech, the knight standing next to Winford asked about the itinerary. With a calm expression on his face, Winford reported the path through the swamp. The knight broke into a sweat and shouted that it was too dangerous for children there. Winford folded his arms across his chest and with a calm smile replied that whoever wanted to become a knight had to pass the test. But that was not all. This path would also be a test for the overconfident Ray and his diligent apprentice Gary. Early the next morning, many carriages with apprentices sitting in them and knights sitting on horses accompanying them gathered at the gate to the exit of the city. The students in the carriages resented the fact that their academy didn't have teleporters. After all, other academies had teleporters. But their dialogue was suddenly interrupted by laughter. The boys turned around to see who was laughing and were rebuked for not listening attentively to the teacher in class. The speaker was the beautiful Skavia. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and said that the teleport was dangerous because the academy was on the border. The boys looked at the girl in surprise, realizing that they had missed this information during the lectures. The girl threw a glance in Ray's direction. Gary, who was listening to her, noticed the girl's movement and quickly turned away in the other direction, embarrassed. The boy thought he was imagining things. The squad moved until the evening, and as soon as the sun began to sink to the ground, the order was given to break camp and lie down to rest. While everyone was pitching their tents, Gary told Ray that Skavia seemed to be watching him. This surprised Ray, for there was nothing remarkable about him. The blonde-haired boy told Ray to turn around sharply, which they did, squinting in an attempt to catch the watching girl off guard. They succeeded, and the girl, caught in the act of watching, began to make a violent display of activity that frightened the boys who were helping her. The boys continued their work discussing the situation. Gary was amused by this reaction. Ray thought it was the red color of her hair. But no. Besides Ray, there were 4 other red-haired men in the squad. They were the strongman Ian, the twins Juan and Duo, and the smooth-headed Kyle. While everyone was working, the 2 apprentices decided to look around and came to the water. The stench coming from it made them cover their noses. They looked at the water covered in a horrible slime and couldn't understand what it was. One of the boys said that it looked like a swamp. Their version was confirmed by an angry Delbert who stealthily came up behind them. Realizing that they were caught, the students were covered in a sticky sweat of fear. The knight with a frightened look on his face warned them that if they found themselves with broken limbs if they didn't go to their tents to sleep right away. Night came on and the guards took up their post. They surveyed the surroundings and protected the broken camp. Ray had taken a careful look around back in the day and had no trouble slipping away in the night. He grinned at the guards. He was about to leave, but suddenly someone grabbed his arm. The fright even made him break out in a sweat. Who could it be? Looking over his shoulder, he saw that Skavia was holding his hand. She asked where he was going at night, and the answer was simple: to hunt monsters. She held him and almost shouted at him about how it was too dangerous here. He might meet a medium monster and not be rescued in time. He wasn't about to accept her rightness. Abruptly pulling his hand away, Ray explained that a medium monster was not a problem for him. Saying that, he moved on. Skavia looked sadly at Ray as he walked away, holding his tired hand and thinking that Ray was just a boy. The next morning, Gary was awakened from his sleep by a voice announcing that it was time to get up, and whoever got up last would be punished. Opening his eyes fully and looking at Ray, he was surprised. The guy was lying there with his eyes open, and judging by his red, inflamed eyes, he hadn't slept all night. Bouncing away from his friend in fear, Gary asked what was wrong with him. Why was he awake, or would he just not be able to sleep? Turning his red eyes to him, Ray made an unsuccessful attempt to lie about sleeping and getting a good night's sleep. Only Gary didn't believe him. The boy left the tent stomping his feet loudly, saying he didn't want to be punished. But Ray was already engrossed in the amount of crystals he had consumed. Soon the group was on their way. The children were also traveling in carriages accompanied by mounted knights. Suddenly, Winford, who was riding ahead, ordered them to stop. Something was in their way. Because of the night hunt, Ray had been asleep during the journey. At the same time, his blonde-haired friend couldn't relax as it was too quiet outside for such a journey. Everything happened very suddenly. Abruptly, the horses rumbled in fright. The dragon woke up as quickly as if he hadn't slept a few minutes ago. Breaking through the window behind the children, the giant worm burst into the carriage. The students froze in horror, not even seeing who was behind them. While most were in a stupor from what was happening, Gary and Ray drew their swords to defend their companions from the monster. The sharp-toothed worms kept charging, and the girls among the students were not prepared for such a battle. One of them was about to be attacked by the next worm, but she was lucky that Gary was nearby and rushed towards the enemy. With a precise sword thrust, he destroyed the attacking monster. He took command of the students and ordered them not to move alone. Everyone must climb higher and get out of the carriage. The first to jump out of the transport, Gary told everyone to stand back to back and try not to leave any blind spots. Kyle, one of the red-haired students, jumped out of the carriage, offering a monster-slaying contest. Ray watched in silence at what was happening. The dragon was the last to exit, and pulling back the curtain on the exit, activated his dragon gaze to assess the surroundings and the number of enemies. Descending to the ground, he looked at the fighting companions and realized that the monsters were all small and there was nothing to worry about. But that was not all. Another event caught his attention. He shifted his gaze away from the battle and a quiet surprise touched his eyes. Standing on the cliff were 6 knights who had separated from the squad. They were watching the enemies being dealt with by the apprentices. Everything was under control. Realizing that his help was not required, Ray went to the carriage, surprising one of the students. The boy thought Ray was leaving and bringing danger. Only the dragon didn't care. Yawning, he said that the monsters were small and the people were many. There was no need for his help there. The knights watching him were unpleasantly surprised. They thought that the boy just chickened out and would only get a red belt for training, but their attention turned to another student. It was Gary. His movements were ascetic and he had good control over his body. He deserved a white belt. Scavia was next in line. The girl rarely took initiative, but she had great instincts and a strong grip. Smart girl? The quiet observation of the students was disturbed by a huge break in the ground from an unknown monster. The students scattered and it made the knights tense up. The sharp-toothed worms fused into one large worm. This giant was terrifying its enemies. He chose his target. It was one of the students who fell to the ground in fright and pressed his back against a tree. He couldn't even raise his sword to defend himself. Help came unexpectedly. The line of rallying worms was broken by Ian. He crashed into the monster and with his bare hands scattered the small worms from the giant's torso. The inseparable twins were not far behind him. They fought with short blades and clearly felt the excitement of the battle. The knights were happy with what was happening. They thought that the black-haired boys were all good except for one. Winford was definitely upset with Ray. After finishing the battle, everyone returned to the carriage. Gary sat down next to the awake Ray and tried to understand why he didn't fight, since the carriage was the most dangerous place to be. Winford had only one question, as many did. Who would be the chosen child of heaven from the prophecy? While the dragon went back to sleep, the students discussed the belts. Many were hoping to get a white one. Gary, however, did not know what it was and asked to be told. The boy said that although all the attendant knights had a ranking system, all the escort knights were of the highest rank with white belts. The guys looked out the window and even Ray woke up. White meant recognizing all of the knights' skills while passing the test. There were other belts. For example, green and black spoke of different abilities. But the red belt was the lowest rank for a knight. A red belt was given to someone who didn't perform well during the test. When Ray heard that, he froze in shock. He waited for it to continue. Those who received a white belt received special conditions. It's training with a personal tutor and extra help. Red belts are worse. Red belts also receive basic training, but nobody really cares about them. Most of the time, these kids are presented to themselves. When Ray heard the information about the red belt, he realized it was the best solution. He'd have more time to hunt, then he would be able to get more crystals. Clenching his fist, the boy decided that he had to get the red belt. After all, the more crystals he had, the more likely he was to get top-level abilities. Finally, the troop finished their journey. They arrived at their destination, Orion Academy. What Ray saw in front of him shocked him. Before his eyes, and the children opened a huge city academy with a gate height of at least 100 stories in height. Every inhabitant of this city was a knight. The city was lit by unusual torches and magic crystals. Gary followed the knights and looked at the city with his mouth open. It was a completely different world than the village he had grown up in. Lancey saw the children looking around and warned them not to scatter. If they got lost, he wouldn't look for them. The first item on the tour, he decided to show them the armory, where the equipment and more was kept. Next was the library. They'd been warned not to make any noise in there. Everyone they met said hello to Lancey. What was surprising was that many of the staff members were knights. Graduates are required to volunteer at the academy for 2 years. After going through all this, they came to the final point of the tour. It was a very unexpected and surprising place. Ian and Ray looked around, and if the dragon was still silent, not immediately realizing where they were, Ian decided to ask what this place was. It turned out to be a cemetery, the burial place of the knights who had died in the battle for the Kingdom of Hyrule. Lancey paused, looking at the monument and waiting for the children. He had brought them here to remind them that the battle never ends. The students must remember the duty of a knight to obey and fight. Listening to the teacher and looking at the monument, Ray became furious. He realized that they used the bodies of dragons to make armor and weapons. Curious, Scavia decided to find out whose monument it was. The dragon had no time for that. He was trying to calm down. It was a monument to the legendary Dragon Knight statue of the founder of Orion Academy. Ray decided to ask who this Dragon Knight was. Lancey ignored him and replied that they would understand when they learned more about the history of the academy. And now, everyone should follow him further. The boy was angry at first for being ignored by the knight and activated the dragon gaze, but what he saw shocked him. Gary, noticing that Ray was standing, decided to call out to his friend saying he needed to move on, but the dragon wasn't interested. He looked at the cemetery ground and couldn't understand how this was possible. A tomb under the cemetery with someone in it that someone is alive. Leaving the cemetery, they came to the dormitory. Harry wondered who their roommates would be, but Ray was not letting go of the thought of who might be alive in the graveyard. The blonde-haired boy turned to his red-headed friend and asked if he was listening to him or not. Riwon woke up from his thoughts and asked again, "Who are we talking about?" Looking at the lists posted, Gary was glad because they were put in the same room, but he wondered who else was living with them. Suddenly, they were distracted by an exclamation, and it was a clear indignation. The boys were very surprised to see the speaker. Their neighbor was Scavia. She was outraged that she had been put to live with the boys. It's just not possible. Gary was glad to have a roommate because at the academy, knights are treated equally regardless of gender. He tried to calm her down, but it only made things worse. Suddenly, Scavia's bag flew at him and she screamed at him to shut up and said she wouldn't live with him. The students looked out into the hallway and saw Gary lying unconscious. They decided to ask what had already happened. The boys who approached began to get acquainted. The black-haired one was Mong and the red-haired one was Ian. They would all share a room together. Ray immediately noticed that Ian was red-headed like him. That didn't please the boy very much. Gary looked at the list. He saw that 2 others would be living with them, Dan and Matthew Wardwood. They'd heard that last name before. There was an exasperated Scavia walking toward the group of boys. Not My Question hung between them, and cold sweat broke out on some of them. With a fearful look at her neighbors, the girl warned them that she wanted to change clothes, and no one dared to look in her room. The boys tensed as the door slammed shut, and they realized that Night Dancy had prevented her from changing rooms. Suddenly, Dan came up to them, and Gary said with a cheerful smile that he was the one they had been waiting for, and there was a problem they were standing in the hallway for. The blonde-haired boy said indignantly that he had found cockroaches in the room, and they were discussing who would go in and solve the problem. Dan decided that the cockroach was ridiculous, and it is not scary for the future knight. Taking his weapon in his hands, he opened the door with his foot and flew into the room. The door closed behind him with a loud slam. The others stood behind it and waited for it to continue. What was going to happen next? There was a sudden scream. Someone was in complete shock at what had happened, but Gary was laughing and his joke had succeeded. It was lunchtime and everyone was gathered in the huge dining room, and a bunch of roommates were there too. Dan, with a huge handprint on his cheek, asked why he lied about the cockroaches he ended up pissing off the psycho. Scavia overheard this conversation and angrily asked what he was talking about. The guys panicked, said they were quiet and would just eat. The girl calmed down and asked how they could eat lunch so quietly. After all, there would be a test very soon. She felt uneasy. Gary, chewing on a chicken leg, said that the trials for the distribution of night belts is not a reason to refuse lunch. This was overheard by some guys walking by. They called the guys paupers. They said they'd never tasted anything better in their lives. After they'd finished humiliating one of them, the 2 men moved on to Big Ian. They called him a redneck and tried to humiliate him for taking up space. They continued to humiliate the red-headed boys. Kyle heard this conversation too, but silently continued to eat without interfering, just not paying attention. One of the twins got angry and started to pull out his blade, but his brother was calmly drinking his tea and just lowered his hand to stop the attempt to start a fight. Monk tried to stand up for Ian and calm the bullies, but they even turned on him, saying he could only make it to red belt. One of the guys came up to Ian and decided to warn him that if he saw them at the academy, he'd better get the hell away. They would have continued the taunting, but suddenly the speaker got a chicken leg in the face. That was a good hit. Grabbing the food, he shouted in rage who dared to do this and that this man should come out to him. He asked for it, just as suddenly as the food hit him. The next thing happened. His head was pressed against the table with great force. The man who stood up for Ian was an angry Ray. He put his hand on the boy's arm and asked him who to avoid. The knights, who had been talking nonchalantly, heard that a fight had broken out, and they were being asked for help. Ian, panicking and trying to stop Rhea, held out his hand and asked him to stop fighting, since nothing had been done to him. But it was to no avail. Gary and Scavia came up to them. They were talking about what the knights were watching, and soon the trials wouldn't need to make a bad impression on them. But Ray didn't care about that. He continued to hold the guy, not paying attention to the fact that they blamed it on him, and that he was the one making fun of everyone. Lancey decided to deal with the situation and ordered the dragon to let go of the boy's arm. But it didn't work. Lancey, with anger in his eyes, ordered Ray to stop once more, and the apprentice was obliged to obey him. But no. Ray kept pushing and told Ian that he had learned one thing well. When someone tries to assert themselves at your expense, it can't be left to them. With anger in his eyes, the boy increased the pressure and said that an abuser should always get what he deserved. Letting go of the bully's hand, Ray continued to say that only in this way such people can understand something and learn. Angry at his disobedience, the knight asked why the student ignored him. Only he replied that his ears, like the knight's, sometimes let him down. The dragon took Gary's hand and led him to continue eating. You can't let such people spoil your appetite? The knight left behind was angry. He stood there and assessed the situation. He heard that those 2 guys were really the first to start, and they're always stoned, but this time they got a backlash. Lunch was interrupted again. The interrupters were the 3 main knights. Winford stood in front of everyone and raised his hand to ask for silence. Following the knights, 6 elders came in. He introduced them as the deans of the academy, and they would oversee the evaluation process. The dragon looked at the people who entered, and he realized that their aura was as powerful as those who destroyed him when he was a dragon. A table with colorful belts was rolled into the hall. In the presence of the elders, the students would be tested to receive the rank of knighthood. The boy listened to the knight's inspiring speech that those who would pass for the red belt would always be able to find their place. He thought about getting it. Finished with the speech, Winford passed the rest of the responsibility to Lancey. He assured that there was nothing to worry about and he would handle everything. The knight looked at the red-headed boy who dared to disobey him with anger in his eyes and thought that he always fulfills his duties well. There are 5 examinations, each of which is aimed at displaying a different knightly skill. The first is Stone of Strength. The second is Earth Ignition. Next is Meta-Acoustic Stalking. Then there was the Eye of Precision and the Will of Truth. All of these tests were to be passed by the disciples. The first test was the Gem of Power. You have to push the stone with all your might, and when it reaches the marker, the trial is over. This is what Lancey reported. Each student is given 2 attempts. If they fail the first time, they can use the magic gloves on the second attempt. Of course, in harder, magic gloves will affect the final scores, so it is better without them. The students listened to this, and to them it seemed very simple. After telling all this, the knight decided to add one more addition before the trials officially started. The students were very surprised by this. The knight decided to use his right as an examiner and not allow Ray to participate in this test. Gary and Scavia were outraged at this kind of Lancey's self-rule, because it's not fair. Why is he not allowing Ray to take the tests? The knight replied with cold contempt that he only wanted to remind everyone that a knight's duty is to obey. The boys did not accept this decision but kept silent because the consequences could affect them. The start of the trials was announced. Everyone realized that the knight had a grudge against the boy. Scavia offered to talk to the leadership. Only Ray wasn't going to talk to anyone because that was exactly what he wanted. He gladly accepted his suspension. The dragon smiled as the knight's prank would only guarantee him a red belt. Gary and Scavia passed the test of the power gem quickly, though not easily. What was surprising was something else. Ian took the test after them, and what he did was astonishing. He didn't just move the stone, he lifted it into the air, a real strong man. Gary finished the challenge and walked over to Ray, wiping the sweat from his forehead and happy that he'd done it. Ray hastened to cheer him up. The dragon announced that the next examiner would be an elder from Roland Academy, the Academy of Magic, but Gary had no powers. An enemy on the battlefield wouldn't care. And the test will most likely be on magic resistance. It's all about identifying strengths and weaknesses. The boy rejoiced, for in his friend's words he found hope for himself. Perhaps he has a super talent. The second test was the replenishment of the earth. Gary was the first to go through. The elder touched his forehead and used magic to plunge him into the world of fire. In this world, Gary endured only 57 seconds. This exhausted the boy very much. The next student was summoned. The next one was Scavia. She accepted the challenge without fear of anything. She's a very smart girl and had set herself up beforehand, being in the world of fire that surrounded her. Her clothes and her hair were completely on fire, but she convinced herself that it was just an illusion. The girl lasted 5 minutes. The elder let her go and congratulated her on her surrender. Ray was summoned next. As she left, the girl wished her good luck. The mage reached out a hand to the red-headed boy's forehead. Before the test began, the dragon kept in mind that 20 seconds would be enough. The dragon immersed himself in the world of magic. He was surprised at this beginning. There he was surrounded by darkness with purple flashes. He wanted to pretend to faint. Suddenly, he saw the dragon's mouth open in front of him, and that's where his body was going. He had the idea that the dragon was him. In the real world, there was a strange confrontation. An unknown force threw the mage and Ray in different directions. The knights were running towards the examiner, and he was pointing his finger at the red-headed boy and shouting that he was cursed. Cursed by the red dragon. Winford held the unconscious old man. Ray asked if he was all right. The knight suggested that the old man was too tired. The other elders wondered what had happened there. Winford suggested that it was mana sickness. After the mage rests, everything will return to normal. The knight said that he would find out what had happened later and let another mage finish the test. After the test, the boy had a question about the mana disease. Scavia said that it occurs when mana runs out. Ray said with a smile that he was jealous of other people's talents. But the girl was puzzled. What kind of curse was he talking about? During the discussion, the unexpected happened. A great earthquake shook the earth, but that wasn't all. A forest suddenly began to grow in front of the students, filling the entire test site. The trio of students coughed from the smoke that covered them. They didn't know what had happened, but they realized that someone had used magic. In front of the students, the next examiner landed on a tree branch and said that the test was starting right now. The man pointed to himself and said that he was the examiner of the third test and all they had to do was follow him. The man abruptly took off down the path so the meta-acoustic pursuit exam began. The students didn't have to follow his movements exactly. Glancing at him, Gary was surprised to see such a quick start. Ray was also surprised at the man's speed, and he even had a drop of sweat on his face. One of Monk's students didn't wait and set off in pursuit. Ray and Gary decided to keep up as well. The last remaining student stood there in shock, not understanding how he could keep up with everyone. Scavia ran after the boys. She wasn't going to lose to them. She wished the one left behind good luck. The examiner was pushing himself from tree to tree, and he had the thought that this was too hard a test for the children. Except when he turned back, he was very surprised. He had underestimated the students. Following him were Monk, Gary, and Ray. Gary shouted to his roommate that they would catch up to him. The man stepped up the pressure, clinging to the next tree and pushing off the previous one. He decided there was no need for indulgence. Turns out the third challenge was not a single one. The archer readied 5 arrows and looked at the approaching students. The dragon lagged behind his friends. He realized he was not very good at chasing. After all, he had only gotten around on all 4s before. Thinking about it, the boy noticed a bunch of arrows flying at him. This was another nuisance on the way to the target. The examiner did not stop to continue on his way and shouted to the pursuers to be careful, because arrows were flying at them. The children landed on a tree branch, and the projectiles crashed in front of them. It was an unpleasant addition. The man landed next to the archer who said not to indulge. She could track down each of the students. The girl looked at the man with a smile and suggested that he should not hold back and keep moving forward faster, or he would lose. On one of the trees, the children saw bows and quivers of arrows. They realized that they had 2 tests made for them at the same time. The girl examiner looking at the students told them that the targets to be hit were in the forest, and 3 shots should be enough. But it wasn't that simple. Smiling, she drew the tithe of the bow and told them that it would be in their way. The 4th test of Akko precision began. Looking at his friend ahead of him, the dragon realized that although he wanted to get a red belt, he definitely didn't want to be the worst. The boy decided to use his superiority and activated his dragon gaze ability. With this ability, he not only helped himself, but was able to save his friend from an arrow aimed at him. This challenge would be difficult. Pushing his friend out of the path of the arrow, Ray realized that he could not dodge it in time. The arrow was coming too fast, but someone shot ahead of the arrow and they crashed into each other. The man saved Ray's life with that action. The boys landed on a branch, and the dragon saw the power of the arrow fired at him. It pierced through 2 nearby trees. He looked around and couldn't understand if it was true that students should be struck with such force in an exam. One of the students with a bow in her hands asked if they were okay. She was the one who repelled the deadly projectile with her arrow. The dragon saw the arrows flying at the girl. He hurriedly shouted to her to be careful and get out of the trajectory. Thanks to the boy's good reaction and jumped up from the branch, and an arrow crashed into the place where they were standing. A trace of ki could be felt from it. A new bowstring erection from the unknown archer. He prepared for the next strike, except this time he had no luck. The examiner and the dragon sensed his urge to destroy. Ray placed the arrow on the bowstring and heaved with all his might. He wanted to take revenge on his offender. Only the boy did not calculate his strength, and with this tension simply broke the bow. He shocked the students. After realizing what he had done, Ray laughed embarrassedly and had drops of sweat on his face from embarrassment. At this moment, the examiner was chasing after an unknown enemy. She didn't know who it was. The unknown person didn't want to be discovered and fired a power-infused arrow at the girl. She barely had time to dodge the shot. The speed was insane. The arrow stuck into a tree a millimeter away from her. The examiner pulled the arrow out. Looking at it, she just couldn't figure out who wanted to get rid of the students. Turning back to the students, she apologized as she missed the attack. She didn't want to scare the children and told them to keep going through the tests. The boys realized that behind her apology was that she wasn't the shooter, but they had to go on with the test. The boys rushed off. They couldn't fall behind, but they realized they were being chased by really dangerous people. Everyone had already finished the exam, and only these 2 were the last ones to arrive. This obviously didn't suit the man. They told their friend about what had happened to them. She was completely shocked with the situation. Standing in front of the boys, the girl couldn't understand why they didn't want to tell the knights about it. Except that the boys looked at each other and decided that if the examiner didn't reveal the truth, then it was a deliberate attempt to hide something. They explained to the girl that if someone wanted to eliminate them, it would definitely have to be someone who had access to the exam room. Scavia froze. Gary speculated that this person could be the examiner, or the knight associated with him. The girl asked what they were going to do next, but the guys decided that they should take things step by step to find out who the killer was. An unknown man landed at one of the academy's passages. He wanted to escape from a failed mission. He was about to leave, but in his back he was staring at the tensioned bowstring in the hands of the girl examiner. She ordered the unknown man to stop. Standing behind him, she asked him what he wanted from the newcomers, but she received nothing in reply. The man continued on his way without paying attention to the girl's threats. She said that if he continued walking, she would put a hole in his head. The man with a hidden face turned around at her. A purple fire flickered in his eyes. He motioned for her to try and do the action. Grabbing the blade in his hands, he was the first to rush to the attack, but a released arrow flew in front of him. It was time for the next test. Delbert was the next examiner, and in front of him stood a sword with a red stone and a pedestal. This sword was made from the crystal of the highest-ranked firebird monster. The knight took the sword in his hands, and the sword released flames. This is an indicator of Kim control. The first examinee was Ian. The boy took the sword in his hands with a bit of excitement. He was gathering his strength. He definitely didn't know how to control his energy. A column of flame burst out of the sword and scorched his face. Delbert was writing down some results on a sheet of paper. Without paying attention to the burning student, he summoned the next one. At that moment, 2 unknown men were discussing the assassination attempt. The unknown man was reporting his mistake. One of the unknown men remained Elder Gebby. In his hands, he held a golden mask. He placed it on his face. The golden mask allows you to change the appearance of the wearer. The man's appearance changed dramatically, and he decided that it would now be possible to signal to his comrades in arms. The man belonged to the Pure Blood Guild. At this time, Gary was being tested. He was holding a sword in his hands, and flames were steadily emanating from it. The examiner said that it was a good result. Ray was next. Gary wished him good luck as this was the last test, and he should not fail. A blonde-haired boy approached the other students, and from the Kawi asked him if Ray was really that strong. Gary wondered, at least as far as he could personally judge, that his friend was really strong. They didn't believe him because the results of the first 4 tests were terrible. Scania asked what that confidence was. He said that the last time they had fought, Gary had won easily, but that 10 years ago, Ray had been able to defeat a mid-level wolf and save him. Monk laughed in disbelief because 10 years ago they were only 5 years old each, and he just couldn't defeat a mid-level repair, plus a wolf, except the girl remembered. And the night she tried to take him down. She couldn't understand why, with such power, Ray would hide it. At that moment, the dragon approached the sword. He took it in his hands, and Delbert ordered to begin the test. Except when holding the sword in his hands, a clue popped up in front of the boy, that there was a large monster crystal in there, and the question of whether he wanted to absorb it. The boy said yes, and the examiner noticed that something was going wrong. For some reason, the flames were not appearing. The dragon started waving his blade. He suggested a possible broken sword, and the other students couldn't understand why the outgoing light was disappearing. The knight took the sword away from the boy. He yelled at him to move away and give it back. He looked at the glowing stone in panic. This weapon was created from a beast crystal of the highest ranked treasure of the Aral kingdom. The knight grabbed the boy by his pecs and asked what he had done to him. But Ray spread his arms to the sides, asking what he could do to him. All the more he asked what he could do if he was under the constant scrutiny of the knight. At that moment, a knight who had run in intervened in the brewing uproar. He addressed Delbert with an important message. Letting the boy go, the knight stepped back, and he came running and whispered something to the examiner. Suddenly, Delbert stopped the test and sent the students to their rooms. Ray looked with a corner of his eye in the direction of the departing knights, and he tried to understand if what the man said was true. Thanks to his sensitive hearing, the boy heard that the examiner of the fourth trial had been killed. Winfred and the other knights arrived on the scene when he was informed. She was already dead. The knight looked at the body. It wasn't cold yet, so it wasn't that long ago. Who did it? After making his decision, he gave the order to report to the elders. The Council of Elders was told of the tragedy, that the murderer was a master craftsman. Moreover, the perpetrator had failed to activate the security mechanism. One of the elders speculated that someone from within had acted. After all, the rumors of some organizations never died down. The elders decided that they should bring the investigation to an end since the leader of the Green Belt Knights had been killed. One of the elders went to the window and did not take part in the conversation. He was asked what he thought about it. The elders said to keep it a secret and tell the knights to keep investigating and find the real culprit. At this time, the disciples gathered in the hall. They were worried and speculated about what color the belt would be. While Ray stood aside pensively, Gary and Scavia met a girl, and she turned out to be Martha Wardwood. She became Scavia's new roommate. The dragon, meanwhile, pondered who the killer might be. This is an unusual person, but at the academy, only knights and elders have power. Gary decided to share the interesting news with his friend. He called Ray and told him that the mercenary met in the woods was Martha's mother. As the boy did not react to the news, Gary grabbed him by the shoulders. He tried to pull him away from the person who had fired the arrow. Gary pulled him by the cheek, and Ray justified what he was thinking. About completing the fifth trial, he decided not to talk about death. They were distracted from their discussion by the main knights appearing in the hall and calling for attention. Winfred announced the beginning of the distribution of knights' belts. Those whom he would name should come forward to him on the stage. He called the first name. That man turned out to be Gary Brewboard. He excitedly responded, and at the same moment, Ray rubbed the back of his head. He was pleased that he had been left behind. Gary froze in front of the knight with excitement. Winfred said that after a discussion among the knights, a decision had been made to award the boy a black belt. Gary looked at the belt in disbelief. He couldn't believe he had gotten a black belt and not a white one. The boy held the belt in his hands. He looked at it lost and didn't know what to do. He didn't know anything about it. Ian was next. He was the one who got the white belt. Everyone was very surprised. Scavia, as expected, also got a white belt. She was very happy. Their new friend Martha got a green belt. But Monk, who was standing behind her, was in tears because he also got a black belt. Next, it was Ray's turn to receive his belt. He froze in anticipation as the other students mocked him. The boy ignored the gossip and walked confidently towards the knight. Finally, it was his turn. As he approached the knight, looking at his outstretched hand with the black belt, he froze in disbelief. The knight had said they had decided to award him just like that. Monk shook his acquaintance by the shoulders with tears and could not believe how Ray could get a black belt, even though he passed all the tests very badly. The dragon was examining his black belt and could not understand how it happened. The boys were looking at their black belt and couldn't understand what it meant. From tomorrow, they will have a mentor with the same belt. The knight with the black belt looked at the list and was not thrilled to have 2 red ones. He hoped they wouldn't bring him any trouble. The next day at the training area, all the students went to their dormitories to meet their mentors. Only the 4 black belt students couldn't wait for their mentors. Just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man called out to the students to follow him. Kale raised his hand up in surprise and shouted to eat. The man silently led his students with a quick step, and they also silently tried to keep up with him. Kyle asked his friends if the knight had introduced himself. They suggested he go and ask him. It didn't take him long to do so, so he raised his hand and loudly asked how they should address the knight. Ray was surprised at such directness. The man also, without stopping his quick stride, said they could call him Kay. That name seemed strange, and they decided it wasn't a real name. They ran into Delbert. He gloated that Kay had 2 reds and would probably have a hard time. As they approached Ray, the knight said that he must be proud of his black belt, and if it were up to him, he wouldn't have let him into the academy at all. Ray grinned and said that he was lucky that he didn't make such decisions, which made the knight angry. He was warned against rash actions by a sword that appeared in front of his throat. Kay drew the sword and said that Ray was now a member of his team. He should not be messing with him. The man also said with equanimity that it was not a good idea to treat his students with disdain. It might provoke a conflict between them. Delbert looked at Kay unhappily and said that sooner or later they would find out if the prophecy was false or not. The students who heard about the prophecy immediately asked what it was about. They had never heard of it. The man pretended not to know anything. With a frown, he simply replied that he had never heard of it. They continued on their way and ended up in a room that opened and let out a terrible draft. The students were shocked. Looking around the dark room full of cobwebs and dust, they didn't notice their teacher had disappeared. Looking at each other, they asked where he had gone and when he had managed to vaporize. They were distracted from their search by the sudden slam of the door closing. The boys were plunged into total darkness. Ray activated his ability as usual in difficult situations. He decided to look around with the dragon's gaze. He looked around and couldn't believe that the teacher was untraceable. Gary wondered if he could see the mentor. Just as suddenly as he disappeared, Kay appeared from behind the boy's back and put his hands on them, asking if he was the one they were looking for. There was a look of fear on the faces of the students. The tower where the students' classes would be held was shaken by a loud scream from the boys. The tutor put a candle on the table and warned them that from this day on they would study in total darkness. To sharpen their senses, Gary hurriedly inquired. What he had heard about black belts was that their wearers became killers. The knight did not dissuade him from this. He confirmed that such students had the right qualities for a killing mission. Gary sighed sadly, and wondered sadly why they could not be appreciated. But even then the mentor dispelled his sadness. He said that black belt knights are not simple and have something special, hidden abilities. The mentor put his hand on Gary's shoulder and said that if they were to fight someone head-on, they would be able to do so. Next, he handed out bracelets to everyone. The students looked at the black bands with incomprehension. Kay continued to smoke a cigarette calmly and said that from today they can fight as they like. All the bracelets issued by the mentor displayed the name rating and completed training. Very informative stuff. The boy lay on the bed in the dormitory and looked at his ranking. He was surprised at the 300th place. He also remembered what the mentor had said about them. They changed the ranking after each training session was over, and students could challenge each other to a fight. If the lower-ranked student won, they would receive the rank of the higher-ranked student. Dragon decided to ask his friend how many students were in the class. He replied that there were only 300. This information upset him quite a bit since he had the lowest number. He was the last one. He wondered what Gary's place was. The boy wondered whether to speak or not. At this time, Dan peeked into his watch unauthorized. Grabbing Gary's hand, he was shocked as they were wondering who was in first place, and that person was the blonde boy. Dan, realizing the point, burst into loud laughter as the first and 300th places were in the same room. The girls in the room laughed and called the boys superficial. Martha had a rating of 89 and Scavia had a rating of 3. At that moment, Ian approached Monk and asked him why he was so happy. The boy replied that he didn't and looked at his watch. Monk was happy that his rating was 65th place. He realized that he had to keep working hard and everything would work out. 10 days later, Ray was returning to the academy from a hunting trip. He was upset because the hunt had been unproductive that day. As he approached his room, he heard arguing and opened the door and peeked in to see what was going on. Monk and Gary were arguing. Monk said that he was able to improve his rating thanks to special exercises. Gary thought the exercises were superficial. Ray asked Dan what was going on. Dan didn't know the answer since it was the first time he had seen Monk so agitated. Dan said that the argument was about whether or not special training is useful for a black belt, and he wondered what kind of exercises they were talking about. Turns out black belt stealth assassination and disguise skills. That was something Gary wasn't good at, but Monk excelled at it. Ray looks at Gary and thinks he's right too, because his training is much better than Monk's, but Monk's skills were improving rapidly. The boys continued to shout at each other, bowed down. Scavia decided to intervene in their argument, urging Ray to talk to them. Ray asked the most important question. Why don't they settle this with a duel? Dan slammed his fist on his hand and said that was a great idea. Scavia was shocked. Mong immediately agreed to have a ranking battle. Gary accepted it and decided to see if Monk was really good or if he was just overestimating himself. At this time, many students decided to go to the freshman fight. They heard about what's out there. There's a boy who's ranked high in the rankings. The seniors decided not to watch the fight. For them, there were only rednecks there. One of these students was Sebastian, the youngest son of the knight Delbert. Kale wasted no time and started taking bets on Gary's rising star and Monk's dark horse. It didn't take long for Dan to decide to bet 10 silver coins on Gary. Scavia was outraged by this, and March only smiled embarrassedly. After all, at the opportune moment, she had also bet 5 silver coins, but only on Monk. Deciding to leave it to the guys, Scavia asked Ray if he thought Monk had a chance to win. Ray remained silent. Kale took the role of referee and announced that the long-awaited battle was about to begin. The boys looked at each other holding their wooden swords. While the impromptu arena was in progress, Ray decided to ask Scavia what she thought Gary would win too. Finally, Kale gave the start of the battle. At this point, Gary crouched down and Monk decided to jump in. Gary's very talented and good at different techniques. Among those gathered were the teachers of the academy. But Monk is not easy either. He has been working hard on special training. It's safe to say he's Gary's most suitable opponent right now. Here, the black-haired opponent made a sharp jump that would decide a lot of things. His jump and a strong blow raised a huge column of dust in the air, covering from the audience what was happening. He lowered his blade with all his might, and in his mind he realized that he had the victory. The enemy had been caught. From all sides, the options were heard that he had won, Gary had lost. But at that moment, Gary's burning sword emerged from the pillar of dust. He took the brunt of the blow on his sword, and told the boy he couldn't beat him, so he'd just give up. With his arms crossed over his chest, Ray watched. He realized that Monk's technique had improved a lot, so Gary had to be careful. Stretching, Ray announced that he still thought he would beat Gary. The girls were surprised. Gary stood up and started to advance. Monk decided not to give up and made another jump, to which Gary responded with a sharp swing of his sword. Now it was the light-haired man's turn, and his sword simply snapped in half. The sword fell to the ground with a resounding sound. That resounding sound reverberated in Monk's soul with the collapse of his hopes. The boy fell to his knees in front of his weapon, and he couldn't understand how it happened. Gary Gigi only slightly turned his head to him and said that everything was over. Only Monk did not want to accept such a defeat. He grabbed the rest of his ball, and the ball burst into red flames from the fury of the owner. Ray watched carefully and wondered what kind of tricks were going on. Since the fight should have been over by now, Gary turned his back to his opponent and was leaving the court at the same moment. The boy threw himself at him. The girls saw this and shouted for Gary to turn around, and Monk stopped beside him. Everything happened so fast that Gary did not have time to do anything. Sword froze, literally in a millimeter from his neck. Covered in cold sweat, the boy turned around. He saw that someone had stopped the weapon with his bare hands. The students sitting behind the bleachers looked on in amazement and could not understand how it had happened. The one who had stopped the sword was Ray, who was holding it with his bare hand, with blood dripping from it. He calmly asked Monk to stop. The boy threw his weapon to the ground. He apologized to the red-headed boy, looking at his bleeding hand. Scavia watched all of this. She didn't even have time to realize what was happening. It all happened too fast. But how Ray had moved there, it's unclear. At the same time, Mong apologized for his impulsiveness. He didn't even realize how it happened. Ray said it was just a scratch. It's fine. The gathered students argued about who had won. Gary should have won, but if Monk's kick hadn't been blocked, Gary would have lost. Kyle, meanwhile, was making excuses for the bets, as the results of the fight would be later because a third party had intervened. Kyle was yelled at and even had a bottle thrown at him and said he did it on purpose. The boy tried to calm people down by telling them that he would give the money back to everyone, but it was of little use. Angry people started throwing rocks at the trio of boys. They were talking about how they'd won, and that the redheads should be kicked out of the academy. One of the rocks hit Ray in the head. It was a very tangible blow. It knocked the boy to the ground. Gary came to his aid. At the same moment, Monk was trying to calm the raging crowd. Gary held his friend and tried to see if he was all right. Ray said he was relatively fine, but at the same moment, blood was dripping from his head. The girls were also trying to protect the guys. They were talking about how the game is over, and everyone should stop worrying, but the rocks kept flying. Sebastian's friend picked up a brick. He decided to throw something bigger with a gloating grin. As he started to swing, a pebble flew into his hand, knocking the brick out of his hand. That hurt. It was Mong who threw the rock. He told him not to do it. The rich kid got mad and said he remembered the kid. The people around Ray and what they were saying reminded him of a past situation. The insults he heard were like sticky poison enveloping him and choking him. Anger grew stronger and stronger in the boy. He didn't hear about his friends asking everyone to calm down because they were classmates. The boy was almost to the point. His face was veined and his eyes were filled with darkness. He decided it was all their fault. It was almost irreparable, except that the crowd was abruptly quieted by a call to calm down. As the students watched Knight Winford walk away, some thought he'd made a bet too. Others said it was foolish. The knight approached Ray. Gary said the man had lost a lot of blood and needed medical attention. Ray pushed his hand away and said he could handle it himself. Winford had a drop of sweat on his face from what he was about to report. He said the boy's mom had arrived. The surprise was reflected in the child's eyes and all the anger was gone. In the sunlight stood a woman with a cloak draped over her shoulders. She looked out the window, immersed in her thoughts. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the call of a native voice. Mom. This voice belonged to her son. Abruptly opening the door, Ray could not believe that she had come to the academy. The boy walked up to his mother. She was surprised at how much he had grown since they had not seen each other for a long time. Something annoyed Winford stood with his back to them. Scarlett wanted to find out all about her son, but he asked her not to talk about him. He was surprised she'd come. Perhaps the father was on the mend. Only the news was strange. Scarlett paused to say that the father was gone. This news shocked the boy. He panicked and started screaming that Daddy was dead. But she said that's not what she meant. He left the house and left the village. The knight stood outside the door. He didn't have the heart to tell the truth about the shadow plague. Most of the infected died within a year. Only a few like Jack survived, but still eventually the strongest of the survivors are enslaved by the disease. They become carriers. Scarlett said that one day she accidentally learned that his father had spent the last 10 years fighting the shadow plague. One night, with a candle in her hand, she was walking through the house and heard a sound. When she got to the study, she saw Jack sitting at his desk and he dropped the inkwell on the floor and it made a noise. She was shocked by what she saw. The man covered in patches of sickness turned around at her and mouthed his wife's name. His face was emaciated. Scarlett threw herself around her husband's neck. She hugged him and couldn't believe he was awake. That's wonderful. Jack was getting worse. He said he couldn't, that it's bad. He was losing control again and he asked to be sent to the other side. Scarlett, hugging her husband, couldn't believe he'd said that. Panic and tears of pain in her eyes. The man was asking for closure, for her to help him, but she knelt before him and said she couldn't do it. Abruptly, darkness flooded Jack's eyes. More veins showed on his face and he roared. Scarlett, kneeling in front of her husband, couldn't understand what was happening to him. He was getting worse. Holding his hands to his head, something strange was happening. The man seemed to grow larger and larger. Violet flashes of magic were coming from him. A sudden burst of magic came from him, scattering things all over the place and knocking the woman back. The man screamed. He asked to be destroyed as Scarlett lay surrounded by spaloras of flame. She looked at her husband, crying and only screaming his name. There was nothing she could do in such a situation. Jack was becoming more and more of a shadowy beast. All he could say was, "Kill, kill me." There was almost nothing human left in him. His beloved eyes were dark. Only glimmers of reason allowed him to beg to be spared. The boy listened to his mother's story and realized that she had failed to do so. Scarlet sadly told him that his father had actually left something to him. That's why she thought it was important to give it to him personally. The woman handed her son a sealed letter left by his father. In the letter, the man wrote that he was sorry he couldn't see the boy grow up. He said that from the moment he and his mother first met him, they knew he was special. He knew he had been accepted into the Night Academy and was trying hard. His father was proud of his son. And he was incredibly sorry that he would no longer be able to be there for the boy, but he hoped that he would be able to do whatever he wanted in this life. After reading that, Ray swallowed a viscous spit, and realizing that this was goodbye, he decided that he would find a way to save his father. Lying in his room, Ray thought about what his mother had told him. She said she was going to send a search party to find his father, and whatever he turned into, she'd find him. The boy told her he'd go too, but she told him no. He had too much to do, and his father would be the same way. The boy tried to argue, but his mother said she was glad to see him and let him not worry about his parents. He should do what he had to do. Scarlet hugged her sad son goodbye. He realized that it had been 10 years, but there was nothing he could do. I didn't make the people around him any better. He couldn't avenge the deaths of his people, and he couldn't protect those he wanted to protect. It made him very sad. Gary looked into the room, and when he saw the boy, he was surprised that he was already back. Walking into the room, he asked what Scarlet had told him, how his father was. But Ray remained silent in response to the questions. The boy didn't want to talk about the situation. It was too personal. He just walked away in silence. Gary watched him tensely as he tried to call out to him, but there was no answer. He realized something was wrong with him. Gary stayed in the room and a sudden breeze blew. Something rustled behind him. He turned around and saw a piece of paper that had fallen to the floor. Picking up the letter, Gary began to read. He couldn't believe what was written. Suddenly, a hand appeared from behind his back. The neighbor pulled the letter out. Dan snatched the letter, thinking that since Gary was making a serious face, it must be a love letter from a hottie. Gary cursed at him and asked him to return it. At the noise and word of the love letter, the guys came into the room. Dan kept laughing. Gary, on the other hand, tried to give the letter back. He said it was Ray's letter. The tense boys discussed what they had read. They realized that Ray's father had been infected with the shadow plague. They couldn't believe the kid had had a rough childhood. Monk was the only one who remained silent, but his mind was in turmoil thinking about Ray, the one who had once averted disaster. It was lunchtime. Ray came into the dining room surrounded by those who disliked him, strangers. He was lost in his own thoughts. Suddenly, the girls appeared beside him. They said it was a coincidence that he was also going to dinner and offered to go together. When he got to his room, he was surprised by the next surprise. His things were neatly folded on the bed. He didn't realize what was going on. Dan and Ian came up to him. Dan asked what he thought of Skavia. He informed them that she was the one who had tried to make it all happen. They had terrible acting skills. Analyzing everything that was going on, Ray frowned, thinking that something was wrong. What kind of fly had bitten these guys? The next day, Ray looked at the freshly picked lilies in shock and just didn't understand what was going on. Gary had been caught red-handed. Ray looked at Gary in horror and asked if he had fallen in love with him. Gary shouted in panic that how could this even be possible? In thoughtfulness, Ray asked, what is it that they've been up to lately? Gary decided to admit that it was all to do with the letter. Ray clenched his fists and listened to the boy trying to justify himself. He blamed himself for what had happened, and he didn't mean to do it on purpose. Suddenly, Ray smiled happily and said thank you for taking such good care of him. Gary smiled too. He was glad his friend was no longer angry, but suddenly they were distracted by a noise from the hallway. Someone was saying, hurry up and get him in. Dan and Ian were carrying the battered monk in their arms and the girls were running after him, telling him to get to bed right away. Gary asked what happened. Dan said it was that guy Sebastian. He provoked Monk and got him a ranking fight. Ray couldn't understand how he could get hurt like that. Monk could have conceded defeat and the fight would have been over. How could he get hurt like that? Dan said that Monk was already unconscious and it was too late to admit defeat. But the guy didn't stop and kept hitting him. The boy was put to bed and he called Ray. The boy went over to him and sat next to the bed listening to what he had to tell him. Martha rubbed Monk's wounds and he just apologized for not being able to help these days. Just made his bed. Ray looked at his friend and was filled with anger. Skavia said it looked like his arms and legs were broken. They'd have to call a doctor right away. Ian ran to do it. While everyone was trying to help, Ray silently stood up and walked to leave the room. Gary turned to him and asked him where he was going. A vibe of anger emanated from the dragon. He said he was going for revenge, of course. Gary caught Ray's arm on the way, trying to stop him and asking him not to be impulsive. Ray turned and asked if he wanted to go with him. Gary said he wanted revenge. Ray interrupted him and said there was a rule of an eye for an eye. Skavia came up and said you can't because Sebastian is a member of the Delbert family, the youngest son of a knight, so they can't afford to touch him. Ray kept walking and said that since he started it first, he deserved a beating. Sebastian is not the first time he has done this, and Ray could be expelled for fighting. Ray waved goodbye and said, they are that dumb. As soon as he gets through the official qualifier, he can get his revenge. Skavia didn't know what else to say. Gary screamed in panic, trying to stop his friend. At this time, there were many students on the training ground fighting amongst themselves. Sebastian was among them. The dragon came there, but they tried to stop him, because there was a training session going on, and if he needed something, he should wait. Ray said he was looking for Sebastian, but the guys didn't remember him having a red-headed friend, so they told him to take off. Eric, Sebastian's friend, came up to them and was told that the red-headed guy had broken in and was looking for Sebastian. Eric, poking the boy with his finger, said that Sebastian didn't know the red-headed freak, and his parents should have taught Ray some manners. The dragon said that if this boy was Sebastian, he was needed here, and if not, he was free to go. At that moment, the one they were looking for came up. He was interested in the situation. Delbert's son said that looking at the black belt, he had come to avenge his comrade. Ray, having found the man he was looking for, decided not to get upset about the nonsense. He used his bracelet to challenge Sebastian. He was even surprised by this decision. He laughed and told him to forget about it. Ray decided to tease his rival by asking him if he had chickened out. Sebastian laughed and said that according to the rankings, it was better not to fight. He thought that the black-belted monk was just an ordinary nerd. Waving his hand, he said he didn't mean to hurt him. Maybe that was the natural difference between people from ordinary families and the rich. He turned his back to the red-haired guy, saying he didn't want a repeat of the situation, and asked him to leave. Ray got angry, but Eric decided to intervene, saying that someone like Sebastian might not want to fight him, but he didn't mind. He showed his bracelet and said he was ranked 9th, and if Ray won, maybe others would be willing to accept his challenge. He turned half-turned to Sebastian and asked if he was okay with it. Sebastian replied with a chuckle that he would let him do as he pleased. Ray asked if he could beat this guy if Sebastian would accept his challenge. He replied that you have to defeat your opponent first. Eric drew his sword and told Ray not to cry and look for someone to avenge him, except Ray didn't draw his weapon. Without waiting for the word to start, Eric grabbed his sword and attacked, willing to use the trick Sebastian had taught him today. The rich boy squinted at the whole thing. He was thinking that Eric was as usual in his repertoire of bullying the younger ones. The battle had already begun with the opponent rushing with great speed at the dragon, but he continued to stand still. It was about to strike. The swing was strong, but Ray just took a step back. Eric was shocked at what had happened. He couldn't understand how his opponent was able to dodge the powerful blow. He took another swing, thinking that this was not the end and now he could do everything. He went on and on attacking, but Ray just dodged without answering anything in return. By doing so, he was infuriating his enemy. The dragon was fed up with this flurry and decided to end the fight with a sharp blow of his fist. From the force of the blow, Eric fell to the ground and drew himself across the floor, raising dust. The enemy was broken. He lay with a huge bruise on his cheek and simply did not regain consciousness. The dragon had won. The dragon pointed his finger at his defeated opponent and asked if Sebastian would now accept the challenge. He folded his arms across his chest and asked what was the point of defeating Ray. Ray took 2 medium monster crystals out of his pocket and said if he was defeated, the crystals would go to the winner. Sebastian bounced off the guy in shock and said that if he got those crystals from an unknown source, he would be in trouble. Ray said his parents were mercenaries and he got the crystals from them. Sebastian agreed but decided to add one more condition. Looking at his opponent, he said that the fight would be held in public, so that no one would think he had taken away their powers. Kyle and his friend were walking to the arena, and he asked if he was really going to fight this guy because he was in second place in the rankings. He assumed that Ray was going to bet on his defeat, but that was dangerous since the rich man had no mercy in him. Ray told Kale to do what he told him to do, and accepted Kale's request that he at least break the guy's nose. They struck hand in hand. The friends discussed amongst themselves how long Ray would last, and they hoped he wouldn't get hurt. Skavia had a very different opinion of the situation. Dan tried to tease her that she loved Ray and love blinded her. She got angry and said she didn't like Ray. Only Gary was worried about something else at this point. He wondered if Knight Delbert would be beyond furious after this fight. As the dragon approached the arena, he heard that the children of knights would become knights, and the children of peasants would become peasants. Such was the nature of class inequality. Sebastian looked at his sword with a smile and said that he knew. Since Ray had defeated Eric, it gave some confidence. On 3, Sebastian raised his sword and stood in a fighting stance. On 2, all of Ray's friends froze in suspense. They didn't know what to expect, and on the count of 1, Ray pulled his mask over his face with one hand. He was completely calm. Sebastian took a giant leap and made a big swing with his sword, hoping to win in one blow. His friends watching the fight shouted as a column of dust rose in the arena and nothing could be seen. Ray was the only one who stepped back from the attack as before. The guy was surprised because usually only a few people can last longer than one attack. He didn't notice one detail. For a moment, he realized that he had a wound on his cheek. Wiping the blood from his face, he laughed and said that if things continue at this level, he would never win. The dragon looked at him and asked him why he was talking so much, if he won all his games with his mouth. This expression made Sebastian very angry and he lunged again, hoping to defeat his enemy with this blow, but it was not to be. He missed again and already 2 new wounds were on him. He didn't even realize when it happened. The guys looked at what was happening and wondered why Sebastian looked like he was wounded before he attacked. Gary looked at the scene and wondered when Ray had time to learn something like that. The techniques he used to avoid attacks were similar to what Sir Kay had used in his training. The course of the battle made the rich boy so angry that he decided to use Qui energy. His body and sword were engulfed in blue flames. With a loud cry, he threw himself at his opponent, who also continued to stand still. A blow and missed again. Ray just looked at his opponent who flew past him. Sebastian turned around with a smile and said that he knew this would happen and that Ray should keep doing this. Ray was surprised by this. With his next action, Sebastian abruptly turned around and threw another punch. Only Ray managed to fend him off with his sword this time. The blonde-haired boy kept increasing his pressure. Shouts of encouragement could be heard from all sides. Dan and Ian, they looked on in horror. If he continued to attack at this rate, he would sooner or later get Ray. Gary reassured his friends, said Ray would be all right. Since they didn't understand him, he told them to take a closer look. Sebastian was losing ground. He'd finished attacking and was down on one knee. His body was covered in wounds. He was terrified and couldn't understand how it had happened. Dan asked in shock how it happened. Gary said it was Ray who attacked all the time, not Sebastian. Every time Ray dodged, he did one counterattack. He was constantly taunting Sebastian to finally stop holding back. The angry boy held his wound with his hand. He screamed that even his father had never hit him like that, and he would destroy him. A tremendous rage filled Sebastian's eyes. He shouted loudly and attacked, wanting to destroy his opponent. But the dragon, keeping his composure, struck again with a single blow that struck his enemy in the face. He even cursed his weapon. The guys didn't understand how it happened that Ray seemed so strong and why he wouldn't finish everything now. Gary said he was doing it on purpose, because it's like a beast flirting with its prey. Ray's just torturing him. The guy's face was covered in wounds. It was mangled. He called his enemy a redneck, but then he realized he was just trying to avenge Monk. The next one hit him in the mouth, screaming nasty things. Well, Sebastian still wouldn't calm down. He told Ray not to dare run away. The dragon swung his sword and said that the words of people like Sebastian were nothing to him. The rich kid knew the sadness of defeat and was about to give up, as the sword was coming down on him with great force. Ray, instead of hitting him with the sword, started hitting him on the cheeks. He would not accept defeat easily and he should get what he deserved. Scavia and Gary looked on in shock. They realized that if he continued like this, it would do no good. A man suddenly intervened in the fight that had turned into a beating. He shouted enough. Ray recognized the voice. It was Monk. He asked Ray to stop. The boy came to the fight all rewound up on crutches. The red-haired boy turned around in surprise. Looking at his friend, he didn't understand why Monk wanted him to stop. During the momentary hiccup, Sebastian managed to mutter that he was giving up. People immediately came running towards them. Ray Tarun was declared the winner. Sebastian's friends crowded around him and wanted to take him to the infirmary to stitch up his wounds. But he didn't want that kind of care, spreading his arms to the side and shouting for everyone to get away from him. The boy was covered in wounds, trying to clench his hand into a fist and clenching his teeth. He uttered the hateful name Ray Tarun. On the top floor of the Academy's central building, there was a meeting. Dalbert was talking about not letting Ray get away with it. Kay calmly said he should calm down and look at it from a knight's point of view. Ray didn't break any rules. He also explained that Delbert should not ignore them, to which Delbert replied that if he had ignored the rules, he would have beaten his son's abuser long ago. The elders were gathered around a large table. They were silent as they listened to the argument going on. Someone said that he did it on purpose because he was born a devil. Elder Gibby said that the knight was right. If the prophecy came true, the red-headed boy would destroy all the existing kingdom. One of the elders corrected that the prophecy also said that the boy could be the salvation of the world. Since the child can be both a salvation and a catastrophe, everything must be done carefully and it is not difficult to exorcise him. But it could be a trigger. Elder Daw tried to calm everyone down. Since arguing is pointless, he proposed a vote. Those in favor of the exception should raise their hand. Of course, the first to raise his hand was Delbert, but it was also Elder Gibby and Knight Master Ichiro, the next to vote against the expulsion. Elder Fran Shinoda Hancock, Kay Winford, and Bernardo voted against expulsion. The result of the discussion was that 3 voted in favor and 6 against. In the end, the motion to expel was defeated. Meanwhile, an unsuspecting Ray was lying on the roof of the dormitory, just lounging in the sun, doing nothing. His peace was disturbed. He opened one eye and looked at the person who spoke. It was the girl. She didn't find him in the dormitory, so he might be here. The dragon sat down with a sigh of regret. He just wanted to be alone. A confused Scavia asked if he was thinking about Monk. He looked at her in surprise, asking how she had guessed that. The embarrassed girl didn't even know how to tell him. He thinks differently than others and is not very social himself, so he doesn't understand much. The guy stepped back to the edge of the roof and said it didn't matter. He didn't care. Scavia shouted that wasn't what she meant. He's a good person. Putting her hand to her chest, she said that every time she saw him confused or angry, she wished there was something she could do to help. She wanted him to trust his friends. Ray looked silently at the city with only one word in his head: friends. Suddenly, he turned around. In one motion, he pushed Scavia against the wall and put his hands on either side of her. She was startled. The girl stared at the guy's close-set face. One of his eyes looked like the eye of a beast. The guy continued to stare at her without removing his ability. He asked if she was afraid of him. The girl calmly continued to stare, and said that yes, sometimes she is afraid, but she doesn't think he's a bad person. A smile appeared on her face, and she said that his eye is beautiful and suits him. He should never think of himself as a monster. Out of surprise, even Ray's ability disappeared. He couldn't believe he wasn't considered a monster. The guy abruptly turned away from the uncomprehending girl. Whenever he thinks he sees through the true nature of people, everything changes at once. Looking up at the sky, he realized that he still had a long way to go in understanding humanity. The meeting was over. With a slam of the door, Delbert walked out of the building. He hated the prophecy. He thought he would one day destroy the boy. Suddenly, Elder Gibby called out to him. The knight turned to him and asked what he could do to help. The elder put his hand on the knight's shoulder and said that he knew that all knights must be of noble birth. That is a very interesting point of view. He also added that he would be watching the knight closely, to which Delbert bowed to the elder, doing his bidding. At this time in the dormitory, Scavia was coming down the stairs, and on her way she met a stranger looking for Ray. The girl said Ray was upstairs, looking after the man as he walked away. She thought she looked familiar. Even though Scavia was gone, Ray remained on the roof. When he heard the sound of footsteps, he thought the girl had returned. But it wasn't her. The guy who came in was holding 2 swords, and smiling said he was a little different than the boy thought he was. The boy held out his hand toward Ray and introduced himself. His name is Harry Delbert, a second-year student. Ray glumly turned away from him after muttering his last name. Delbert, a relative then. Harry agreed that yes, Sebastian was his younger brother. Ray wondered if he was here for revenge, except the kid surprised him. He came to thank him. He knows his brother is a bit of a freak and his manners are a little lame. Ray turned away from the blonde guy even though he said it was only a matter of time before his brother was defeated. Ray wanted to leave. Only at that moment Harry held out his sword to Ray. Even though he couldn't participate in ranking battles between courses, he wanted to teach him a lesson. After all, if the younger brother is defeated, the older brother can't stay away. Ray silently drew his sword. He laughed as he held the weapon, for Harry had been blathering on about how this wasn't about revenge. It turned out the boy just wanted to see his opponent's strength. Standing on opposite sides of each other, Harry said he was ready to see what Ray was capable of. The dragon took a stand, and although he didn't usually like to take the initiative with this guy, it was a different matter. He decided to make an exception for him. Ray leapt up to attack his opponent. But not everything was easy. His opponent took the blow on his sword with a calm smile. He didn't even move. There was an energy in his Kui clinic as he coldly stared at his enemy. This startled Ray. The dragon leapt away from the attack. The boy was surprised that he made the right decision. From the exertion, drops of sweat appeared on the boy's face. He had a strange sensation. Usually the opponent's sword would break at such a blow. The dragon changed the grip on the sword. He realized that this time his sword might break first. Harry realized that Ray didn't know how to use chi energy. The red-headed boy rushed to attack. If you can't win by force, you'll have to rely on the skills of the Black Belt Knights. The speed of his attacks even made his opponent stagger. He recognized it was a good fight, except he was frustrated as he took and deflected the blows with his sword. That seemed to be all Ray could show at the moment. There were drops of sweat on the guy's face. He didn't understand how his attack didn't work. It was Harry's turn to attack. He swung his sword and said to look closely at what he was about to do. His strike was so powerful that Ray took the attack on his sword and flew off to the side. Using his weapon and breaking with his feet, he was able to stop. At the same time, he coughed. Harry looked at his opponent frustrated. He exhaled and said that it was over for today. The boy held onto his sword and stopped. His opponent, he had a question. Wiping the blood from his lips, he asked in the second year he was ranked first. The boy smilingly said that such a thing was impossible, and in the second year he was 50th in the ranking. Ray looked at the departing guy with fear and incomprehension. He couldn't believe that he was ranked so high. As he left, Harry suggested that they meet again when Ray had learned how to use chi energy well. The dragon looked at his hand and wondered if it was possible to become strong, just by learning how to wield chi. The elders were told that things were not going well on the border. Knights were disappearing without a trace, but that wasn't all the problem. There are rumors of a dark guild in the academy. The elder, standing with his back to the knight, said it was unfortunately not a rumor. Winford suggested that we prepare the students and take some action. The elder turned to his interlocutor and ordered the 5 children to be brought to him. It was time for them to learn about their mission. At this time, Ray was sitting on the roof and tried to concentrate the Qi energy in his body for the umpteenth time. Suddenly waking up from his meditation, he looked around and realized that it was raining and that it was time to finish and leave. But his attention was attracted by what was happening downstairs. He saw a man walking surrounded by strangers. Many people hidden by clothes and masks held blades in their hands. They stood on the rooftops watching their target. It was a stealth attack. Activating his dragon eye, the boy looked at the attackers. They were glowing with purple flames. It was a shadow plague. The boy pulled his hood over his head and frowned at them. Could they have anything to do with his father? The elder, going about his business, stopped. His path was blocked by men informing him that this was where his journey would end. The elder calmly stopped and admitted that the rumors about the guild infiltrating the academy were true. The man looked around. There were 4 attackers on one he hadn't trained for a long time, and it wouldn't be easy for him. The boy decided to intervene. He jumped sharply over the enemies and offered to level up a bit. 2 against 4 would definitely be better. The elder threw off his cloak and realized that he was being helped by a student of the academy, and he was glad that he had decided to participate as well. The powerful energy emanating from the elder shocked the attackers. He asked Ray to hold the 2 back a bit while he dealt with his enemies. Ray looked at his ally half-turned and marveled that the old man had such power. It was astounding. The enemies rushed to the attack and didn't have time to think. Ray dodged the attack but noticed that their condition was different from his father's. They are still conscious. The attackers didn't keep up with the boy's speed and he dodged the attacks with a jump. As soon as he landed on the ground, he immediately grabbed his sword and tried to strike from the back of his opponent. But he was unlucky. His enemy's partner put his blade out ahead of him and knocked Ray's sword away. The dragon jumped away from his enemies, but they realized that he doesn't know how to use chi energy. So he's a non-professional, they'll have an easier time of it. The boy, as usual, clamped the hilt of his sword in his mouth, thinking that they could see through him. The child's actions were strange to the attackers. They didn't understand what he took the sword in his mouth for, or what the movement was. The dragon got on all fours. Ray's actions gave him more agility. He easily dodged the attackers. They realized that he moved very well and would not be easy to catch. The boy jumped away from his enemies on the roof. They decided to catch up with him so he couldn't get far. Only their plan was not essential, but to realize one of their partners behind fell unconscious. They turned and saw the elder bare-chested. He was holding their enemy on one shoulder with his foot on the other. He was watching the boy's talents. Ray looked on in shock as he continued to hold his sword in his teeth. His enemies froze and couldn't figure out what to do next. One of the enemies offered to use the sword, but he was stopped, saying he had to get rid of the small one first. The boy, who was watching everything that was happening, realized that he was worried for nothing, and now he had a chance to use it. He decided to take a risk. Gathering all his strength, he jumped on his enemies. He had a chance to test his strength in a real battle. As he jumped, the boy moved by pushing away from his enemies. They couldn't hit him, which made them angry. His four limbs gave him great power. He would bump into the walls of houses and laugh at the fact that they couldn't hit him. Here was another attempted attack, and the boy lost his sword in the fight. Turning to his enemies and seeing his loss, he was a little upset. The next attack, the blade streaked through the air across his face, and the enemy decided to see how he would now get out of the situation. The elder, watching the situation, decided to give a hint. He told the boy to grab the enemy's hand. The disciple did so. His next action was to turn around and throw the attacker behind his back. The boy followed the commands exactly, and he got a perfect throw. While the boy was dealing with his opponent, the elder briefly decided to strike at the remaining enemy. The blow was so strong that his opponent tumbled in the air. But he didn't just fall to the ground. He crashed into a nearby house while making a sound like something exploded. The fighting Ray and his opponent even froze in shock. Looking at the elder's strength, they were distracted from further fighting by shouts. The guards were rushing towards them. The elder realized that it looked like the knights had arrived. The enemies had decided to avoid a fight. Ray wanted to rush after them, but the elder said to leave them alone and not pursue them. The next surprise was the dragon's notification that a bounty had been received. It was the third ability, Mana Attraction. While Ray looked on in shock at the ability that had appeared, the knights asked the elder if everything was all right. He gave the order to find the attacking humans. While the knights decided amongst themselves who would do what, the elder thanked Ray. The boy decided to ask why these men attacked the man. The elder smilingly said that it was nothing special, and in a long life you are bound to meet strange people. He seemed to be avoiding the subject. The man put a hand on the boy's shoulder and advised him to join a martial arts club as a sophomore and learn to control chi. After saying all that, the man abruptly used the ability and disappeared. Ray couldn't even believe that he'd just run off with some strange old man. Back at the dormitory, Winfred left on the way to Ray's room and said that Elder Daw wanted to see him. Ray asked about the elder in surprise. He thought about how he couldn't have been discovered so quickly. The elder stared out the window in silence. He was deep in thought about the situation. His thoughts were interrupted by the notification that the knight had brought all 5 boys. Ray was surprised that they were all here together. The old man thanked the students for their time. Many questions came from the students about what he wanted them to do and if they would be given a mission. He stopped them. Young people are quite impatient. He said they would get tired of listening to long explanations, so he would be brief. He called them because of the prophecy. Rai crossed his arms over his chest and asked what prophecy they were talking about. It was not the first time he had heard of it. 10 years ago, a divine prophecy was announced. It said that a red-haired boy would save the earth. The boys were surprised. One Kale said excitedly that there was a possibility that the boy from the prophecy could be one of them. The elder continued that they were constantly sending knights out on search missions, and they had found 10 children matching the description of the prophecy. The dragon was surprised at this number. It was a lot of children. Kale spread his hands apart and asked why only 5 were here. It turned out the others had awakened magical abilities. Ray realized that Amy probably knew those kids. He also wondered how she was doing now. The old man said the child from the prophecy could be one of them, or all 5 of them. That's why he called them. Long ago, 5 dragon knights saved the continent from disaster. They fought monsters, built an academy, and protected the common people. And now the task of preserving the legacy falls to the students. They will have to try hard. In the future, in addition to the basic training and training for various belts, they will have to undergo a lot of additional training. All 5 children would become the new Dragon Knights of Orion Academy. The joyful students were returning to the dormitory. They were discussing the news that they could become saviors. Ray decided to ask Ian a question. He asked if his hair had been red since birth. It turned out that they all did, and that's why they had a lot of problems as children. The boy had already asked the others if red was a natural color for his hair, but it wasn't. It was black in the beginning. The boy didn't think he should be counted among the so-called Dragon Knights, and he wasn't sure if the elder was telling the truth. At this point, Winfred asked indignantly why the elder had revealed the contents of the prophecy to the children. They are only children after all. They have enough to worry about. The elder said that some knowledge is given a certain amount of time to appear to the light. The knight had to accept this, and the answer he bowed to the elder as a sign of farewell. The dragon sat in the library and read a book about the modern world. It turns out that dragons are considered a symbol of evil, and few people believe in their existence. But there are those who believe that in the ancient world there was no shadow epidemic because dragons were considered guardians of the earth. In most sources, all the stories of the Dragon Knight tell about the same events differently. But he found a very special book. It told about the dragon knights themselves, and it also mentioned divine guidance. Since writing books related to gods is taboo for humans, he couldn't find more information. He heard that the god existed in the capital of the kingdom of Allure. If it wasn't for the ban on leaving the academy until he passed the knight training, he would have gone to talk to this god. He would want to know why he had turned him human. These thoughts occupied him all the time during training. And so the year at the academy flew by. It was nearing the end of the hard training and the busy hunting season. The next day, they were already starting their second year of training. Ray was awakened by something before that day. An indistinct noise echoed in the room. He heard Gary stirring and talking in his sleep. He was having nightmares. He went over to the boy and woke him up. He asked what Ray was doing next to him in his bed. The dragon said he woke up to mumbling, "It's all right." Gary turned away, laughing harshly and saying he was just having a nightmare and it's okay. They should go back to sleep and get up early for the ceremony. The boy sat on the bed and wondered what Gary had dreamed that had brought him to this state. He's stubborn and won't answer for himself. In the morning going to practice, Ray was surprised at Gary's appearance. He had dark circles under his eyes. He was exhausted. It looked like the nightmare had been very frightening. On the way they met Scavia. She said hello and asked if they had decided which club they wanted to join. Scavia grudgingly said that Ray had to listen to lectures, and all the second-year students had to choose a club of interest. In this club, they would receive extra training. Ray asked the girl if she had chosen where she would go. Scavia said you want to go to the medicine club, Gary to the fencing club. Only Ray was surprised to learn that everyone had already made up their minds. It got him thinking. Someone had already told him to join a club. Which club was it? It was the martial arts club that the elder had advised him to join. Ray walked towards the clubhouse and remembered which club he had been told about. He decided that he would just take a look because he didn't want to join any club. The new skill had no value to him in terms of magic. Maybe when he absorbs the crystal monsters, something will change. The battle with Sebastian attracted a lot of attention, and he couldn't move around freely. He was constantly being urged to fight. Finally, finding the building he wanted, he realized it was on the outskirts of nowhere. Looking at the shabby appearance of the building, he realized that it was somehow too unpresentable looking. Opening the door to peek inside, he asked if anyone was there. Warned him he was coming in. There was no one at all at the entrance. He walked around almost every building and finally found someone. He told the man he was here to join a martial arts club. There was a man sitting with his back to him. He was silent. Ray couldn't even smell him. Maybe this man is dead. To see if he was right or wrong, he decided to touch the sitting man, and the unexpected happened. The man grabbed his arm. It shocked Ray. It all happened too fast. The next thing the old man did, he used the grip to throw Ray across his back to the floor. The impact was palpable. The man looked at the boy in anger and asked who dared to invade his domain. Ray said coming to the martial arts club. The dragon looked at the man and said that he had invited him himself. The man saw the child's red hair and was surprised. He finally remembered that this was the same student who had come to his rescue the other day. Ray called him an old man who attacks strangers. The man explained that he's been around too many strange people lately, so he's nervous. He's glad the boy took his advice. The man offered to sit next to him and told Ray that he would be his apprentice. The boy was screwed and wouldn't be able to skip class. At this time, the man told him that there's an expression. When fists and swords meet, the sword swarms the fist. When chi is concentrated in the fist, the sword breaks. Or only if both the sword and the fist are energized with chi will the sword win. But only those who don't understand the true nature of martial arts think so. When Ray learns the old man's skill, he'll realize that the best weapon is the hands. That's what the man explained to him. The boy took advantage of the situation and asked who had attacked him. Recently, it seemed that it was people from the Dark Guild, and more information he would learn in his second year. The Dark Guild is an extremist organization seeking to destroy the kingdom of Allure. Dragon realized that the aura of the Dark Guild definitely had something to do with the Shadow Plague. Perhaps this would help his father. Ray asked why they were after the old man. The man replied that some things were better kept secret, but since he was indebted to the boy, he decided to reveal a little secret. The old man unbuttoned his robe and said the thing is that he is Fong, one of the 6 elders of the academy. The dragon looked at him with his mouth open, and despite his advanced age, he still had confidence in his muscles. So he offered the dragon Knight to show what kind of dough he was made of. The boy took a fighting stance. He realized that the old man seemed aware of his capabilities. He would do his best. As he began his punch, the boy realized that since he was facing the elder, he could not hold back his strength. The blow was aimed at his stomach, but his opponent didn't even move. But the force of the blow surprised the elder quite a bit. It was unexpected. A drop of sweat appeared on the boy's face, and he realized in amazement that the old man's body was very hard, as if he had hit a steel plate. The old man looked at him in bewilderment and asked if he had put chi into the blow. The boy replied that he had not. Delight stirred in the old man's eyes. He realized that his student had simply animal strength and had incredible potential in him. He patted the boy on the shoulder and told him to get to work. Ray didn't even realize when he had agreed to join the club. The teacher sat the student in front of him and explained that the target was the energy emanating from the body. He touched the boy's back with the palm of his hand. He decided to infuse some of his chi into the student's body. He must use an external source of force to drive his power. The boy drank in the energy. He felt it was very warm. It turned out it was possible to train in this way. Suddenly, there was a thud behind him. He turned around and saw his mentor unconscious. A notification that the mana skill had been activated appeared in front of him. He was shocked that he was notified now. He rushed to brace the old man without realizing what had happened to him. If he was going to die, he wouldn't get away with it. Putting his ear to his mentor's chest, he checked for a heartbeat. It was beating. Sitting on the floor next to his teacher, he had the feeling that he had fallen because he was suddenly exhausted. The boy still didn't understand what had happened. He looked at his mana scale. It was full. Could it be that the skill was activated because he was being infused with chi energy? 5 minutes passed. The mentor still hadn't woken up. The boy thought that even in his sleep, he didn't look like a good person. After 10 minutes, he decided not to wait for the old man to wake up anymore. He decided to test the chi himself. His patience is enough for 10 minutes. Activating the dragon skill, he looked around. He was able to see streams of ki and concentrate them with his consciousness. He endeavored to focus and form them, as well as to fill up the ki of the Dantian. Many threads of power formed around him. Everything was ready. Now it was necessary to spread it throughout his body. Opening his eyes, the boy was surprised. As soon as it came into motion, it immediately disappeared. The old man was unconscious and the boy continued to meditate. He decided to try this action again. The chi energy was gathering into a huge ball, invisible to the human eye. From the boy's exertion, drops of sweat came out. He didn't understand what was happening. Why the flow of chi was so unstable? Maybe it wasn't enough. Immersing himself again, he decided to add more energy. Everything around him was on fire. He added more and more power. Opening his eyes, he realized that he was getting hurt. He was slowly losing control. The pain was so intense that the boy screamed. Everything around him was ablaze with released energy. At the boy's scream, the old man opened his eyes. The scream was so powerful that he regained consciousness. He abruptly sat down on the floor looking at what his student was doing. The boy's actions shocked the teacher. The mentor put his hand on his back and ordered him not to move, not to do anything else. With all possible strength, the teacher held the boy's back with his other hand, pulling away the chi energy gathering in his fist. With his next action, he quickly released all the energy into the street so that the boy wouldn't get hurt. Releasing the lump of chi energy into the nearby building, there was a huge explosion. The elder looked at the street and realized that just the kui withdrawn from his disciple had a surprisingly destructive power. The boy was almost killed. Only Ray could no longer hear what he was saying. He did not understand what happened and abruptly lost consciousness. As he began to regain consciousness, he heard echoes of the conversation. They were saying that his condition was like a mana disease, although it was strange because he was not a mage. They said that his condition had already returned to normal. He should be able to open his eyes soon. Skavia and Kale were standing nearby. They were overjoyed that their friend was awake. Ray asked where he was. They told him he was in the hospital. Everyone was shocked when the old man brought him here in a hurry. Kale said the old man even got the dean to come and see the boy in person, when Ray only had time to introduce such a man. Kale was talking very loudly, so Skavia asked him to be quieter. Skavia also said that the old man was very worried. Ray said it was an old man from the martial arts club, but he was interested in something else. Why Kale was also in this place? Kale got embarrassed and said because he joined the medicine club too. It had always interested him and he decided not to miss the opportunity. Suddenly, the curtain was pulled back by Gary. He looked terrible. Said he was just dying from all the noise going on around him. Ray was surprised to see him. The boy leaned back tiredly on the bed and said the training had worn him down. He wanted to rest, but Kale was in his way, trying to figure out Gary's illness. Finally recovered, the dragon decided to return to the club. As he approached, he called out to the old man, wanting to know if he was there or not. He received a very unexpected welcome. The old man slapped him on the back and yelled at him for having the nerve to come back. The boy holding the bump on his head asked to be angry, but the old man told him off further. After all, if he wasn't there, the boy would be dead by now. With a sudden change of heart, he told him to sit down and continued. There was no denying he was impressed by how much chi he himself could muster in one day. Ray thought he had talent, but the old man said not to flatter himself, and told him to practice concentrating on controlling his own chi. It should be the size of a fist, no more, no less. Ray decided to start with simple exercises. After 5 days, he could use Kui to strengthen any part of his body. For the next few days, he tried to move Kui to where it was needed at double the speed. The next day, the disciples gathered in front of the gate. This was their first expedition after moving to the second year. The students listened attentively to their teacher's explanation. There are 3 areas of hunting grounds near the academy. Monster crystals could be obtained there. Lancey warned that there were places where monsters were breeding, and if the students wanted to stay alive, they should not go there. The 3 teams each went to their assigned areas, then they would switch. That way they can study as many monsters as possible. According to the information, the hunting grounds where the students are now is called the Insect Forest. While everyone was discussing the expedition, Ray looked at his friend. He realized that Gary was still not back to normal and didn't look good. The first monster appeared, Skavia ordered them to get ready. Dan said it was just a ladybug and not to be nervous. Except Kale shouted that no ordinary ladybug was bigger than a human head. Martha disarmed the ladybug, but Scavia warned that although they may look weak, they often move in swarms. She was right. Many ladybugs flew from the forest to the students. Kale hated the bugs and swung his sword from side to side in a frenzy. Next to him, Dan was fighting. The beetles were very fast. During the battle, Scavia saw Ray standing behind her with his bare hands. She told him to be careful, not noticing that he had concentrated chi. One clear strike and he tore his opponent apart without even breaking a sweat. Kale was surprised that Ray had learned to control his chi. Ray offered to see what the results of their training were. Suddenly, Monk's shout interfered with the clamor of battle, calling for Gary. Ray was startled to see what was happening. Something went very wrong and one of the monsters, a huge ant, bit into Gary's arm with its jaws. Ian was the first to react. He jumped up and with a swing of his sword cut the monster down. Immediately, he went over to Gary and began to help him. Scavia ran towards them at that moment. Gary sat surrounded by the guys who were looking at his wound. He apologized to them for making everyone worry. The wound was shallow. Ray frowned at his friend. He didn't understand what was going on with Gary. He didn't look like himself. The monster was weak. He shouldn't have been hurt by it. While Scavia was using magic to treat the boy's wound, Ray decided he'd have to find out what happened at Gary's. The boys watched the girl work. It turns out that ki can be used not only to strengthen the body, but also to accelerate cell growth. Use it to heal. When the regeneration was complete, Scavia put a bandage on Gary's arm. The students continued their battles. Dan only found one weak monster crystal. He said he didn't have enough to collect. Ray asked what this was about. The guy asked Ray in surprise with what place he was listening to the instruction. 1/10 of the crystals harvested from the hunting grounds will be taken as a levy. If there are fewer crystals, there is no need to give anything back. The academy makes money from these trips. The guys had to figure out how to handle everything because Lancey was a tough nut to crack. Ray looked at his clue and pondered the crystals. 10 or less. With the sunset, the guys were heading back to the starting point. Their mission was over. At the entrance to the training area, everyone handed over the crystals they had received. Ray was the last to go. Lancey was outraged the guy was last, so he only gave him 5 small crystals. That can't be right. He ordered the gear off. Ray complied, leaving only his underwear on. The knight found nothing. He was angry and thought Ray had hidden the crystals in the mountains. Ray dressed and left to say goodbye, saying if he found anything he could keep it. Lancey warned him that he would be in big trouble. Monk asked in surprise how Ray had managed to pull it off. The boy laughed and said it was a secret. Ray had realized some time ago that when crystals are transferred into the system, the real crystal turns into ordinary stone. While others had to dig through the remnants of the monster, the only thing was to control that not all the crystals were absorbed. In addition, once a monster crystal got into the system, it could not be retrieved. The boy didn't realize that the system would directly absorb the higher monster crystals. He didn't notice Gary frowning as he passed. The boy walked past his friend, thinking that he would have to be more careful from now on. If Delbert found out about this, he would never let him go. Gary lagged behind the others. He was silently looking at something on the ground. Ray turned to him and asked him what was wrong. Maybe he had lost something. The dragon walked over to his blonde-haired friend, but he stood like that with his head down. He touched his shoulder and tried calling out again. No emotion was reflected on the boy's face. He kept talking about some red gate he had to open. Ray asked what the idea of a gate was. Gary abruptly fell to his knees with tears in his eyes and started screaming, "No, don't." The guy rushed to comfort his friend, not understanding what is happening to him, what caused the situation. The guys who had gone ahead noticed that there were 2 missing. It was strange because they had just been behind. Monk turned around and said he would go look for them. Scavia suggested we all go together. But the boy said he was fine and would be back soon. He used his powers and ran ahead. When he got to the forest, he asked what was wrong with them. The others had long gone on ahead. Concerned, Ray pointed to Gary and said he was crazy about something. He keeps saying one thing all the time, that he has to go to the Red Gate. The exertion made Monk break out in a trickle of sweat. He asked the Red Gate about this place Gary kept telling him about. The Red Gate closed the prison of Orient Academy, a place that was off limits to students. The dragon had a strange dream. He was in almost total darkness where the center of everything was a bright star. He didn't realize what this place was. The boy had gained a body and he was standing in front of a ball that said that the boy was finally here. Whose voice it was unclear. The voice kept saying, "Find me and I'll tell you the secret and all the secrets. About you and about this world." The boy did not understand who it was and what secrets it was talking about. Suddenly the lead changed. An orb glowed from an open red gate. Ray ran towards this orb, but the gate suddenly slammed shut. He asked not to run and waited for it. He pulled the Roki towards him. Suddenly, Ray woke up with his arms outstretched. He didn't even immediately realize it was a dream. It was so realistic. Ray sat up on the bed and looked at his sleeping friend. He kept talking about the red gate. He realized he had seen them too. When they were in the woods, Monk offered to take Gary to the medical unit for a checkup. Ray asked what the boy had dreamed, but he couldn't remember anything. He said he happened to pass by the red gate that day and looked at it briefly. And then he began to have nightmares every night, which he could not remember when he woke up. In the nightmares, he felt nothing but sheer terror. He also said that he felt as if there was someone behind that gate calling him more and more every day. He wanted to go and see who it was. But he was told it was a prison, and if he went in there, he'd be expelled. Except the boy had no other choice. Otherwise, the voice would just drive him crazy. Ray said the key to the situation was not to get caught. Monk yelled that it wasn't just about expulsion, but you could die in there. Ray said if they used their skills, they could just sneak in at night. And the question is whether Monk would go with them. Gary said not to piss Monk off. He also added that Monk is the best at sneaking around and he would be useful there. But Gary would feel bad about making him follow him. Monk gave in and agreed to go too. That way he would repay his debt from the past duel. Ray was glad he agreed. Lying in bed, Ray realized that the red gate was the source of Gary's nightmare, and now he was dreaming about it too. Could it be where all the secrets of the world are kept? Late the next night outside the prison, the gate was guarded by vigilant guards. The boys sat in full ammunition in the bushes so as not to be seen by the guards. The only thing they didn't worry about was being seen by Gary. If the Black Belt Knights were there, they wouldn't be able to get in. But the boy had noticed that every Tuesday between 10 and 11, they were replaced by White Belt Knights. That would be their chance to get in. Looks like Gary's been trying to get in for a while, but why was it that the guards were changing at this particular time, though it was to their advantage? The dragon activated his skill and saw that it was pitch black below. He could not see what was down there. He was also surprised that the prison was set up underground. That's a little alarming. It was time for the General Assembly. The boys watched the changing of the guards sitting behind the barrels. One of the boys was careless and made some noise, and the knights looked around to see if anyone was there. But they decided not to check and thought it was just a hunch. They had to hurry because the elder was waiting for us. Monk was hiding around the corner from them. Gary and Ray stayed behind the barrels and watched the knights leave. Everything was going according to plan. They were about to go, but an unplanned thing happened. Suddenly, someone grabbed one of the boys by the arm and asked what they were going to do. The boys turned back in shock. They didn't immediately realize what had happened. They were caught by a third-year black belt student, Jasmine. She asked what she was doing here. Only she's the one who should be asking them that. She was practicing nearby and saw them sneaking in. Looking at them with suspicion, she asked if they were going to break in here. Gary mumbled and tried to justify himself. But suddenly there was a noise from the opposite side. Barrels were sprinkled there. The knights were not happy that it was their shift that something was happening. While the knights went off to fix the scattered stuff, Ray reported that Monk was on his way and they needed to hurry as well. Jasmine seemed surprised but also delighted that they had gone crazy, and was shocked that they even got Monk involved. It was all against the rules. Dragon apologized and said that now that she had clocked them, they would have to do it. She thought the boys were bullying her, while she was distracted by the red-headed one. Gary's lightning-fast hand on her neck shut her down. She's a talker, and he had to do it. Ray had to throw her on his shoulder. Gary offered to leave her where she was, but if she woke up, she'd tell all, and they'd be in trouble. The boys walked over to the gate where Monk was poking around with the door closed. The guards should have been back by now. What was taking him so long? Monk is working by hand and asked them to be patient and not to push him, so he doesn't make a mistake anywhere, and so it is done. While the knights were indignantly restoring everything, they didn't see the apprentices slipping through the gate behind them. What they didn't know was that all this time, one of the knights was watching them, hidden in the trees. That knight was the assassin who had killed the third examiner. He was glad that this time the red-headed one was going to his own death. As he put on his helmet, he smiled sarcastically, thinking that Lord Gibby would be pleased. The apprentices finally entered the prison. There were no windows. There were no light sources, so it was lucky that Gary had taken a lighting stone. Looking around, Monk saw that Jasmine was with them. He was shocked. Gary told him that she had spotted them, so he had to take her with him. Ray put the girl on the floor and she began to regain consciousness. Monk rushed over to see if she was okay. Jasmine started yelling at Gary since he had knocked out the older girl and she was going to bail him out. Gary tried to explain to her that they had no choice. Except Ray calmly said that she could report it and keep yelling, but when the guards noticed them, they'd all be kicked out of the academy. Ray went ahead and the guys kept explaining that since they had snuck in, they should look around and leave. Isn't she curious about what's in here? The girl agreed with these arguments and followed Ray with a frown. She was still frustrated. The girl accepted it and said she didn't care if they got in trouble, but since she was older, it would lead them, and they should obey her. They went down the stairs lower and lower. Ahead of them was Jasmine. Gary was the last one to close the chain. While they were going down, Monk said that even though it was a prison, it was like there were no prisoners. They didn't meet anyone on the way down. Gary said he didn't know anything about it. He's never heard of any prisoners being brought in, and he didn't know why they were guarded so tightly. Confused, Jasmine coughed and said she thought they knew about the place and had come to find out what was really going on. They asked if she had heard any rumors. She said that yes, this place is called a prison, and legend has it that there are not real prisoners in it. Some say the academy calls it a prison to hide what they don't want to expose, and when it comes out, it's going to be a huge shock to everyone. A pensive Ray said they still don't know what's really going on here. A frowning Jasmine looked at him and said that in the end it was all just a story. A legend. No one had ever been inside. Suddenly a strong wind hit the boys, making them sway. With the wind came a strong stench. Ray covered his nose with his hand and heard a noise coming from downstairs. Monk looked down and said that since they were in the middle of it, he suggested that they go back. He didn't want to go any further. Jasmine was frightened and agreed. But a sweaty and tense Gary said he should go down at least to find out what he was dreaming about. He didn't care. Finally, they reached the bottom and a new disappointment awaited them. There was another door. The girl walked closer to the door and touching it, she didn't realize what it was made of. The door seemed very old. Gary couldn't stand it. and opened the door again, soaked his hands with ki, and started pushing it hard. Monk behind him said it wasn't a good idea, but Gary said not to stand there, but to help. Ray, who was standing behind the guys, activated his ability and watched the guys push her. He activated the dragon skill, but even with it, he couldn't see what was inside. This place must have been enchanted with high-level magic. Continuing to push, Jasmine said that the door was impossible to unlock. It's just intentionally locked. Most likely there's something important behind this door. Gary shouted in panic that he was not coming back, and Ray owed it to him to help him. The dragon rushed to his friend's aid. Just as he touched the door, a notification popped up in front of him, asking him whether to open the door or not. He was surprised. Choosing yes, he heard the gears turning in the door. The guys were surprised by the door opening. Monk asked how Ray did it, but he said he didn't know, and he just didn't touch it, and it opened. The magic crystal only illuminates a small part of what is in front of the eyes. It is almost impossible to see what is inside. They looked ahead, and fear of the unknown instantly took over the group of children. They walked forward and did not notice that they were surrounded by many bones. Suddenly, there was a crunching sound. Jasmine was startled and rushed into Ray's arms. Gary said he had just stepped on something. The boy lit up the road in front of him, and everyone saw the skeleton of a dragon-like beast. But Ray thought dragons don't just die. The boy said that it looked like they were getting closer to the goal, and Jasmine said that finally they would be able to get out. Finally, they reached a large room where there were cages, and there were many of them like a mosquito's nest. They were all empty. As they approached one of the cages, Monk looked at the broken bars and said he was more concerned that whoever was in there seemed to have escaped. So maybe it was time for them to go back. The girl agreed. If there are monster fights here, then the owner of this place is not an ordinary person. If they all escaped, then it's even more dangerous here. Ray called out to his friend before the knights came back. We should go back, before they change. But it was as if Gary wasn't listening. He kept walking forward, thinking Ray didn't understand him. Going to the cages, he said that to get to the truth, they just needed to go a little further forward. Ray ran after him, but Gary walked forward as if in a trance and didn't hear his friend's voice. Gary kept walking, and he was already behind the bars of the cage. He still didn't hear his friend continue to call him. The dragon realized that Gary was delirious, and then suddenly a strange, incomprehensible stench came over them again. But it wasn't enough of a stench. Ray closed his hands and saw a strange thing coming at him from the depths of the cave. With great force, Gary flew out of the cave and hit his back hard against the wall and lost consciousness. As the guys rushed to help the boy, Ray put his sword in front of him. He saw the aura of his attacker, and it was bad. The boy looked at the monster coming at them. It was huge. It was a horrible sight. Jasmine turned to look and froze in horror at what she saw. It was a king-level monster. A giant with the body of a man came out at them, the head of a bull. It was a lost cow god. Bloodlust burned in the god's scarlet eyes. As he emerged from the cave, he let out a loud roar. It was so powerful and imbued with ki energy that it simply scattered the disciples in different directions. The monster looked around and saw Jasmine lying nearby. He picked his next target. She was yelled to get away from the giant, but her legs wouldn't listen and she sat down frozen in fear. The monster grabbed her with his huge clawed hand and squeezed her with such force that the girl screamed. But Monk came to her aid. He struck the monster's paw with his blades, and the girl fell out of the grip. Monk dodged from the clumsy giant and more wounded him with his blades. Jumping away from the monster, Monk rushed to Jasmine trying to lift her up, or else irreparable things would happen. There was no more time to wait. He grabbed the girl and threw her arm over his shoulder. He had to run because the monster was launching a magical attack. The cow god was gathering energy around him. His mouth was burning a kedron. It was the center of mana collection. Blue lightning flickered around its body. A wounded Jasmine couldn't move fast enough. Monk helped her, but the monster began to advance on them. Ray rushed in to cut them off. There was a sudden explosion. The giant was enveloped in a blast of dust that hid what was happening from the boys. But from the explosion, the wind rose and its force was such that it threw Monk and Jasmine aside. Gory woke up and sat against the rock, not understanding what the monster was and what had happened to Monk and the others. Ray fought the monster with his sword while his shadow wolf was covering the uncomprehending boys with its huge body. The boys strenuously resisted the god. He said there was no time to explain why the wolf was helping them. All they need to know is that he is on their side. Dragon ordered his wolf named Noel to take Jasmine to a safer place first. Monk was surprised that the monster obeyed orders. Ray ordered Monk to hold his breath, and when Ray grabbed the monster, he should stab it with his knives. Monk didn't believe it was possible. Except Ray asked him to trust him, and he infused his entire body and sword with chi energy. Monk silently watched what was happening. The boy holding his sword at the ready heard his friend accept his plan. The monster didn't wait to be attacked and struck Ray with its horned head. He dropped his weapon. But the boy was not confused. He grabbed the rock with his chi-filled hands. The monster was incredibly strong. With all his strength, the bull slammed the boy, holding him into the rock. But the dragon didn't give up. He held him without letting him escape, and shouted to Monk to launch his attack. The boy heard the order and with his blades pointed at the monster's head, jumped at him. Jumped on top of its head. He thrust his blades into the monster's head, imbuing them with chi energy, wanting to send it to its death. But that plan was not to be. Monk was shocked to realize that the monster was completely impenetrable. Its skin is as hard as steel. That's when Ray's wolf came to the rescue, and Gary came running in with his sword at his side. He shouted for Monk to get out of the way. The boy struck the monster with all his might, but the sword shattered. He had had enough of the bulls thrashing around and electrified his body, scattering everyone. Only Rei was still holding it by the horns. The dragon continued to hold the monster by the horn while activating the passive mana distribution skill. Thanks to this skill, the mana from the monster flowed into Rei, filling him up more and more. The bull sensed something amiss and with a roar threw the boy aside from himself. The dragon was not confused and concentrated his mana and put it all into the attack, falling on the monster. As he fell on the monster's back, he managed to wound it. He was able to pierce through the thick skin of the cow god. The boy rejoiced in the fact that the old man's special training was definitely giving his skills. He was too caught up in the fight. Gary, watching the battle, shouted for Rei to dodge the monster's attack, but it was too late. The bull gathered mana into a strong electric shock and blew the attacker off his body with it, complementing the blow with a paw. The boy fell to the ground and drew himself quite a long way. He wasn't even able to control his body properly. The impact caused a daze. Apparently, it was because he had spewed out too much mana. His body wasn't ready for it. The monster was advancing on his attacker and he couldn't fight back. If the guys don't do something, it's gonna be bad. But a new force had entered the situation. Rei saw a new face and froze in amazement. The man was standing on the rock behind the bull. He said that the boys had engaged an enemy beyond their strength. The new face willing to fight was Sir Kay, who was, as usual, inseparable from his cigar. And Monk, noticing his mentor, shouted for joy. He thought he had saved them. But the man, when he struck, told them not to flatter him and that he would deal with them later. He struck a strong blow on the bull's horn. The force of the attack was such that it simply cut off the monster's horn, but he didn't want to be left behind either. He caught the offender by the leg. The monster didn't give up on the little things and slammed the knight to the ground. But Kay wasn't too shabby. He chopped off the monster's toes to free himself from its grip. This enraged the monster even more, and he launched a frontal attack on his assailant. With great speed, he ran towards the enemy, but something strange happened. The enemy was not at the expected place. He stopped and began to twist his head from side to side to find such a small, skittish target again. But his enemy was even more cunning. He stood on his back and asked if the bull was looking for him. The bull was covered with sweat from the strain and only had time to turn to look at his enemy with a scarlet gaze. Kay had defeated the monster. Gary, with Monk's help, moved toward his friends, and he realized that the problem was finally solved. At that time, Rei looked behind the rock where the wolf was hiding. He ordered it to return to the system, and Noel's return brought a new surprise. A new elemental absorption ability had been unlocked, probably from absorbing electrical damage. The knight took the girl in his arms and said that luckily the monster didn't have much magic power left, or he wouldn't have gotten out of its clutches in one piece. As they walked to the exit of the dungeon, he asked if they had anything to say. The only question was whether they would be expelled for breaking in, to which the knight replied that they should be happy that they would just be expelled because they dared to sneak into the dungeon, as if they were still alive at all. The guys walking behind him hung their noses and felt sorry for them, except that he said with a wink that he had no desire to exclude them since they had survived the encounter with a king-level monster. If they promised to keep it a secret, he would pretend that he didn't see them. Happiness lit up the boys' eyes and faces. Kay, closing the door, asked how they managed to open it. Rei replied that it was open when they got there. The knight looked into the remaining gap of the closing gate and said that it was strange. It shouldn't be open. Rei heard a voice from the closing gate saying that it would be waiting for him. That was the voice he had heard in his dream. A glint of purple light came from the slit. The voice said that the boy must return to him. Then he would be stronger. And the door closed. When they got out of the prison, they went straight to the hospital. There, the doctor bandaged the knight's arm and reprimanded them for practicing too much. The boys lay in the ward and listened to the doctor swear, and finally said that he would justify himself at the morning council for this accident. Rei decided to ask why Gary kept going deeper into the cave despite them stopping him, but he couldn't explain it to them. The boy just felt he had to go there. He couldn't control his body and mind and didn't know why. Monk showed the book and said he knew exactly what the problem was. That surprised the boys. It turned out that the king-level monster was a lost cow god and had a power called the mental maze. The guys looking at Monk's narrator wondered what a mental maze was. Legend has it that a queen of a country and a white bull gave birth to a bull-headed monster to be sacrificed to the gods. Having learned about the creature born by the queen, the king became furious and ordered to build a huge labyrinth on a desert island. This labyrinth had to be guarded by guards, and the minotaur born was trapped for life. This minotaur had truly divine powers. As he grew to escape from his imprisonment, he eventually gained the ability to emit an aura. It bewitched the humans, and they never lost control of their minds. Their actions were dictated by their strongest emotions. The dragon listened in shock to the legend of how a human and a bull could have a child. What happened next was never mentioned in the book. The boy wondered if it made sense. Perhaps it was the reason for his nightmare. The dragon looked at his friend, and if the minotaur was the cause of Gary's dreams, then who was talking to him? Kay came into the room. The doctor said he was healing like a dog, so in a few days he can be out of the hospital. Rei wanted to ask something. Knight thought he wanted to know how the man was feeling, and the man asked in surprise that he was worried about his injury. With a chuckle, the knight said it was nothing. Just a couple broken ribs for the likes of him is just routine. Only the boy turns out he wanted to ask if he had the king's stone and would get a piece of it. That was very cheeky of him. The knight got angry and yelled at the boy. He told him not to even think about him. It was payment for his labors. After he calmed down, he went to the exit and told the boys to rest, and the next day they went for a full body examination. The boys asked how the knight knew that they had gotten in there since they were the only ones who knew about it. Jasmine wouldn't have had time to tell them. Kay turned and said that those kids had so many secrets that they were eager to reveal, and their infiltration was told by one of the hidden ones. Ray remembered that he once felt like someone was watching him, so they were under surveillance the whole time. Monk said he'd heard about this, that the students were being introduced to people to keep them out of trouble. Simply put, snitching on troubled students. Leaving finally, the knight said that was all they needed to know and not to bother him with questions. They had more pressing problems to deal with. Ray exhaled, and it occurred to him that the mystery of this academy was much simpler than it seemed at first glance. As everyone settled down to rest and fell asleep, the boy thought about an ability that was strange. Element absorption ability. This ability absorbs the opponent's abilities to amplify the power of his own magic, and so far it has been of little use. The boy looked at his friends and thought about the fact that he had asked them to keep what had happened a secret, and K-Cheese hadn't asked him anything. As Gary slept peacefully, Ray looked at him and realized that he no longer had nightmares. Perhaps it really was the influence of that monster. Once he recovered, the boy went on to further training. He learned a new technique. He fought by hand with his sword in his teeth. The mentor looked at the sweating student and praised him. It seemed that this technique really suited him. The dragon thought about the fact that in such a state his sword was used mainly for defense, and that fist attacks were not very powerful. The old man thought of something and slammed his fist into his palm, and stars lit up in his eyes. He decided to give something to his apprentice. The old man rummaged through the closet, shaking out a bunch of junk, and couldn't find anything. Ray didn't understand how there could be anything useful in there. But then suddenly the old man let out an exclamation that he had found what he was looking for. The item was a strangely shaped glove called a dragon's fist. But Ray was confused by the name. When he put the gloves on, they were huge. He wondered if they were really that good. Turns out they resized to fit the wearer. Suddenly the gloves actually shrank. Ray lifted them up in surprise. What they would give him. The old man proudly said that the gloves were made of mid-level crystals of dragon horns. Looking at his apprentice, he said that he would gladly give him the highest level gear, but it would not be fair to the others. Hearing about the other apprentices, Ray was surprised. He had missed something again. It was as if he hadn't been attending classes at all. The old man said that all second-year students and above would participate in the annual academy tournament, where the 5 strongest students will be chosen. These 5 students will represent the academy to compete against the strongest from the rest of the world in the Tournament of Nations. The elder said she'll lend him the gloves to get him into at least the top 10. If he gets a good place in the rankings, then he'll give them to him. Since the boy already had his weapons, he needed to look for a protective breastplate, shield, or something similar. They would always come in handy when completing quests. The dragon did just that. He went to the market to look for it, and at one point the people in the place were surprised by a loud scream. The apprentice standing in front of the counter wondered why the price was lower last time, and was advised to go elsewhere if he was not satisfied with the price. The vendor said that he always charged childish prices for protective gear that cost 10 small crystals or 1,000 yen. As for the extras, the vendor leaned over and whispered that it was payment for his silence. Where did he get those extra crystals from? The guy accepted defeat, though the teachers wouldn't be able to catch him hot on his heels when he hid the crystals. The humbled boy threw the bag of payment on the counter to the surprised salesman and told him to do his job. The seller quickly took the payment and said that the boy could be sure that he would be satisfied with the work of the seller's family. The dragon watched the work of the master and thought that human nature is very slippery and is present in all areas of life. He was distracted from watching the work by Skavia's call that it was a happy coincidence that they met. The girl looked beautiful in her uniform and dress. Ray thought she had come for the uniforms, but there was no class today. The boy whispered to her that he was offering to change stores because the owner here wasn't the most honest. Skavia realized in shock what had happened to the boy. She slammed her hands on the counter and started calling out loudly for the owner. She was driven by a thirst for justice. The clerk was very kind. He called the girl Ms. Hard. Only the girl was angry and said she had come on an errand. Ray looked at the beautiful girl with astonishment, and he was most surprised that the man called her Miss. She was from some famous family. The girl handed the guy back the extra payment. He accepted it with surprise and realized that the difference in attitude to people is just amazing. He remembered what Sebastian had said about the difference in children. Even though the guy was a disgusting person, he was telling the truth. Ray decided to give Skavia a gift as a thank you. He pulled a spare crystal out of his pants pocket. He handed her a medium-sized Wally Bear crystal. As a thank you for her help, the girl was embarrassed not to take such an expensive gift, because it was more valuable than 10 crystals of a small monster. Waving goodbye, the guy said that there was no point in keeping it, and maybe she could use it more than him. The girl was embarrassed. Clutching the gift to her chest, Skavia embarrassedly spoke the name of the boy she liked, the salesman who had learned that Ray was well acquainted with the eldest daughter of the Hard family. He was more respectful, but Ray didn't pay attention to him. He was looking at the breastplate, and given that he was good with chi, he should have a good chance. At this time, Elder Gibby was upset that the boy had made it out of the underground prison alive. The assassin knight reported that an infiltrator had informed the Kisei that the children had sneaked into the prison, and he was the one who had saved them. The elder didn't think about the fact that the ancient system still worked. With 3 horsemen on their side and a troublesome Kay as well, they were going to have a hard time. At this point, the knight mumbled that perhaps Delbert should be involved in their plan. But Gibby said there was no hurry, and that he had to be sure of his loyalty before he could be called upon. The conspirators had another man in their employ who remained a secret. If he succeeded, the guild would reward him with a new position. The elder also added with anger in his eyes if he didn't succeed, then he shouldn't come back and report to him. At this time, the disciples were in the foothills of the hunting ground. The disciples were preparing for battle with excitement. Their prey promised to be large. Ian and Monk thanked Ray for something and said they would pay him back a lot more when the opportunity arose. The boy didn't know what they were talking about. Dan put his arm around his friend's neck and said that even though he was shy, they all appreciated him. The boy didn't understand what was going on. The dragon realized. He turned to Skavia to see if she had a hand in this. Martha decided to run away safely so as not to draw attention to herself. Embarrassed, the girl said it was because of the crystal he'd given her. She exchanged it for gold and handed it out to everyone on the boy's behalf. A frowning Ray walked beside the girl and remained silent. She asked if he was angry that she hadn't discussed the matter with him, but he suddenly grabbed her by the shoulders and said that it wasn't about that at all. The guy said with a slight smile that Skavia would make a better leader. The girl's face lit up at such praise. She didn't even know what to say to that. Measuring up, she pushed him away and asked him why he was suddenly so serious. The boys continued into the woods, and Gary wondered if there was nothing between Skavia and Ray. The boy had gotten close to his friend and was surprised to ask him what he was talking about. With a sad sigh, Gary admitted that his friend's head was all sawdust, and that he would promise not to do the same to Amy when he met her again. But even that heartfelt speech didn't get through to the uncomprehending Ray. He froze in incomprehension without even trying to ask. Then the easy walk came to an end. Dan, seeing the enemies, prepared his weapons and shouted to everyone to get ready. Huge dragonfly monsters flew at the students. They were bigger than the previous ladybugs. Ray used a skill to look at his opponents and realized that they were low-level monsters. There was nothing scary about them. Gary and Dan fight each other side by side. Dan said it was too easy, but Gary recognized that it meant that his fighting skills had improved as well. Monk got tired of fighting and stopped for a break. He didn't notice that someone was coming out of the ground from behind him. But it was Ray who noticed. He turned to his friend and shouted for him to get away from the danger. That shout was enough. The boy jumped away from the enemy, who was a Hercules beetle, a mid-level monster. Dan looked at the medium-level magic monster with delight. He said it was just a bug. The boy got cocky and attacked the beetle and punched it in the belly, sending it flying. The beetle flew off and crashed into some rocks nearby, but there were no wounds on its skin. The beetle's shell was very hard. This amazed Dan, but Ray warned that more bugs were coming. The students grouped back to back and many hard monsters popped out of the ground. The boys got into a fight with the monsters. Ray swung his sword and tried to cut the claw, but he barely succeeded. The shell was too hard. The girls fought back to back. Martha could barely get an arrow through their armor. Dan, Monk, and Ian fought back to back. They were surrounded by a variety of monsters. It was a very hard battle. But suddenly, Dan was attracted by a noise behind him and turned around to see the monster's torso being thrown upwards by the impact. What it was wasn't clear. Turns out it was Ray who was fighting. He had infused his gloves with chi energy. To him, monsters were just bugs. He fought as if he was dancing and chasing all the monsters away. The weapons and equipment passed the test perfectly. His friends watched this battle with their mouths open. It was very cool, and they were envious of the guy's weapon. It was very powerful. Monk said the weapon was lent to him by the master of the martial arts club. Dan tearfully admits that he seems to have made a mistake and joined the wrong club. The dragon continued to fight while thinking about how to behave so as not to make his friends even more suspicious. Holding one of the monsters by the claw, Ray turned to his friends and asked how long they were going to watch. Maybe they could help him already. Skavia and Martha were working in pairs. Thanks to that, they were able to defeat strong opponents. Finally, the last monster was finished, and the boys were able to breathe and cool down from the battle, digging through the bodies of the defeated. The guys realized that they are rich since they are mid-level monsters, and the crystals they have will be the same. Ray decided to leave the crystals to the guys since he already had to. The sudden appearance of so many monsters looks like someone's well-thought-out plan. Suddenly, the boy's attention was caught by a noise from the surroundings. He raised his head to the sky and saw many flying birds. Activating his dragon eye, he saw flames moving through the forest towards them. He told his friends to get ready, but Dan looked in the same direction and saw nothing. Martha jumped up into a tree and confirmed Ray's point. The flames were huge and they were in danger. Gary lay on the ground with his ear to the ground and listened to the sound of monsters' footsteps from beneath the ground. Dan said they had to leave now. Only it was too late, and Martha confirmed that the flames were closing in on them from all sides. Skavia had a disaster gem with her to call for help, but she had already tried that and it didn't work. In addition to the flames surrounding them, Ray noticed people walking around surrounded by flares. His friends took notice as well. Who could it be? Friends or just another enemy? The people were walking through the flames, causing them no harm. They had black and red ammunition and a variety of weapons in their hands. Monk suggested that maybe they were coming to save them, except Ray said they weren't. One of the enemies gave the others the command to attack and they rushed into action. The first to be hit was Monk. The blow was so strong that he immediately flew off and couldn't defend himself. The next target was Gary, who needed to fight, but was also worried about his unconscious friend. Ray wanted to help, but he couldn't. He had his own opponent. The only question facing the boys was, who were they? He defended himself from his opponent and took sword blows on his gloves. He realized that the enemy's weapon was unusual. Ray was able to dodge the next attack with a jump. He increased the distance between himself and the enemy. Meanwhile, Dan rushed to Monk's aid and Ian decided to go to help Ray. But it wasn't that simple. Suddenly, the guy's path was blocked by flames. The dragon noticed that with the help of fire, the enemies are trying to separate the guys. Ray and Gary seemed to be their target. But looking closely, he saw two enemies coming at him, so maybe the target is only Ray. Gary is caught in the crossfire at this point. It looks like Ray will have to fight alone against two opponents. The dragon told the boys not to worry about them and to come down the mountain to call for help. It wasn't safe to stay here. Scavia recognized Ray's point. They needed to hurry to help the boys. Help could only come in the form of knights. Left alone, Gary and Ray stood back to back. Ray asked if he could do it against one enemy. Gary said no problem. Since the enemy was on defense, it was unlikely to inflict fatal wounds. The enemy was fast, but not fast enough to overpower Gary. The boy launched a frontal attack on his enemy. He just had to hold him off to buy time for Ray. Ray took a fighting stance and his enemies didn't waste any time and decided to attack him at once. The enemy with the sword was the first to reach him. Ray took his attack on his gloves, but at that moment the other made a sneaky move to attack from behind. The boy quickly reacted to this action and caught the enemy's weapon by the chain. At that moment, the other decided to attack from behind again, using his sword. The boy managed to jump away from the sword and we had to release the manriki weapon of his enemy. The boy wanted to activate his ability, but at that moment he was hit in the chest by the tip of the enemy's weapon. From the force of the blow, the boy fell and flew backwards. He had no idea that his opponents were so difficult to work as a team. Fortunately, the breastplate prevented a fatal wound. He had to come up with a new plan right away. While Ray was thinking of a new plan, he heard his friend scream behind him. At that moment, Gary was holding his arm. He was cursing because he had just healed that arm. The enemy noticed this and with a sneer told him to take care of it. Gary infused his sword with chi energy and told Ray not to worry. Since the boy would be able to deal with his enemy on his own, only his opponent also decided not to give up and said that he would make it hard for Gary. All this fuss made the dragon angry and he said that if his enemy was going to go to the other world, he did not intend to prevent it. The dragon decided to absorb the 5 crystals of the small monster. This created an even greater amplification for him. Lightning and ki energy swirled around his body. The bright light born from the boy's mana collection made his enemies hesitate for a moment. It even blinded them. The dragon had evolved into a dragon knight, and his summoned beast had also evolved into a horned wolf. The reincarnated boy with fangs in his mouth called for Noelle to come out to help. Now it was really time to have some fun. The huge wolf and the reincarnated boy posed a real threat. Enemy intelligence had reported nothing of Ray's magic, but that didn't change anything for the enemy. They had a mission to accomplish. Having made up their minds, they rushed to attack the reincarnated boy. The weapons on the chain came at him again, except it wasn't a new attack and the boy wasn't buying it. He decided to just break it. Grabbing the chain with both hands, the dragon summoned Noelle to his aid. It would be easier for him to fight now. The enemy who owned the weapon with the chain tried to take it back. Only the boy was unexpectedly strong. A huge horned dog ran up to its master and, waiting for the long-awaited command to attack, rushed at the enemy. Noel grabbed the chain of one of the enemies and began to wrap it around him, trying to cut him off from the others. He realized this and threw off the chain with a swipe of his blade and clung to his partner. The wolf returned to his master and Ray said he was leaving the enemy with the knives on him. They rushed to the attack. They acted as coherently as their enemies. Their teamwork was well honed from their hunts. Ray was newly engaged in a scramble with the attacker with the ball, and the man holding the sickles wanted to attack from behind to help his partner. But Noel did not stand idly by and leapt at his enemy. The man held his sickle out in front of him, which the wolf bit into, and he thought of it as nothing more than an animal he had slain by the hundreds in a day. Ray's opponent continued to fight with his sword, using it to create a tongue of fire magic. For Ray, the sword was a pain in the ass. It was too much of a nuisance to disarm. The boy also noticed that from the moment he was chained, he tried not to let him get close to him. Why is that? Ray infused his gloves with chi magic and decided to find out what his enemy was so afraid of. He began to attack and it was clear that his enemy was afraid of a head-on collision. The man using his sword and the magic invested in it sharply increased the distance between him and the boy. The dragon grinned and offered to admit his weaknesses. This was definitely to the boy's advantage. Abruptly, the battle stopped. The boy and his opponent simultaneously looked at the fight going on behind them. Gary's opponent was annoyed at the way he was fighting back. He was only a student at the academy. Why did he have to be so much trouble? Gary agreed that they were just students and why attack them? And at that moment, he thrust his sword into his opponent, making him scream. But as always, the opponent's strategy is this sneaky. Ray yelled for the boy to turn around, but it was too late. He was knocked back by a fireball. As always, one enemy came to the aid of another. As he fell to the ground, Gary saw his opponent burning in flames and begging for help. The boy realized in shock that these guys do not spare even their comrades. They have no sense of compassion, only cruelty. Leaning on his sword as a crutch, Gary went to his friend, saying he would help him. But he'd lost too much strength in the last battle, and one bump in the road caused the boy to fall to the ground. He was exhausted. Ray turned to him and told him not to worry. He'd better get some rest. The evil dragon looked at his opponents and said he would crush them while Gary rested. Now it was his turn. Clamping his sword in his teeth, Ray said that scum like his enemy didn't deserve to stay alive in this world. Attacking his enemy, he angrily said that he was the kind of scum who would sacrifice the lives of his fellow man. It was unforgivable. The pressure of the boy's furious power was so strong that the enemy just did not have time to dodge his blows. The enemy flew away for some distance and stood up, slowing his fall with his feet and waiting for Ray's next attacks. The boy paused for breath and was only occupied with the thought that the chest armor of the enemies was too strong. This time the enemies had prepared themselves. Not only did he have an inferno sword, but also special armor all over his body. After assessing his strength, the boy realized that if he continued like this, his armor would not hold up, so he had to find another way out. While Noel was fighting the enemy, he realized that the wolf was not that strong. He's just a mid-level magical beast. Noel gained extreme speed and began to spin around the enemy, hoping to confuse him by wrapping a chain around him. Only the enemy noticed this trickery and picked up the chain in his hands. It was too easy for him. Gary saw that the wolf was having a hard time and wanted to help do something, while the enemy pulled on the wolf's chain. Pulling the monster towards him, he swung his sickle, wanting to send him to the other side. But it was not to be. Gary rushed forward with all his strength and took the blow of the sickle on his sword, protecting Noel. Gary held his sword with all his might, not letting his opponent attack and asking him to stop. The man realized his opponent was a child, but strong enough. With the strongest blow, he threw the boy and the wolf away, saying that if he wanted to die instead of an animal, he would help him. Gary's sword and the wolf all scattered in different directions. The enemy was very strong for them. But Gary from the last strength grabbed the leg of the enemy and told the wolf to grab the sword and fight as his master fights. Noel heard the boy's advice and rushed to grab the sword. Now he would fight differently. The enemy swung the blade to destroy the boy, but the boy held his legs and said he would not let go even if he died. The decision to take the sword to the wolf was perfect. With this ball, he defeated the enemy by decapitating him. The man turned to see what had happened to his partner and recognized that he was useless. Ray realized at that moment that this was the most opportune moment. While the enemy was distracted, Ray rushed forward and launched his sword at his enemy. But the man, thanks to his good reaction time, managed to dodge the weapon. He managed to catch the sword, but it was a distraction, and Ray hit him in the face with his fist. What was under the mask shocked the boy. This can't be. Gary, too, could see who was hidden. He froze with his mouth open, unable to utter a word. The masked man was Lancey. The boys didn't understand why he was a traitor. Gary looked at him and said he was a knight and a teacher. Why would he do such a thing? Why he did it? Lancini sprinted towards Gary, shouting that it didn't matter, and they were going to die here anyway. Ray panicked and yelled for Gary to get away from the attack instead of standing up. To save the boy, Noel rushed in front of the enemy, protecting him with his own body. Ray, seeing the suffering of his wolf and the fact that he could do nothing more, canceled the summons. The wolf had done enough. Gary was unconscious, but the wolf was able to fulfill his wish and protect him from death. Lancey lunged at the boy with rage in his eyes, saying he was going to get rid of him anyway. With anger, the dragon realized that there would always be scum like this knight in the human race, no matter the intentions. Why drag others into it? The so-called knight lunged at the boy, but he intercepted the sword. All he said was that he liked to attack so much, he liked to hurt others. With anger, Ray said that if that was the case, he would pay for it and activated the elemental absorption. Lancey said with an evil grin that as long as the boy held that sword, it would drain him of all his strength, and the fire would eat him up. But he was wrong. With a wicked smile, Ray told him it was Lancey who would die this time, which scared him very much. The knight kept thrusting his sword, saying that he would see how long the boy could hold out against him. But only when he turned his attention to the sword, he was frightened and couldn't understand what was happening. The flame began to weaken. He began to try to take the sword away, shouting for Ray to let him go, or he would die. Ray said that the knight was forcing him to grab it. As the boy was not going to let go of the sword, the man began to kick him in the ribs, wanting to push the boy away from him. Lancey got his way and flew away from the wave that came from the boy letting go of the sword. Laughing hard, Ray realized that he had a few broken ribs and it was time to do something else. The fire element he had absorbed was just the kind of magic he could use. And if he can combine chi and fire element magic, if he can combine them, he can use it as his own weapon. The boy was covered in fire. It was a frightening sight. The former knight looked at his opponent in fear. He thought he was a demon and decided that he should have been destroyed earlier. Having decided something for himself, he attacked the reincarnated child with a loud shout. One move of Ray and his enemy lost his arm, but he didn't even realize it right away. He thought something was wrong with the sword since it wouldn't respond. But the dragon didn't let him regain consciousness. He grabbed his head and, without listening to the man's pleas, said that his time had come. With cold blood, he decided to burn the man who had attacked them and brought much pain to him and his blonde friend. Looking at the remains of his enemy, the dragon said that he had gotten what he deserved. He deserved it by his actions. As the fight ended, the boy's reincarnation came off and he suddenly heard someone calling for him and Gary. From the forest, someone was running to their aid. Mentor K and the boys, they were almost there in time, but still came to the end of the battle. Ray fell to the ground senseless. The others realized it was the purebloods, and they should report everything to Winford. The boy's face and arm were badly hurt, and he had to be rushed to the infirmary. On his remaining strength, he said he was glad nothing had happened to them. When Ray came to, he saw a familiar ceiling. He smelled a familiar odor, and he realized he was back in the infirmary. The next thing he felt was a strange weight on his body. He didn't realize it at first, but when he lowered his eyes, he saw Scavia sleeping next to him. The girl seemed to have dozed off a bit and immediately sensed that Ray was awake. She jumped up with tears of happiness in her eyes and said that he was finally awake. Ray wondered how long he had been asleep. Helping him to sit up, she told him that he had been asleep for 3 days, but that he didn't have to worry as all his wounds had been treated, and he was recovering quickly. He thought about the fact that his lips felt like they were burning, but were much better now. Scavia said she would go and get the others. Kay came in and activated some sort of sign on the wall. The room was enveloped in a special magic, and the knight said that now they could talk, and no one would hear their conversation. Ray, surrounded by his friends, sat there not understanding anything. He asked what was going on here, and he also wondered why all the other red-headed guys were in the room too. Gary was also in the room. Kay said that as it seems the two students had been attacked, which was a serious threat to their lives. Taking the cigar out of his mouth, he added that he and Winford had discussed the matter and decided to tell them something. But before doing so, Kay asked if Ray could tell them who had attacked them. He said there were 3 men. The identities of 2 of them were unknown to him, but the third, unfortunately, turned out to be Lancey. The guys froze in shock. Monk said he couldn't believe it, while Kale added that he had a feeling that the man was not a good person. Scavia asked if they were from the Dark Guild. She had read in the book that it was a forbidden organization. If they were, it would have been a lot easier. But they have a guild called the Purebloods, and unlike the Dark Guild, the Purebloods have many supporters in the academy. And rumor has it that one of the elders is behind them. The students couldn't believe what they heard. A knight raised his hand to stop the rising clamor, and he and Winford realized that it's not that simple. Ray tensely looked at his mentor and wondered what they were up to. The man said that Ray should have guessed by now because, in addition to the victims in this room, there are other red-headed guys. It came to the boy that this guild wanted to get rid of all the red-haired guys. Ian was startled by this news, but one of the twins happily suggested that they could finally get rid of the wooden balls and get real ones. Kale asked in shock why they wanted to do that since the prophecy said they were saviors. Kay added that the prophecy had a second part. The second part said that the red-haired child could either become a savior or someone who would destroy the world. There are knights of high esteem who value their lineage and ancestry. They can never accept that their lineage will be jeopardized. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people think. On the other side, on the borders of the Kingdom of Allure, there is a battle going on, and there are knights needed to defend against the Shadow Beasts. The Academy must also be kept running smoothly. Under these circumstances, the higher echelons can't deal with the Pureblood Guild. Kale asked in panic what they should do. Would they really let these people continue to do this to the students? Dan said with some apprehension that it was none of their business, not theirs to save the world. Scavia asked in shock how he could say such a thing. They're friends. The man lit a cigar and said that whether they wanted to or not, they were in the situation for good. This incident showed that the Pureblood Guild wouldn't just give up. They must not let their guard down. He made sure that all the red-headed disciples were sleeping next to each other, and he and Winford would keep an eye on them as well. But he had to point out that there were too few of them to let the boys relax completely, and they couldn't be around them 24 hours a day. Monk suggested that to get stronger, they had no choice but to train hard. Gary agreed with him. The knight laughed and said that in his experience, most guys who rely on others for protection end up dying. It was a comfort in itself. Taking a serious look, Kay said that the students could be dismissed, and he had something to talk to Ray about. The boy looked at his mentor in surprise and asked what he wanted to talk to him about. A week later, Ray was finally released from the infirmary. He was fully recovered. As he stepped outside, he stretched happily, glad to be able to get out at last. If he had stayed in there any longer, he would have gone insane. The dragon gloves the old man had given him were badly damaged, so he would have to have them repaired. That made the boy sad. In addition, although Noel's life was not in danger, it would take a lot of medium crystals to heal him quickly. He would have to look for an opportunity to go hunting, but besides that, he couldn't forget the words Gray K had said. They wouldn't let him relax for a moment. When the knight was alone with him, he said that Ray was probably the one the prophecy said he had something that made him different from the others. The boy asked what it was, and it turned out that his body had healed itself more than once when it was in a terrible state. The knight also gave the boy a suspicious look and added that although he tried to hide it, he guessed that Ray possessed some kind of magic. In tension, the boy was silent, but thought how to explain everything to him. Like the fact that in his past life he was a dragon. He'd think he was crazy. Besides, he was a brunette as a child, and he recovered quickly too. Maybe it's all just because there's something left of a dragon in him. The man finally added that whether Ray believed him or not, the problem was that the Pureblood Guild was sure of it. You can understand that it's him they want to get rid of the most, so he would have to be more careful than the others from now on. The boy went about his business and thought about the fact that Lancey was not so easy to deal with, and the next one who would attack him would be much stronger. As he continued walking, he realized that he couldn't just sit around and wait. He had to take some action to save himself. At this moment, the elder trader was looking out the window and talking disdainfully about Lancey, even with his high-end equipment. The man also added that fortunately dying he couldn't give anything away. But the knight said that Kay and Winford had already guessed everything. The elder putting on his mask said that it wasn't that bad and we could still wait. He also went to his accomplice and ordered Delbert to be brought in, as he had been in the cell block for some time. Gibby said that if he was so eager to prove his loyalty, he could start by helping to rock the boat. Ray came into the room and told them that he had finally checked out of the infirmary. The boys were overjoyed. Looking at their friend, they saw that he was bruised again. It turned out that he had gone to a martial arts club and practiced a little. At the same time, the girls returned to the room and Scavia came in holding a letter. It was meant for Gary. Scavia happily went over to him and asked if he was okay since he was back already. The embarrassed boy said he was fine. Martha looked at Ray and said it was time for him to do something about his overgrown hair. Dan offered to do the same hairstyle as his. Suddenly, Kyle offered to give Ray a shaved head like his. The room became available and he asked to move in with them. Ray broke into a sweat at the situation and turned to his friend and asked if Gary was okay with him moving in with them. He was crazy. Thunderclouds loomed over Gary's head. He was silent, holding the letter in his hands. Ray called out to his friend again, but he didn't respond. Terror froze in the boy's eyes. He also continued to stare silently at his letter without answering the calls. Suddenly, he broke into a run, running out of the room. Monk asked what the hell was happening to him. The girl suggested that maybe it was the letter. Dan suggested that maybe he was worried about being used. Monk cut him off. Ray didn't waste time talking and ran after his friend. He used the ability to find him. Looking around, he saw Gary run up to the roof. What was he doing there? Cautiously making his way around the tower structure, Ray went to the roof again, trying to call out to his friend. Walking closer to him, he asked what was going on with him. Everyone is worried about him. The frowning boy sat with his head down. He said he had just gotten a letter and it said his sister. He couldn't even tell what was wrong with her. Rai was silent at first, but tensed up and asked if the letter was about Amy, what had happened to her. In the silence, a stone fell like a stone. Gary said Amy had died. Ray thought back to that girl he'd met in the woods. He never got a chance to thank her properly. He kept thinking he'd have time to thank her. There's still time for that. He was wrong. Amy was a grown-up girl now, but she hasn't lived her life and here she lies in her coffin in a mountain of white roses. Her parents stand by and mourn her. Ray's world shattered into shards. He cried. He cried and couldn't believe that Amy was dead. At that moment, Gary said he remembered a nightmare he couldn't get out of his head. The devastated eyes reflected the pain. He dreamed that Amy had been torn to pieces by monsters at Roland Academy in the palm of the god's hands. Through tears, the boy admitted that now he understood. It wasn't a nightmare, it was a prophecy. The dragon was silent. Gary added that the parents had written supposedly the nobles of the academy offered the family a large sum of money as compensation. Enraged, the boy hit the roof railing, screaming and venting his anger. To them, she's a dead redneck whose family can just be bought off with money, and by tomorrow, these aristocrats would be immersed in their own lives. Ray was silent. Gary added that his sister and her death would not be mere gossip for them. Furious and still crying, he vowed that he would never forgive them for this. Turning to his friend, he said he would find the man who ruined her and destroy him. At that moment, Ray reached out to his friend's shoulder. Shaking his shoulder, he said he was in on it too and wouldn't leave it at that. Gary jumped at the chance because Ray has awakened powerful magic. He can summon beasts and uses fire magic. If he demonstrates this to the elders, he'll be transferred to Roland's academy, and then he can get his revenge. The boy interrupted his friend. Taking his hands off his shoulders, he said that even though he has abilities, if he told the elders about them, they would watch even more closely. Besides, if he could get into Roland's academy, what would happen to Gary? What would happen to him? The boy didn't know the answer. Ray went on. He said that they should find a way to leave the academy together. Gary wondered what they had to do that. He anxiously said that until he finished the academy and served 2 years, he would not be released, and by that time his hands would be completely tied. But Ray added that the academy tournament would be starting soon. If they place first, they can represent the academy at the national tournament. By then, they could meet people from Roland's academy. This was their chance. The boy accepted his plan. He understood what needed to be done and thanked his friend for his help. At this time in the third-year dormitory, Harry walked into the room and asked in surprise where everyone was. It turned out they were preparing for the academy tournament. Harry said that this happens year after year and how his friend thought there was a chance of winning this year. Harry's classmate said with a strange smile that he would hope they would see some busy sophomores this year. The guys came to practice every time they saw Gary practicing. They didn't understand the reason for this urge to study. Lately, Gary has not stopped practicing. Monk asked what was wrong, but Ray advised him to stay out of it for a while. Gary kept honing his skills, but he still didn't think it was enough. Tired, he lowered his sword to the ground and leaned on it. Angry, he thought he was weak. Kay came up to him. He said that Gary had been practicing a lot lately and he had something to give the boy. For that, he should go with him. Besides Gary, he brought his other students there. The gear of Lancey's friends was on the table in front of them. Kay offered to let the boys choose whatever they liked. Monk chose a breastplate that was very light. Gary chose the sickles. Kyle also came up and asked if he could choose a weapon since he didn't help them then, but Kay said that the academy tournament was an opportunity to show himself. Every year, all the noble families attend the tournament as spectators, and if the boys do well, they will be invited by at least one of them. Gary had heard that if the boys did well, they would definitely become knights of one of these families. It was a chance. The dragon chose Lancey's sword even though the knight suggested he choose another. This sword had lost its fire magic property. The boy considered it and he realized that he had absorbed the flames of this sword. Absorbing elements could be a very useful skill. That same night, Ray went into the forest to hunt. He searched for some place where the elements were important to him. Finally, after pushing the bushes apart, he saw a cave that was covered in ice. It was exactly the place he was looking for. Going inside, he saw ice monsters, a new target to hunt. The ice monsters immediately sensed that someone had come into their domain. This made them angry. It didn't take long for the dragon to use fire magic. Fire against ice is a successful tactic. Besides, he decided not to fight alone and summoned his wolf to help him. Now it would be on equal footing. There were quite a few ice golems, so the battle was long, but the boy reached the point he was looking for. 3 weeks later, the day of the academy tournament was announced. At this time, people from all over the country began to flock to the castle grounds. There were many students in the waiting room. Jasmine was chatting with Harry. She told him not to give in to her. At this time, Eric and Sebastian were plotting something. Eric told his friend that he had already made arrangements with everyone. The battle with Ray had left the boy with a scar on his face. Martha came running to the assembled boys. She wanted to tell them that the rules of the tournament had been changed this year, but she didn't have time. The students' conversations were interrupted by the announcement that the knights had arrived. That meant the tournament was about to begin. A woman from the trio of knights stepped forward and called for the top 5 sophomores and the top 5 third graders to come forward. Of the sophomores, Ian was the best. Dan, Monk, Scavia, and Gary. If Kale had given way to Dan, he wouldn't be here. The commander looked at the sophomores and then looked at the third year. It appeared that not everyone was in attendance. The girls from the top 5 reported that student Kira had gone on a mission. The woman looked at the list and asked where the last Jay was. At that moment, the boys saw their rivals. They were shocked. A huge guy, Jay Gurley, was sitting on the ledge along with his huge ball. He was happy and waiting to be challenged. Ray, meanwhile, was in the crowd looking at the last named. There were many rumors about him. It was said that he was ranked #1 in the academy. Monk had talked about how he probably wouldn't let the third-year students get away with it. Dan added that they probably won't win. 4 third graders and 5 fifth graders. At this moment, the knight mouthed that this 10 students would not participate in the first round of selection. This announcement came as a complete shock to the students. Just 10 students who were missing the beginning. Kyle was worried that the students would just get squashed and they were pushed forward. Ray said it was his own fault for not being in the top 5 participating. At that moment, the rules for the first qualifying match were announced, and it was a battle royal in which the second and third year would participate separately. The commander looked at Ian and, since he looked stronger than the others, called him over to her. She said that the participants of the round would be given bracelets that would display 100 life points. She took the bow and took aim at Ian. She shot a soft-tipped arrow and it took away 10% of his life. She also added that if the opponent used Kwai to attack, the damage dealt would increase. If they defended with navigation, the damage would be less. When the students' life points dropped to 0, they would be considered losers and removed from the battlefield. She ordered the second-year students to get ready. They were to turn in their weapons to the storeroom and get another one, then enter the arena. Ray went to turn in his weapons. At that moment, Sebastian was telling Eric to stop him from entering the arena. In the storeroom, Ray chose a sword because it suited him best. Kale chose the chain because it was metal. And so everyone gathered at the entrance to the arena. The referee welcomed them to the academy tournament and announced the start of the first match of the tournament. Above the people was a table with the lives of the students where they can track the level of the players. When the level drops, a player is eliminated, and so on up to 5 competitors. The knights and elders gathered to judge the battle. The contestants were ready. Now all that remained was to see who would emerge victorious. As soon as the first match of the Battle Royal was announced, Ray was immediately attacked by many disciples using key energy. Ray was even initially confused by this turn of battle. This was a real setup. One of the first to strike and take away 10 life points was the evil Sebastian. He was avenging a past loss. Eric was the leader of the rest of the attackers. He ordered to get rid of Ray first and then the others. Sebastian was the first attacker, but he didn't count on a strong response. Ray knocked his sword out of his hands with a powerful blow. With his next move, he shocked Sebastian because the boy grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. While Ray was distracted by the nearby Sebastian, and a trio of enemies rushed at him at once. But the dragon was not confused. He covered himself with the enemy's body and was blown away with 30 life points by his own allies. Eric, covered in sweat from such insolence, yelled at his allies because they had wounded the boss. But Ray was too fast for them. Ray held his enemy by the collar of his shirt and ran forward. He couldn't let go, thinking the boy was a monster for being so strong. The red-haired boy made a strong throw and said that Sebastian should be happy to be the first one out of the game. Then after making the throw, he added a kick, which knocked the rest of his life out. Sebastian kept flying and flying while trying to hit the ground. Finally, he came to a stop. He looked at his bracelet at the disappearing streak of life and couldn't believe that this could happen. And now he was already among the eliminated. Delbert, Sebastian's father, was unrealistically angry at the situation. Elder Gibby, on the other hand, was taking stock of the situation. Everyone in the arena froze in a stupor, and Ray turned to ask them what they were waiting for. He blazed with the fire of righteous anger and suggested that they gather and finally attack. Eric was angry at this call to battle, thinking that Ray had become arrogant. He urged his accomplices to attack the boy at the same time. That way, they'd all be sure to get through. But he miscalculated. The boy picked his target and moved like lightning toward Eric. A terrible fear was reflected on his face. He shouted for Ray to stay away from him. Just a couple seconds and the fight was over for Eric. A dislodged sword arm leg and life in the strip was over. Jay, watching the fight, was ecstatic. From the red-headed kid, he's head and shoulders stronger than all of them. This fight was originally designed to test the skills of the students. The guy never thought he'd be so excited about watching it. The 5th-ranked girl, Naya, noticed that each of his attacks reduced his life by a maximum of 20 points. Ray's friends watching the battle were surprised, and he considered that the boy's enemies were even hurt, but Gary said that those deserved it. Gary looked with contempt at what was happening. 10 men against 1, and they failed. It was ridiculous. Ray was being attacked and attacked, but he was knocking out 20 points with 1 punch each. They couldn't handle him. The guys watching suggested that the attackers didn't know how to use chi. Except Skavia said they could, but Ray was too strong. The people watching the fight were very unhappy. They thought that Ray hit too hard and should not have been allowed to compete at all. The dragon who was dealing with his offender raised his head to the stands. He had very good hearing. The people who had been discussing the child before froze in fright. They couldn't believe that a boy so far away could hear them. They thought he was a monster. One of the elders suggested that maybe the boy should be stopped, but the others said it was not worth it. It's not fair for 10 men to attack. One of the elders said it's not the same situation, and what if this boy accidentally kills the other students? But the old man said that can't be, he's just defending himself intelligently. The disciple of the elder would take responsibility for the outcome. The elders turned to one of them in surprise. They were shocked to hear that this boy was a disciple of one of them. The dragon, on the other hand, continued to fight. He didn't let up on his abusers and definitely didn't want to stay in the ladder. Intao of the 5 third-year students watching the battle assumed that it looked like the top 5 had already been decided. She was also upset that Harry's brother would be the first one eliminated, but you said it was for the best and his father had spared him too much. Ray had 80% of his health left when his enemies almost all had 20. They threatened him, and one of Eric's threats was directed at his parents, who he was supposed to cripple. It was for nothing. Rage filled the boy's eyes. Veins protruded from his face. His enemy had touched what was most precious to him. The dragon strode purposefully towards his recoiling foe. He asked in panic what he was up to, but got no answer. The boy approached Eric and grabbed his head. He was covered in sweat of fear and could not say anything. The elders looked on anxiously. One of them even suggested that Ray would send Eric to the other side. The boy decided to use his mana absorption skill. He said that Eric could no longer be a knight. As he let go of the completely exhausted enemy, he didn't even realize what had happened to him. And with a final blow, the dragon decided the fate of his opponent, knocking him out of the fight. The elders breathed a sigh of relief, not realizing what had happened. They decided that he didn't do much harm to the students. At least he didn't break their limbs. The dragon chose his next target. He had already grabbed him by his clothes, but suddenly, an arrow filled with energy flew at him. The boy had no problem dodging the projectile thanks to his good reaction, but it was unexpected. The one who fired the arrow was a girl archer. She decided to protect one of the participants in the battle. The girl kept shooting at Ray, who took the ball in his hands while releasing the guy he was fighting with. The dragon dodged the arrows with ease. They weren't an obstacle to him. The girl moved sharply around the arena in different directions while firing at her opponent. Not a single arrow hit Ray, and he quickly approached the girl shooting at him. The girl shot and shot but didn't see it coming. She just didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. He was defeating everyone. That's impossible. So she reached into her quiver for a new arrow, and then the surprise came. Turns out she'd already fired all of her enemy's arrows. Caught by surprise, the girl did not immediately notice that Ray had already come very close to her, and in a leap stretched his hand to her throat. He held the girl in the air on his outstretched arm while using chi energy. She asked him to let go and do nothing more. Just then, a scream was heard from the seats watching. The girl's father was yelling for the guy to get his hands off her. At that moment, Ray remembered his father. That man is her father. He's worried about her. What about his father? He had done so much for this country, saving many people. He clenched his sword in his hands with force. What did the man get in the end? All he wanted was for his mother to send him to the next world, so he wouldn't bring any more trouble to anyone. Such irony. What irony, the boy shouted, and with a handful of chi energy, he wanted to hit the girl. But suddenly he was caught by Kale's hand with a manrika. He asked Ray to stop his actions. This infuriated the dragon. With rage reflected on his face, he asked why his friend stopped him. Martha had Ray in her sights and Kale was holding his hand. They were explaining to him that this girl was innocent. He shouldn't be mean to her. The guy said he'd gone too far, and everyone who deserved it had already gotten what they deserved. Walking towards his friends, Ray asked why. Why did it have to be this way? Holding his head, the boy remembered the support of his friends. He didn't understand why things ended up this way. He was very angry. His anger was so strong that it expressed itself physically in a strong wind, but yelled that they didn't know about him at all. The boys tensed at such a display of anger from their friend. The twins covered themselves with their weapons against the flying objects. Ray angrily spat out a huge amount of chi energy into the air and said that if they wanted to stop him, they just needed to knock him out. As Ray continued to hold the manrika chain, he yanked it sharply and the force of the jerk was such that Kale flew in his direction, holding onto his weapon. The boy met the guy flying at him with a fist. Drenched in chi energy, Kale fell to the square holding his stomach. Ray said that if he was going to defeat him, he should train harder to use his chi. Martha didn't stand idly by either. She fired 3 arrows at Ray at once, but his reaction speed was so fast that he caught the arrows in flight with one hand. He held 2 of the 3 arrows. The girl looked at it in shock and didn't understand how he could grab the arrows flying so fast with his bare hands. In the end, the guy infused them with chi energy and launched them back at the girl with all his might. The arrows flew very fast. She barely had time to dodge without noticing another obstacle. After launching the arrows, Ray rushed towards her and hit her while saying that if you want to win so much, you should not be so slow. The girl fell to the ground and Ray stood behind her and told her that she should learn to anticipate his movements and not just the point where he would move. While he was advising Martha, the twins decided to attack him from behind. They always worked in pairs. Only they miscalculated too. They had no plan. It was just bravery without proper strategy. Ray scattered them with a single blow. The guys, simultaneously using their weapons and bracing themselves with their arms, stopped without falling to the ground. But they miscalculated too. They looked forward to where Ray was standing, but he was already at their backs. Such bravery leads to certain death. As he said this, he struck the twins with a powerful blow. They fell unconscious. Only one girl was left standing. She did nothing in fear. Terror paralyzed her. At that moment, the spectators not watching the battle realized that he just had a crushing aura. He's too cruel. He's just a monster. Jay, watching this battle, speculated that if the guy falls into the top 5 strongest, then that top 5 must have more amazing strength. His friends were watching and he wanted to suggest something. Dan shut him up. Monk added that it's frustrating to be on the other side of all the action. Ray at this point was walking towards his latest victim. He didn't hesitate in his actions. The girl was trembling with fear. She was in no condition to grapple with him. This realization was reflected on her face. Ray looked as if he had lost his mind from the whole upcoming situation. Raising his hand, he concentrated a ball of ki energy. At this moment, another one of the people watching all this was the girl's father. He was asking the judges to stop the boy because he was going to destroy his daughter. Only the boy wasn't so cruel. He walked up to the girl and gently touched her forehead with 2 fingers, knocked the life out of her while apologizing. She didn't suffer any injuries for her. The fight ended quite easily. The girl stared in surprise as the guy walked away. The hitherto screaming men watched in shock at what had happened. People couldn't believe it was over. The fight was over. The judges immediately announced the results, and they named the top 5. It was Martha, Dua, Ray, Kyle, and Juan. Ray walked silently out of the arena with his friends looking on, uncomprehending. The referee called a short recess and there would be a third-year battle royal. The elders watching the battle were divided in opinion. Ray was considered talented, but if he gave in to anger, nothing could stop him. But only one of the elders added that he could save a lot of people. Winford added that many of the children had mana disease, and they wouldn't be able to use Qui energy for a while, and it was not a fact that he could recover in the future. Ray also continued to walk away, and he heard the echo of conversations in which the elder said that he didn't need to know about it. During a break in the training room, the guys were watching one of the sophomores practice. This sophomore was Gary, who was fighting a magic puppet. His punches were precise and powerful. He was no longer that weak freshman. One last punch, and the fight was won. The puppet's eyes lit up green and recognized that the 12th level had been passed. Wiping the sweat from his face, the boy looked at the puppet and he thought it still wasn't enough. He remembered the way Ray had fought against many enemies. Gary perceived himself as too weak compared to him. He remembered Kay's words that one of his students could become a knight of a rich family. Angrily clutching his sword with his hand, the boy recognized that this was too little and he needed more training. Intao, who was watching Gary, asked Harry, standing next to him, what he thought of the boy who was ranked first among the sophomores. Harry said that he definitely liked the second one better. He was probably referring to Ray. The girl added that this one was at least cute compared to the red-headed one, and his fighting style resembled Harry's. Without thinking, the boy went to Gary, who was standing there. He looked at him with surprise. The guy with a happy smile activated the 12th level of the puppet that Gary had passed before. The puppet rushed into battle without thinking. The guy only raised his sword in the air without taking a step back. A few blows and the puppet flew aside. It was a weak enemy for him. The puppet recognized that the 12th level had been passed. It was very battered. Watching this, Gary realized that the boy had copied his movements. Gary laughed and said it wasn't that hard to get into. A frowning Gary said that if the guy wanted to fight, he would have just said so. A watching Intao suggested with a smile that it seemed the fun was beginning. But at that moment, Scavia appeared in the crowd of gathered people. She was looking for her friend. As she approached him, she grabbed his arm and dragged him along. The competition would be held today and they should hurry to get good seats. After moving a decent distance away, the guy pulled his arm out and asked why Scavia had stopped him. The girl started yelling at her friend because he could be disqualified for getting into a fight at such an important tournament. The boy bowed his head and realized his mistake. He apologized to her because he hadn't even thought about it. Scavia added that she understood that he wanted to win, but he should stay calm. Gary thanked the girl for her worries. The referee announced that the afternoon fight was about to begin. Scavia asked where Ray was, but he disappeared. As soon as the fight was over, walking down the road to the arena where the tournaments are held, the guy and the girl heard a voice. They looked around the corner and saw Ray standing with Knight Winford. It made them wonder, what are they doing together? Ray, standing in front of Winford, said he didn't want to participate in the tournament anymore. Gary and Scavia were shocked. They couldn't believe their friend said that. It wasn't clear what had happened to him. Wilford looked at the guy standing in front of him and couldn't believe it. He asked again if he was serious about his intentions. The boy lowered his head and said he was. Other than that, he didn't add anything else. The knight asked him why he thought so. At that moment, Ray's mind was going through events where he lost control of himself. But to the knight, he said he couldn't answer his question. The man wanted to add something else to the guy, but at that moment, the judges announced the readiness to start the last battle. Coming closer to Ray, Winford put his hand on his shoulder and told him that he would be watching the tournament, and they would return to this topic later. Leaving, he added that Ray is an independent guy, and he will accept any choice he makes. He would respect whatever decision he made. To all this, the boy didn't answer anything. He turned and walked the other way. No jubilation after the victory, only the realization of his actions. Walking down the road, he didn't immediately notice his friends standing there. Scavia wanted to excuse herself. Gary added that they weren't going to eavesdrop. Stopping, he asked if they had heard everything. The girl started to say a little, but Gary admitted that they had heard everything. The girl was embarrassed to say that they had indeed heard the whole conversation. She didn't want to admit it. Turning away from his friends, Ray said they had nothing to worry about. They weren't discussing anything serious. The dragon was already walking away from his friends, but at that moment, he was stopped by Gary's shout that almost ordered him to freeze. He asked him sternly, did the promise made by the boy mean nothing to him? He shouted angrily, what about Amy? Would his sister's death be in vain? Scavia was shocked to hear this news. Lowering her head, she finally realized what was going on with Gary lately, why he was so moody. Without turning to look at her friends, Ray added that he was beginning to forget that she was human and his first friend. A fire burned in his eyes, and it wasn't that he didn't want to help Amy. It was just that he didn't even know what to say. At that moment, Scavia picked up that he was just confused, wasn't he? The boy froze in surprise. He turned to the girl and she said she understood that he was hurting right now. And deep down, he's angry at horrible people. With embarrassment, she added that he felt guilty for getting angry at his friends and innocent people. Ray listened in amazement at this. The girl also added that he wasn't guilty of anything. None of his friends had accused him of anything, even more so. After the battle was over, they discussed the battle and realized that their weaknesses were in Ray's face. They should continue their training. Kale said with a laugh that he would beat him next time, but Martha added that she'd bet 10 coins that he wouldn't succeed. Gary calmly added that he knew how much injustice he had suffered in the past. Putting a hand on his friend's shoulder, he added that he should have believed long ago that he would never be alone. Gary added with a slight smile that now they would always be his family. Ray asked him if he would let Gary be alone. Ray was touched by the words and added that no, he would not leave him alone. Meanwhile, the guys were talking. There was a fight going on in the arena. Shouts of encouragement came from different sides of the stadium. Martha, who saw the guys coming, asked why they were taking so long. It was almost over. But Dan said there's no better fight than one-on-one. He wanted to hurt Ray with it. He called him a sweetheart and looked at Gary and called him a leech. The friends were definitely angry at those statements. Scavia stepped closer to her friend and asked if there was anyone to pay attention to. Martha said the third years were very good and each in their own way. Harry's fighting attracted astonishing grace, and he was the only one in the arena who hadn't been hurt at all so far. Gio has incredible physical fitness, and QI is keeping up with her. Sisters Zedong and Liu Shui are excellent in their teamwork. They are pretty good on both offense and defense. Even the twins aren't as good. She wanted to add about one more girl, but looking around the arena with her eyes, she couldn't figure out where she had gone. Ray told her where she was. The last girl Martha wanted to add was Jasmine. She was also in the top 5. And now Harry had defeated the last enemy, and the judges could summarize the results of who were the top 5 winners among the third-year students. Gary was silent as he watched, but he finally realized that this was the final battle. Winford, standing on the platform in front of the students, announced that the judges had determined the 20 finalists. In the first round, the second-year students had surpassed all the expectations of the judges. Winford's eyes found Ray standing among the other students. The boy even lowered his head shamefully, recognizing the rightness of the man in front of him. The knight looked at the boy with a kind smile and continued to tell him that the judges had adopted new rules for the next competition. Winford asked, drawing people's attention to the screen. There it was written who was fighting who. This was the final list of competitors. The people looking at the screen were shocked. It wasn't fair because sophomores were put up against third graders. They had practiced a lot less. Gary looked at his opponent, which was Harry. He couldn't believe that fate was so favorable to him. With a smile, he remembered their last verbal altercation. This was exactly what he had wanted his opponent to be, after all. Scavia stood looking at the screen, surprised that she would be fighting Jay, who was recognized as the strongest in the academy. Jay was upset that he was unlucky and would not be able to fight Ray. Harry, standing next to him, said he'd like to fight him too. He added that there might be a chance to compete. After all, it doesn't have to be a round of the tournament to compete. Winford also announced that the finals will be held in one day. There will be no restrictions on weapons and equipment, therefore everyone should prepare in advance. Dan was skeptical. He thought that with their equipment, they were definitely at a disadvantage. Ray looked at his opponent who never showed up. The boy thought about how it would be easier for him if he didn't show up. The dragon turned to his friends and asked why they weren't coming back. It turned out they wanted to practice. The boy looked after his friend and realized that Gary couldn't afford to lose this fight. He also knew that Gary was very strong and he just hoped that Gary could beat him. So he thought as he walked to the dormitory. He also remembered that he had told Winford that he had changed his mind and decided to stay in the fight because a couple of people had talked to him. The boy also asked what else the knight wanted to talk to him about. He couldn't say much but said that there would be 10 finalists. Ray was surprised that there would be more finalists. He thought there should only be 5, as the elder had said. All the knight could tell the boy at this point, that it had something to do with the Pureblood Guild and would be announced after the tournament was over. Resting after the fight in his bed, the boy thought about the fact that suddenly the fight had caused so much trouble. What will the guild do next? As he stretched, he felt something behind his pillow. This surprised him. Ray decided to check it out. It turned out to be a sheet folded in half. Someone had left him a note. Looking at the message left for him, he was surprised. Maybe it was a trap. It said someone wanted to see him in the arena at 9 o'clock. Walking through the stands that evening, the boy thought about the fact that he had been asked not to go alone, but it was more comfortable for him to solve problems on his own. Stopping at the edge of the arena, he stood to look around. Whether it was a Pureblood Guild or a Dark Guild, he knew almost nothing about them. Activating his Dragon Eye skill, he looked around. He needed more information to find out anything about his father. The boy sat at the edge of the arena and thought about the fact that if this trap was a trap, it better not be boring. He didn't notice a large shadow growing behind him. It was Jay. He said it was a coincidence that he'd finally gotten a chance to talk to Ray alone. He grinned broadly and held his huge sword on his shoulder. He said that a lot of guys get in the way too often during the day. The dragon asked in surprise if Jay was a member of the Pureblood Guild, which surprised him greatly. Laughing, he pointed his sword in his direction and said that he had misunderstood. He just couldn't wait to fight Ray. Only Ray turned his back on him and said he wasn't in the mood. He thought it was a clue, but it turned out to be just some boring fight. Jay was surprised. He certainly didn't want to let the redhead go so easily, so he swung his sword and jumped to attack him. Ray took the sword on his gauntlets, and the impact sent circles of wind around them. Angry Ray held the sword in his hands and asked what was wrong with Jay. He'd already said he didn't want to fight. It was as if Jay hadn't heard the boy's answer, but he was laughing and delighted that he was right about the boy's strength. He raised his hands in the air with delight, saying that no one had ever taken a blow like that before. The guy swung his sword and said that if Ray wanted to end this soon, he had to show his real skills. Ray jumped off and landed sideways on the ground, breaking his arms, and realized that his opponent was as strong as a lost cow god. Ray assumed a fighting stance and recognized that if he didn't beat him properly, he wouldn't let him go. And if he didn't kick him, he would finally appreciate it. But then the unexpected intervened. Ray saw something behind Jay's back, and it made him tense up. Behind him was a man with blonde hair, his face hidden by a mask. Fury filled the dragon, flames burning around his body. He realized that this was the Pureblood Guild. He rushed to the attack and was blocked by Jay. Ray shouted at him to get out of the way as the man from the guild drew his weapon. The dragon swept Jay out of the way with a powerful blow. He didn't realize how it happened. He simply flew off. It was a powerful attack soaked with energy, but the enemy took the blow on his spear. Ray, not knowing the strength of his enemy, decided to jump back, but it was the right decision. The dragon realized that there was something wrong with his opponent's weapon. It was also special, like the right enemy's. At that moment, Jay, who had woken up from the collision, asked the man where he had come from. He pointed his finger at him and reprimanded him, saying that no one should interfere with another's battle. The man tisked and said that it was him who was interfering. The guy got angry and lunged at the man, saying that if he was asking for a fight, he would get one. But the blonde was definitely not going to fight two men at once. He waved his hand, calling for his partners. 5 men appeared around Ray at once. This battle was going to be unfair again. Jay was fighting a man. He'd said he had no desire to fight anyone else, but he was definitely enjoying it now. Ray put away his gloves and drew his sword. These guys were definitely worse than pesky flies. Holding the sword, the boy watched the crowd attacking him again, and he had a plan. The attackers didn't expect him to do anything, and the boy just disappeared at the slightest opportunity. His enemies began to look around. They didn't understand where he'd gone, but they knew he was a black belt knight, so they had to be careful. Suddenly, one of the enemies felt some fluctuation in the air, and there was someone behind his back. He barely had time to turn around before Ray appeared out of thin air and rushed at him, holding a sword in front of him. But as usual, the enemies worked to protect each other. Now another man stepped in front of Ray and took the blow. The man not only took the blow, but also knocked the sword out of Ray's hands. The unarmed guy was easier prey in their opinion, so they decided to attack and block him in a crowd. But they forgot that the guy also had gloves. The dragon activated them and blocked the blows, trying to get further away from the attacks. Ray realized that his enemies are pretty good and their weapons are not ordinary. He might have to fix his gloves again. The guy realized that he would have to activate the ice golem protection he got in the cave found in the forest, and not engage in close combat. Jay's battle with an unknown opponent was gaining momentum. He thought his opponent was as fast as a cockroach. Jay swung too far, opening his chest to his opponent. The man thrust the tip of his spear into the guy, but he didn't even make a sound. He surprised the attacker. Jay grabbed the point of his spear with his bare hand, which was soaked in chi energy. Holding the weapon, he asked if he thought he could hurt him in any way. The guy's whole body was burning with Qui energy. The guy's chi spread around him and the enemy decided to stay away. Jay didn't know how to control his Qui and it didn't matter to him. Blazing with energy, he raised his sword up and said that his Ki was several times stronger than normal Ki and poisonous to others. And with a wicked grin, he said that it wasn't poisonous to him. It feels like a good wine. The guy attacked the enemy with all his might, who also decided not to be shy in his strength using Ki energy. Many sparks flew towards the enemy from the colliding weapons. It was blocking his view. Jay grabbed his opponent's mask and used it to his advantage. He jerked his arm with all his might, sending the enemy flying. The mask that concealed his identity remained in his hands. His opponent flew aside and crashed into the wall, causing a huge explosion. Jay's strength is unbelievable. Ray fighting the attackers was surprised that an ordinary person could have such capabilities. Throwing off his mask and holding his sword on his shoulder, Jay recognized that his enemy had a decent weapon to withstand his blows, but his enemy was too weak for him. The attacker remained silent after the heavy blow. He lay in the shards of the wall. But gathering his strength, leaning on his spear, he got up. It was amazing. It was strange that the opponent could still stand. Another surprise was that behind the mask was his acquaintance. That didn't faze the guy either. The attacker turned out to be Kira. He was supposedly on a mission, and that's why he wasn't competing. Looking at his classmate, Jay admitted that he'd been doing a good job of hiding for the last couple years, since no one had found out about the guild he was in. This confession made him angry and he lunged at his enemy, shouting Jay Garley's name. They fought again with different energies. One was driven by anger, the other by the desire to fight. The dragon fighting the 5 rivals recognized that they were causing a lot of trouble and was lucky that Jay was there to distract their leader. One of the attackers took a big swing hoping to send the boys to the other side, but his partner standing behind him recognized that the red-haired man had disappeared again. While the opponent searched for the boy, he sat on the roof and watched them. To deal with so many people, he needed to regain his strength. Jay was once again throwing back the enemy and asked how long he was going to keep this up. Soon, the morning would come and the secret would be revealed to everyone. Suddenly, the guy picked up a bottle. He held it in his hands filled with determination to use the secret weapon. Jay, watching Kira's actions, was surprised. He didn't realize that he might have an ace up his sleeve for emergencies. The dragon sitting on the roof watching the battle couldn't realize that Kira had gotten one either. Enemies were opening up more and more from new sides. Opening the vial and looking at his enemies, Kira drank its contents. Ray, watching in panic, realized that the bottle contained Shadow Plague and that the boy had voluntarily poisoned himself with it. Jay looked at his classmate and couldn't understand what was wrong with him. His chi looked completely different. After drinking the Shadow Plague, Kira began to turn into something different. This transformation brought pain and he screamed loudly. In place of the human was now a shadow monster, and he was ready for a new round of battle. The guy, seeing that the monster was preparing to attack, shouted for Jay to leave. You can't get attacked by this thing. The speed of the attacker was very fast, and it was not certain that Jay, who was not used to such battles, would be able to dodge the attack. The weapon curved out of the attack's trajectory and wounded him in the chest. Kira's damage and speed was 10 times more powerful than it had been before. If Jay didn't dodge, he was going to be in trouble. The dragon realized that if they didn't do something now, they would be caught in the crossfire. The enemy had also spotted him. The enemy jumped up from the ground towards the boy, intending to send him to the other side. Angry at the interference from the 5 of them, Ray used his chi energy to counterstrike. He didn't have time for more fighting. His strike was so powerful that even the enemy's enchanted sword broke in half, causing the attacker to shout in surprise. And lastly, the dragon made a control shot at a passing enemy, solving the problem with at least one of the 5. Kira and Jay's shadow monster continued the battle. Kira decided to laugh at his opponent because now the blows weren't so strong for him. The boy was covered in wounds. He wasn't used to defending himself all the time. The monster added with a chuckle that even if Jay was still on his feet, he would be finished. The shadow monster said that even if Jay was still on his feet, he would be finished. With his spear in front of him, he charged at Jay, aiming to finish him off and then move on to his main objective. The boy clenched his teeth in pain and the realization that he seemed to have lost, and stood there, unable to move out of the path of the blow. His body was paralyzed. The monster was about to cheer, but a look of surprise appeared on his face. Once again, things were not going as he had hoped. His spear was stopped by Ray. The boy held the weapon by the sharper edge of his ice-covered glove. Kira turned to see what had happened to his companions and was shocked to see that they were all unconscious. He couldn't believe that one man could take out 5 elite warriors so quickly. The guy was not concerned with the throwing of the enemy. Continuing to hold his spear, he decided to use the skill he got from the ice golems. The monster noticed in amazement that his weapon in the hands of the red-haired man was beginning to be covered with ice. The monster was amazed to see that his weapon was beginning to ice up in the red-haired man's hands. Jay, who was behind Ray's back, admitted that he didn't expect the boy to save him. The dragon said he would fight on his own. Jay warned that Kira's weapon was made of crab demon armor and had a neurotoxin in it. And lastly, he added that it deflects all blows. The boy heeded the warning and prepared for the attack. After energizing his body with chi and using the ice gloves, he moved towards the enemy with great speed. Moving from side to side, the guy didn't let the monster focus on him. He was preparing to strike. He swung his arm in a swing, channeling the energy into his fist, thus strengthening the blow. But his opponent was not so simple. He turned towards the guy and said that he knew the guy would do that. The weapon bent in an unknown way in the hands of his enemy, and Ray barely had time to block the blow with his gloves. When he landed on the stairs of the stadium, he realized that this problematic weapon could change its shape. He bitterly realized that the breast armor and gloves would not be able to withstand another blow like that. The dragon was about to come up with a new plan, but Jay, who was behind him, called out to him. He easily threw his sword to Ray, realizing that he needed a weapon, saying that the boy could borrow his baby. The dragon grabbed the sword with one hand and everything seemed to be going well, until he realized one thing: the so-called baby was not for him. Ray managed to hold the sword above his head for a couple seconds and dropped it to the ground with a loud thud. He surprised even the monster with that. The guy said with surprise that the kid was unexpectedly heavy. Jay said he thought Ray could swing the weapon. The guy excitedly put energy into his hands and said he could, otherwise they'd both die here. The word monster was just waiting for this moment to attack. A huge and heavy sword collided with a thin spear. Kira, confident in his strength, said it was useless to resist. His spear was too thin for a heavy weapon. But Ray also had a backup plan. Since the spear was holding the sword, the guy decided to cover it with ice. A crust of ice began to form from the gloves on the sword. His solution was perfect so that the enemy could not anticipate his actions. The guy managed to freeze the spear to the sword. His next action was a sharp jerk. Due to the fact that the sword was heavy compared to the spear, he was able to break the shaft of the enemy's weapon. Ray looked like he wasn't quite sure if he could do it. The shocked monster was surrounded by a pile of splinters. He didn't expect his special spear to break so easily. The guy didn't think long about his next action and made a strong swing at his opponent. He put a huge force into the blow, then he was able to hit his enemy. The fight was over. Jay, who was watching, shouted in joy and cheered, saying that he had done well. Leaning on his sword, breathing heavily, he tried to rest. And in this blow, he put almost all his strength. As he approached his opponent, he wanted to take his mana, but he couldn't. Suddenly, a notification came out in front of him that he couldn't absorb mana due to the host's infection. It was because of the Shadow Plague. After Kira drank the contents of the bottle, his ki turned black and purple like those people from the Dark Guild. But the Pureblood Guild and the Dark Guild were two completely different organizations. Then how could they get their hands on such a dubious potion? The next thing was that he had discovered a new skill, and it was body modification. Every time he manages to emerge victorious from a situation where he is in mortal danger, he gains a new ability. Skills are good, but there was another problem. He needed to get rid of all the lifeless bodies in the stadium. As he held the bottle of potion in his hands, he realized that this was not a single potion, but a whole organized mass production. Holding the bottle in one hand and igniting his energy in the other, he decided that if Winford and Kay could be trusted, they couldn't be trusted around them. The place where the Shadow Plague originated was the academy, and the students don't even know about it. That means someone at the top is covering it up. Dragging the sword behind him, he wanted to return it to its owner. He thanked him for the sword and asked if he was all right, but Jay said he wasn't going to die that easily. Wounded and leaning on his sword, he asked Ray if he was really a mage. Jay was glad. He'd never seen mages fight like that. Ray decided to tell everything later, but now he asked Jay to keep it a secret. Jay agreed because the boy had saved his life. Putting his hand to his chest, Jay said that from now on his life belonged to Ray, and he would do whatever Ray asked him to do. Calling Noel, Ray said he shouldn't make such promises, and warned that the wolf would take him to the infirmary to get the guy patched up before the match. Jay, covered in sweat of fear, said he couldn't believe he wanted to take down a guy who could summon beasts. Sitting on the wolf, the guy asked if Ray was going to get treated too. Ray said he had a specific body and would be fine tomorrow. The dragon also added that Noel should take Jay to the infirmary on a side road so that no one would notice them. Once again, the boy was at the marketplace, dropping off his uniform to be repaired. He had been warned to come back for it in the evening. Ray was walking down the road and there were rumors all around him. They were discussing him and trying to keep their voices down so he wouldn't get in trouble. The boy was sad again. He realized that people never change and it had happened before. Going to the warehouse, he pulled the cover off the mirror that was there. A new experiment was coming up. Looking into the mirror, he decided to use a new ability he had gotten in the past battles. This ability of body modification. A bright light enveloped him, and in a couple of minutes he was looking at a completely different person. The freshman girls were walking and discussing the tournament that is held once they decided to look at the knights that the families will choose. Because depending on the preferences of the rich families, they would start to actively work on themselves in the same direction. But suddenly 2 of the 3 girls noticed that their friend had suddenly fallen behind. It turned out that all the girls who had seen the reincarnated Ray were swooning over him. They thought he was really handsome. He walked forward without noticing the silence behind him. Body modification consumes about 5 units of mana per hour. If he didn't fight, he could last for at least 8 hours. Thanks to the skill, he wouldn't be so restricted in his movements now. But there was another problem. As he walked through the crowded places, everyone was trying to offer him something of their own, or sell him something. Some thought he was visiting for the academy tournament, and offered to stay in the beautiful rooms. Girls wanted to offer to show him around the neighborhood. Not used to this, the guy was a bit disoriented. It wasn't as simple as he had assumed. He was saddened by the other trivial change in appearance and the striking change in the way people talked and behaved to him. It was so hypocritical. Suddenly in the crowd of people, he saw Skavia walking by. A plan matured in his mind. Raising his hand above the crowd around him, he shouted the girl's name, hoping she would turn around on him. She did, but didn't realize who it was. The girl asked if her name had just been called. Lost Ray was asking for help, for her to get him out of this situation. Then, out of the blue, he asked if they'd ever met before. And that's when he realized he'd forgotten all about the disguise. As he got closer to her, he started trying to get out of the situation. He said that he knew she was one of the contestants in the tournament, and he was looking forward to the match tomorrow. So, as he said, he knew she was a member of the Hard family. The girl asked him who he knew from the family and what his name was. He remembered back to when he was a red dragon, and also remembered that he was known as Sen back then. With a soft smile, he said his name was Ness. The girl smiled embarrassed and said it was a pleasure to meet him. Walking down the road with her, Ray asked where she was going. She was going to a gun shop to balance the weight of her one-handed weapon. He decided he would go with her so he wouldn't be so conspicuous, asking if she minded. He wanted to pick out a new breastplate. The girl looked at her sword and said with embarrassment that it was forged from tiger crystals with shark fins. Her family had sent it to her. The boy thought about how a child from an ordinary family would have a hard time earning such a sword. The girl spoke of her admiration for adventurers. Free adventurers. The boy remembered his father stricken by the plague. She would be disappointed because no one could be free in this country. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion in their path. What could have happened there? People run out of the square screaming about the explosion and that there was a lot of fire. But the boy and the girl were looking ahead. Since they were knights, they rushed to see if they could help. A man was standing in front of the building holding his head, wailing that his hotel was on fire. It was the owner. Skavia asked what was going on. It turned out there was a carriage outside the hotel, like a merchant bringing monster crystals, and there was an explosion. That's when Ray asked where the merchant was, but no one knew. They thought he might have been taken to the hospital. The girl noticed a woman crying. She said her children were in the building, but they wouldn't let her near the fire. Scavia was about to rush to the fire, but Ray grabbed her by the shoulder, telling her she couldn't go in there. She could get hurt, and there'd be more victims. She looked reproachfully at the guy holding her and said she couldn't let the children die. Then Ray went ahead and said that he would do it, and the girl didn't have to worry since he had some ice magic. Getting closer to the fire, he used the ice vine to push the flames further away and make way for himself. The dragon ran through the fire using ice magic. His mana was quickly running out. He had to hurry or he would be exposed. As he continued to move through the burning building, he activated his dragon eye. Looking around, he saw children sitting on the top floor. He had to hurry so the kids wouldn't get hurt. At the same time, something terrible was happening outside. There was another explosion and rocks flew from the building towards the people. One of the gawkers was hit by a huge boulder. The man had no time to dodge and covered his head with his hands. He screamed in anticipation of trouble. But another mage came to his aid. Using the spell of hordes of ice snakes, he threw the flying rocks away from the men. Scavia saw the man and was overjoyed. The rescuer turned out to be her older brother. Continuing to use magic, the man said hello to his sister. It had been a long time since they had seen each other. While the brother and sister were talking, Ray jumped out of the window on the second floor and hugged the children. He had accomplished the rescue mission. He landed on the ground and a happy mother rushed to her children. Scavia rushed over to him asking if he was okay. Ray, handing the children over, replied that he was just checking to see if anyone else was. Scavia's brother turned and told someone behind him if they would mind helping. Scavia was surprised that there was anyone else. It turned out that all of her brothers had arrived and they just hadn't caught up with their older brother. The trio of brothers used a variety of magic, but all of it was aimed at extinguishing the fire. People thanked the men. After all, thanks to them, the fire had been extinguished before help arrived and casualties were avoided. Winford stood nearby and he too thanked the magicians. But Scavia's brother said they were not the ones to thank, except the Ray he was looking for had already disappeared. The guy ran away from the people on the roof and tried to catch his breath. His mana was almost out and he was about to get caught. Looking at the clue, he finally realized he had figured out the skill. He had a new ability. These abilities were mana splitting and infinite void. The infinite void created a subspace where he could store all of his weapons when he turned into Nessa. As he changed into his gear, he thought about the second skill, mana splitting. He already knew about it. As a dragon, he had used this skill to save his kin, but back then he had an unlimited amount of mana. Now, when he drew his sword, he realized that this skill was of little use, but it would come in handy in the future. No matter where his prophecy will lead in the future, he must have an army to change the world, and this skill will help him. Walking through the square, Ray realized that to get skills, it is not necessary to defeat the strongest enemy of this world. Skills and rewards he gets for saving people's lives, like he did this time when he rescued children from a fire. Except that when he fought the Minotaur, there were also several people, but he only received one ability. What does the number have to do with it? As he entered the Academy Hall, he thought about it. Perhaps it has to do with saving those who are on the verge of death. He decided if he had the chance to check it out. There were a lot of people in the Academy Hall. It was unexpected. What had brought them all here? Ian recognized with a sad smile that the families of all the guys had come. Kale shoved him in the side and told him not to worry. The guys were his family too. Gary stood to the side hearing the guys talking. He felt sad. He was alone in the crowd of people too, after all. Scavia, surrounded by her brothers, lamented the fact that they hadn't told them how her younger brother Max had grown up. They hadn't seen each other in 2 years. The girl looked away and a blush of embarrassment covered her cheeks. The older brother asked what she saw, possibly her friend. Ray was walking towards them and raised his hand in a welcoming gesture. That's who she turned out to see. The older one realized that this guy got away in the first round. Max said that Scavia had been talking about him forever, and he wanted to meet the lucky guy. Suddenly, Max ran up to Ray and put his arm around his shoulder and thanked him for taking care of his sister and offered to do it together. Ray didn't understand anything about the situation, and Scavia said with embarrassment that they were her brothers and Max was a little spontaneous. Even though his older brother didn't like him much, he decided to be polite. Extending his hand, he said his name was Matthew and thanked him for his concern as well. Shaking the man's hand, Ray felt that he was incredibly strong and had mana in him like a bottomless pit. At the same time, he said that Scavia was a natural leader and that she was probably the one who took care of his brothers. Matthew was surprised. Scavia was burning with embarrassment. To change the subject, she introduced the second brother. His name is John and the third brother, Jackie. They both, like Matthew, were in the army. And to introduce Max, the girl said he was still at Roland Academy. The guy smiled and said he hoped Ray would win the tournament. Ray pointed his finger at him in shock and asked if he knew a girl named Amy. Max thought about it, trying to remember a student with that name. Roland Academy has just as many students as Orion Academy. The boy anxiously continued that her full name was Amy Brubard, and she died in an accident. Max sadly apologized to him. He didn't know much about the situation, but he said that when he returned with Scavia, he would pass on the news. The hope that had just begun faded. Joy was replaced by sadness on Ray's face. He was grateful for at least that kind of cooperation. Matthew turned to leave with a strange anger, saying that the chief had tasks to do and that Scavia needed to rest before the tournament. As he left the Academy Hall, the man turned once more to Ray, but he didn't say anything. He asked Max why he had decided not to say anything about that girl. The guy tensely replied that he had. He decided to keep the information since he wasn't sure of the reaction. The man agreed with this decision since he noticed that the guy was dangerous and strong and he wasn't the least bit afraid of them. Looking at Ray and Scavia leaving, he also added that he couldn't understand what he was thinking. Max suggested not to mess with him for the time being. Matthew supported that idea, suggesting that they watch from the sidelines to see what would happen next. On the final day of the tournament, Scavia stood next to Ray and told him how worried she was. She didn't believe she could stand up to Jay. Ray told her to fight like normal and not to take the results seriously, but she said she wanted to compete in the Tournament of Nations. She sadly admitted that she was born into a family of mages and all her brothers were mages. She was the only one without powers. Almost crying, the girl added that she couldn't bear her parents' disappointment in her. Ray looked at the girl with surprise and asked her again, does she really want to win this fight? Pressing her hand to her chest, the girl said that she wanted to show her family her worth and prove that she was as good as her brothers. Grabbing her hand, he led the shocked girl away. Dan didn't miss the opportunity to make jokes about the two of them leaving together. Ray told the girl that he could lend her his power. The girl was surprised to note that his hands were glowing. Clenching his hand into a fist, he added that in exchange he wanted Scavia to do the same when he needed her help. The girl, hovering in her pink dreams, pressed her hand to her chest and said that she was always ready to be his strength. Putting his hand on her shoulder, Ray used mana splitting. He knew about what she would say. Handing her his chai, the guy warned her that she could use it for no more than 10 minutes, or she would hurt her body. Embraced by the flames of Ray's energy, Scavia thought about how she had never seen such a skill before, to be able to exchange energy. With some sadness in her eyes, she realized that Ray had many more secrets. Finally, the first match was announced, with Scavia fighting against Jay. They were allowed to use any weapon they wanted. Each student was assigned a Night Master. He must watch the fight and prevent the opponent from delivering a fatal blow. There was a call for the combatants to take their positions in the arena. The friends were worried about the girl. Though they tried to assure themselves that she was strong, the sight of Jay made them panic. Ray, watching the preparations, knew that Jay had been badly injured last night, only now there wasn't a mark on him. He thought about the fact that even though he'd shared his strength with Scavia, he couldn't beat the guy himself. Jay felt eyes on him. He swung his sword with a shout of question. Would his boss Ray want Jay to give in to his opponent? Ray was annoyed at the display of this foolishness. Dan wasted no time in asking Ray if he was yelling at him. The people watching from the bleachers were shocked that a third-year student was calling a sophomore boss. Jay continued to yell, and an angry Ray angrily ordered him to stop yelling and show a good fight. Jay laughed and said that Ray would fight as hard as he could if he had to. Pointing his sword at Scavia, he warned her that he thought she was Ray's girlfriend and wanted to be gentle with her. Scavia immediately said they were just friends. There was a call to start a fight. The guy lunged at her, saying that he wouldn't give in to her. The girl barely had time to bounce back from a strong punch aimed at her. The force was such that it knocked rocks out of the arena. Landing in the distance, the girl recognized that even with a shield, she would not be able to withstand such a blow. A new attack and the girl jumps back again, noticing that the guy's defense has a lot of holes in it. Trap or not, she decided to take a chance. She landed behind the guy's back and took a moment to land a stabbing blow to his back. The girl recoiled in panic and noticed that the tigress shark fin of her sword did not leave a mark on Jay. The guy did not stay in debt and made the next blow, which the girl managed to take on her shield. She decided to use Ray's energy. The force of the blow to the shield shattered it into pieces. The girl had no more defenses. As she expected, the opponent was too strong. She activated the energy she had been given, reminding herself that she only had 10 minutes. Jay, watching his opponent's changes, stretched his lips in a wide smile. He liked what was happening and decided that it would only get more fun. Abruptly pulling the rest of her shield off her arm, Scavia intercepted it with her other hand. She could still use that shard. She launched the projectile that was the shield in front of her at Jay. But it wasn't a serious resistance for him. He just shattered the shield with his sword. At the same time, the girl took advantage of a clever distraction and came close to Jay. He continued to defend himself against the girl, thinking she was in front of him, and not noticing that the enemy had already moved behind him. He noticed out of the corner of his eye that someone was behind him. He couldn't even immediately believe that this could have happened. Scavia lunged from behind the guy's back and wounded him in the abdomen. Looking at his wound, he couldn't understand what had been happening lately. Every fight was a new discovery. He smiled broadly and admitted that such battles were a real pleasure to him. Intao, standing next to Harry, said in shock that she had no idea anyone could hurt Jay. Harry admitted that he was wrong about the sophomores. The brothers watching the battle supported the girl. They finally recognized that the knight's path was right for her, but the enemy had not yet shown its full strength. Dan and Kale, watching their friend, couldn't believe that Scavia's beautiful blow only scratched the guy's body. It was like he was made of steel. Scavia continued to fight, but realized that Jay's body was so strong that Ray's chi only allowed to wound him. If the guy transferred all the power to one point, the girl would have a chance to wound him. Here, Jay opened up again, and Scavia took advantage of that by inflicting another wound on his stomach. These wounds made him angry, and Jay tried to hit the girl with another strong blow, only she jumped away from danger again. As soon as the guy opened up, Scavia ran at him, aiming to wound her opponent again, picking up on the injuries already inflicted. But then she was shaken by the unexpected. Her strength left her body. She hadn't kept track of time. Ray, who had folded his arms across his chest and was silently watching the battle, recognized that 10 minutes were unfortunately up. The girl clung to her sword as a support, begging for a little extra time. The enemy was not about to give Scavia a break. With a swing of his sword, he knocked the weapon out of the surprised girl's hands. Blazing with anger for his injuries, Jay was going to bring the fight to its logical conclusion with a single blow. Martha, watching her friend, screamed in panic. The dragon looked like he wasn't worried about the girl. The sword of a surprised Jay easily stopped Winford as Kay pressed the girl against him. The knight recognized the fight as finished. Jay laughed embarrassedly and admitted that he had gotten carried away because he had not met a girl who could fight like that in a long time. As expected, Jay was named the winner of the battle. He stood in the arena enjoying the cheering of the people in the stands. Ray and Kira would compete in the next fight. Ray was called into the arena, and as he walked past his friends, he heard them wishing him luck. Jay, walking past his so-called boss, recognized that his girlfriend is strong. Ray said he thought so too. The guy stood in the arena silently listening to the name of his opponent. People even assumed he was scared of the sophomore. Intao, waiting anxiously for Kira to show up, said she hadn't seen him in a long time, and he had vanished before the tournament started. Harry agreed with that. Ray continued to stand in the arena and watch the two knights confer on what to do in such a situation. Suddenly, the audience recognized that Kira couldn't make it for personal reasons, and Ray was automatically declared the winner. The people decided it was a staging. The brothers who heard this verdict were upset as they wanted to watch his fight. Next, one of Juan's friends was called to fight. This upset duo since they were always together. Ray decided not to watch their fight, but to go see how Scavia was doing. Kale said he was jealous of such love. Gary sadly realized it was a top 10. Heading to the infirmary, the guy thought that the girl was definitely not injured and he just needed to get his strength back. As he approached the bed where the girl was lying, Ray was surprised to ask if she was all right. He certainly hadn't expected to see such a thing. The girl pulled the blankets over herself, crying and begging for his forgiveness. She felt that there was nothing she could do, even using his power. The girl crouched on the bed saying that she was useless. Only Ray sadly recognized that it wasn't true and that Jay was just a monster. She didn't look at the guy standing next to her and said that she understood that he was trying to calm her down, but that was no excuse. And the words she added at the end shocked him. She said that if they met a strong monster, she wouldn't be able to handle it. She wouldn't be able to protect people. Remembering his tragic past, he told the girl that she wouldn't be able to protect everyone forever. He was strong and it didn't help. With sadness in his eyes, he added that no matter how strong she was, or how strong she could become. With tears on her face, the girl looked very gentle. With that, she said that she wanted to at least protect the team and him. Sadly, the dragon admitted that her strength was half his, and yet she wanted to protect everyone. Sitting down on her bed, he informed her that he wanted to take her power. He kept his distance from everyone, hoping they wouldn't need his protection. Scavia closed her eyes, giving up the gift she had received for the time being. Ray thought about how he had failed once before and didn't want to fail again. As Ray left, he told her to rest and not to think about the fight. Martha and the guys are worried about her. Standing at the door, he turned to Scavia and said with a soft smile that she didn't have to protect anyone. And on his way out, waving his hand without turning to the girl, Ray added that it was his job. A blush of embarrassment covered the girl's face at the words, and she simply remained silent in response. Returning to the arena, Ray heard that there was a victory of a sophomore over a third grader. Who had won? Kale was holding Naya wrapped in a chain. He was the winner. With a wide smile, he reminded the girl that she had promised him a date. Gary and Harry were to face off in the next fight. Gary walked into the arena with a firm conviction that he must win. The outcome of this battle was unpredictable to people. Some didn't even know Gary was Delbert's son, and Gary was a dark horse. Martha saw Ray return and asked how Scavia was. The boy replied that she just needed to cry. Monk said the twins lost. Because they were separated, they couldn't even walk properly, and Kale told his opponent that if he wins, she'll go out with him. Monk added that it was about time Ray came back, because now it's Harry and Gary's battle and all the attention is focused on the two of them. He also asked Ray what he thought. If Gary can win, the guy didn't have an answer for that. He remembered that he had lost his fight to Gary in his first year and he hadn't had a chance to fight him again since then. As he prepared for the fight, Gary decided that he had to win for his sister's sake, for the truth.